So hi guys, there's a new chapter, and a new season of the beginning after the end. If you haven't watched the last episode of the previous season, make sure to check it out first so you can understand what happens next. At the beginning of the episode, we see Arthur Lei Win. He looks intense and serious, staring ahead while thinking about Sylvie, who has been possessed by a Agrona Vritra, the ruler of Alacria. On the other side, Sylvie stands with completely red eyes and a faint smirk, clearly under Agrona's control. Realizing the situation, Arthur quickly raises his hand, gathering air from outside before sealing the door with his magic. Despite his actions, he looks visibly tense as he asks, "What happened to Sylvie? Is she okay?" Agrona responds calmly, "Oh Sylvie, that's a nice name. Don't worry, I'm only using a harmless spell to communicate with you. Nothing will happen to her. She's just sleeping." Hearing this, Arthur uses his magic again to arrange chairs so they can sit and talk. Agrona notices this and says, "Well, it's nice to communicate with you, especially since you're not trying to kill me." Arthur replies coldly, "I'll kill you the moment you enter my bond. Have you gone mad?" Agrona answers, "By the way, I can't use mana arts inside this body." Then, with a more serious expression, he continues, "Let's talk about something more important." He waves his hand and adds, "I'm glad I came directly to you instead of one of your leaders. It would have been interesting to see their reaction if they knew Agrona had appeared in what they consider the safest place." Arthur narrows his eyes and asks, "What's the second reason?" Suddenly, Agrona steps closer and says, "If there's anyone on this continent I'm most interested in, it's you." Hearing this, Arthur grows even more serious, thinking to himself, "Why would the ruler of Alacria be interested in me? Whatever it is, it can't be good." Agrona smirks and says, "Look at your face. There's no need to worry. I'm not going to attack you." He lets out a small laugh. "This is just a test, and in this form, I can't really do anything anyway." Arthur responds cautiously, "You're a very strange person." Agrona laughs. "Strange? What were you expecting? A cave king trying to conquer the world?" Arthur replies, "Something like that." Agrona continues, "Well, you're not entirely wrong. But I still want to be seen well by my people. I've spent generations in Alacria, watching their morals change. Public executions used to be normal, but now people find them horrifying. It's fascinating how perspectives shift over time. That's why my people now treat the lessers like you." Hearing this, Arthur responds angrily, "So what do you consider right and wrong? You killed millions and destroyed countless lives. That doesn't sound very noble coming from you." Agrona chuckles. "And you say that while displaying my dear Jarrett's frozen body like a trophy? I don't think you're in a position to judge." Arthur pauses, briefly wondering if there's any truth in Agrona's words. Then he says, "Even so, Alacria isn't completely a wasteland. The lessers there are treated like slaves." Agrona replies, "Do you really think I don't care about the lessers?" Arthur responds, "According to the Azuras, you conduct cruel experiments on them. You breed with them and perform countless tests. That's why you were expelled." Agrona smiles slightly. "Do you know what the best kind of lie is? A half-truth." He glances to the side, as if noticing something, and continues, "Did they really never tell you why I was expelled?" Arthur asks, "Isn't it because you wanted to build an army capable of killing the other Azuras?" Agrona pulls out a horn from beneath his cloak and replies, "So that's all they told you?" He tosses it casually and adds, "Do you really think I just woke up one day and decided to slaughter my own kind?" Arthur answers firmly, "No matter what reason you give, it doesn't matter. What you're doing can never be justified." Agrona sighs, slightly disappointed. "I expected as much. Your mindset is just like his." He continues, "Let me give you a theory. Imagine you were born on this continent without magic. How different would your life be? The royal families you know wouldn't even look your way. Your peers from Xyrus? No, without magic, you would never have gone there." He pauses before continuing, "How would you feel? Basilisks are already looked down upon by other races. But imagine your own kind despising you for your lack of talent. Even Lord Indrath, who acknowledged you, wouldn't have spared me a glance." Arthur scoffs and replies, "And this hypothetical version of me is supposed to relate to you? That still doesn't justify playing with countless lives just to gain power." Agrona narrows his eyes and asks, "Do you cry for the ants you step on?" Arthur laughs slightly. "I was naive to think we could have a rational conversation." Agrona waves his hand dismissively and says, "Everything I achieved through those experiments has benefited the leaders of Alacria. They worship me, not out of fear, but out of reverence. To them, I am their savior. Arthur asks, did you erase their memories? The memories of you killing and torturing their ancestors? Or something like that? A grown-up Vritra turns to the side and replies calmly, I'm sure those test subjects were grateful that I made use of them. It is their heirs, their future generations, who will reap the rewards of their sacrifices. Hearing this, Arthur Lewin thinks to himself, this egotistical maniac. He truly believes what he's doing is right. Arthur then asks, what exactly have you accomplished that could possibly justify experimenting on the people of Alacria? Agrona, while casually touching a nearby piece of art, replies Arthur. In Dicathan, the ratio of mages to non-mages is 1 to 100. He then turns toward Arthur and continues, what do you suppose the ratio is in Alacria? He pauses before answering, it's 1 in 5. Hearing this, Arthur is stunned, his eyes widening in shock. 1 in 5. Agrona smirks and says, look at you, you're impressed. Arthur quickly regains his composure and asks, what's your goal in all of this? You sound insane. Agrona replies calmly, insanity is relative. Arthur, now more cautious, says, I assumed you wanted my help. Or that you were trying to get me on your side. Hearing this, Agrona laughs. My side? He sighs lightly and continues, you make a lot of assumptions, but you're still missing the answers. Then, with a faint smirk, he adds, I suppose I can provide some. The scene shifts to a forest. Soldiers are running quickly, holding their weapons, and forming shields behind them. A huge giant crashes through their defenses, breaking the shields and throwing soldiers aside as it runs away. Even so, the others keep trying to hold their ground, pointing their weapons at the giant beast. One of the leaders shouts angrily, oh great Vritra! Shields up! Keep the defense panels steady. Don't let any beast stray from the pack. The soldiers move forward, trying to control the beasts with their weapons and shields. Nearby, a soldier named Ashton sits on the ground, using his magic. The leader clenches his fists and grits his teeth, thinking angrily. It was such a pain bringing them here from the northern beast glades. I guess even Anads have their uses. Better one of them dies than a mage. He looks at Ashton and asks, can you scan inside the forest? Ashton replies nervously, no sir. My range can't reach that far. Maybe because of the fog. The leader turns and says, looks like you'll have to go in with us. Ashton is shocked. What? That's not what I... Before he can finish, the leader grabs his shoulder and shouts, you sentries think you're special because of your spying tricks? You'll be safe with me and the casters. Safer than if you keep talking. Ashton quickly nods. Yes, sir. The leader lets go and says, now form a mental link with me, and only me. You don't seem very good at multitasking. Ashton places 2 fingers on the leader's head and forms the link. Then he speaks through it, can you hear me? The leader responds, how is it you still stutter even in your own? Ashton interrupts, I can only send messages one way. I won't be able to hear you. The leader tosses him a small bag. I hear you. Get ready. This powder will stop the corrupted beast from attacking you for a short time. He then thinks to himself, all the beasts have entered El's higher forest. I can finally show off my newly unlocked crest. If this mission succeeds, I'll gain access to the obsidian vault and get an emblem, just like my father. Meanwhile, all the soldiers line up, waiting for orders. The leader smiles, raises his hand, and shouts, Anads, front line. Weapons ready. Strikers, behind them with shields. Casters, stay close. All the soldiers get into position, gripping their weapons tightly. The leader cracks his knuckles and gives the final command. In the El's higher forest, the elf soldiers stand guard, holding their weapons and watching the area carefully. Suddenly, loud noises echo through the forest. The soldiers turn in shock and see a large group of mutated monsters rushing toward them. The elves quickly raise their weapons to fight back, but the sudden attack throws them into panic. At the same time, on the other side, the Unad's leader smirks and gives the order charge. His soldiers rush forward with their weapons, clashing with the elf soldiers. Blades collide as both sides fight fiercely. While watching the battle, the Unad's leader thinks, these Dicathian mages have strange and flexible magic. Even the weaker ones can protect themselves with mana. But it doesn't matter. This mission is an easy way to earn honor and raise my status. He continues thinking proudly, leading these mutant beasts is exciting, much better than those boring secret missions. My presence alone gives these soldiers confidence. Most of them are older than me, Yet their runes are far weaker than mine. My father may not have gained a legendary regalia, but I will, once I enter the vault myself. On his back, a glowing mark shows his strong mana power. He smirks confidently and thinks, I alone will make House Vale rise above all of Eker, maybe even all of Alacria. Then he notices some of the mutant beasts being killed quickly. On the battlefield, the elf leader fights skillfully, cutting down the beasts one by one. She shouts, do not let a single beast pass. The Unad's leader grips his blade and smirks. She's my target. He gives quick orders. Saren, focus your shields on me. Stay back with Mari. Ashton, stay close to them and report my position if I'm in danger. He channels mana into his blade, making it glow, and rushes toward the elf leader with a confident smile. She notices him and blocks his attack, but the force pushes her back. He thinks she barely defended herself with mana. As he turns, several arrows fly toward him. These Decathian mages may be versatile, but they're as slow as I heard. A shield activates just in time and blocks the arrows. The young leader smirks. Primitive fools. Meanwhile, the mutant beasts continue attacking the elf soldiers, killing them one by one as the battle rages on. The young leader smirks again. He covers his body with fire mana and rushes toward the elf leader with his blade. Ashton, who is linked to his mind, speaks. The Decathian mage has different mana readings, but she's on the lower side of a mid-tier mage. Her caster is preparing a single target spell. At that moment, the elf leader casts a spell and fires an arrow at him. Duck, Ashton warns. The young leader quickly bends down and dodges the attack. He thinks, if that attack had hit me directly, even a shield wouldn't have saved me. He stands up again, holding his blade covered in fire mana. I need to end this quickly. I can't waste time on one enemy. Ashton continues guiding him. To your right. The young leader moves just in time and dodges another attack. He thinks, so this is what it's like to have a sentry helping. Even without strong attack or defense magic, they're still very useful. He raises his blade and swings it down at the elf leader, trying to crush her. But she dodges at the last moment. His blade slams into the ground, breaking it apart and sending dust into the air. The elf leader covers her eyes. Taking the chance, the young leader rushes forward. His fist, powered with fire mana, strikes her in the stomach. The impact sends her flying back into the trees. She falls to the ground, holding her stomach in pain. The young leader steps forward, holding his blade again. He stands in front of her, raises his sword, and smirks. This was an easy win, he thinks. Suddenly, Ashton's fearful voice echoed, freeze. Stefan, the young leader, felt a terrifying aura. His eyes widened in shock. Ashton, trembling with fear but still linked to him, said, Stefan, you need to get out of there. Now, Stefan's body began to shake. His knees felt weak as panic filled him. What is this? He thought. It feels like something is invading my soul. No. I am the son of Cardinal Vale, heir to the House of Vale. I will not be brought down. Then, just a few steps in front of him, someone appeared. It was Arthur Lewin, standing calmly with narrowed, serious eyes. Stefan stared at him in disbelief. This mage. He looks around my age. How is he this powerful? Arthur raised his hand, covering it with ice magic. Stefan tried to run, but Arthur instantly froze his movement. Stefan collapsed onto the ground. Shaking with fear, he spoke weakly, Ashton. Tell Saren to. Before he could finish, he saw his own subordinates running away, leaving him behind. Breathing heavily, he fell completely to the ground, all hope gone. He turned his head toward Arthur. It wasn't supposed to be like this. On the other side, many elf soldiers had already lost their lives. Others struggled to carry the wounded to safety. Arthur looked around and thought, too many elven soldiers have died trying to protect their home. The elf leader stepped forward and said, Thank you, General Arthur, for your help. My name is Lena Imris, head of the Southeastern Unit in Elenwar. Arthur lowered his head slightly and replied, I'm sorry. All of this could have been avoided if I had arrived before the beasts reached the forest. He then remembered his conversation with Agrona Vritra and thought, is this what he meant when he said the war is moving to the next stage? How will the council deal with this? Arthur then looked at Stefan, who lay unconscious on the ground. He raised his hand and called out, You there. An elf soldier stepped forward respectfully. Yes, General Arthur? Arthur said, take him to the camp and treat his wounds, so he doesn't bleed out. As the soldier lifted Stefan, Arthur added, oh, and make sure he doesn't kill himself. I need him alive.
The scene shifts to the campus. In one part of the campus, Stefan Bale is tied up with ropes. A magic spell has been cast around the area so no one can hear his voice. Soon, Arthur Lewin arrives. Inside, Stefan struggles and shouts angrily, my arm! Where is my arm? Someone answer me right now! Arthur enters and silently observes him for a moment. Stefan continues shouting, if you primitive beasts know what's good for you, you'll untie me. I am of the Vale bloodline, a distinguished family. Before he can finish, Arthur slaps him to shut him up. Stefan lets out a small laugh, shocked. You slapped me? What's your name? Before he can finish, Arthur grabs him by the neck and lifts him slightly. I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation you're in, Arthur says coldly. With his other hand, he creates a lightning spell. Stefan's voice trembles. Unhand me. What are you doing? As Arthur looks at him, he remembers a conversation with Agrona. I think it's hardly fair to act like your side is better than mine. Do you shed tears for the ants you step on? Unable to hold back, Arthur strikes Stefan's face with the lightning. Stefan screams in pain. Arthur strikes him again. Stefan's body trembles violently. It feels like I'm on fire. Arthur grabs his head and says calmly, your nerve endings are a little fried and confused right now. But that's just the beginning. He presses the lightning-covered hand against Stefan's head. Stefan's eyes widen in shock as he screams. But suddenly, Arthur stops. For a moment, he stares at him, almost unable to believe what he's doing. Stefan, still in pain, weakly begs, please. Why are you doing this? What do you want? I'll give you anything. Arthur replies coldly, your name. Why do you need to? Arthur forms lightning again. Terrified, Stefan quickly answers, Stefan Bale. Arthur nods slightly. Stefan, your family, your bloodline, is prominent. Am I correct? Yes. I won't kill you if you cooperate. Your condition depends on how honestly you answer my questions. Do you understand? Arthur releases a small burst of mana to intimidate him. I understand. Stefan says in fear. Arthur crosses his arms. Good. List all the members of the Vale house and your relationship to them. Stefan replies, Lucia Vale, my sister. Izora Vale, my mother. Colonel Vale, my father. Hearing the name Colonel Vale, Arthur recalls it from Yuto's memories. Arthur continues, what is the awakening process? It's a ceremony that unlocks a child's first mark, allowing them to become a mage. Arthur places his hand on his chin. What's the difference between a mark and a crest? Stefan hesitates, wondering how Arthur already knows this. A crest is stronger. It grants a deeper understanding of a specific type of magic. Arthur thinks carefully. Is a crest the highest level? No. After crests come emblems, and then regalias. Arthur's eyes grow colder. How strong are regalia users compared to retainers? I don't know. The strongest mage in my family is only an emblem holder. I swear on the name of Vritra. Arthur sighs. They treat the Vritra like gods. He asks again. Do you know how many emblem and regalia holders are currently in Daikathan? My commander is an emblem holder, but he answers to a regalia holder. I don't know the exact numbers. Arthur realizes Stefan is too low-ranking to be very useful. But Stefan quickly adds, I do know something else. This wasn't the only attack on the forest. Several other troops are heading north right now. Arthur turns and begins to walk away. Stefan pleads desperately, that's valuable information, right? Please let me go. You promised. I answered all your questions truthfully. Arthur walks outside, seeing wounded soldiers and dead bodies. Without looking back, he says coldly, I told you. I wouldn't kill you. Then, with a slight smirk, he adds, elven soldiers. Do whatever you want with him. The scene shifts to the forest. Arthur walks alone. He recalls Agrona saying, I advise you to make a choice soon. We are moving to the next stage of this war, and it won't benefit your side. The thought troubles Arthur. He sits down beside a tree. Should I have told the council about Agrona? He wonders. No one knows about this threat. Except me and Sylvie. He takes out a water bag from his storage and drinks. She only knows because it's getting harder to hide my thoughts from her, he thinks. I hope Sylvie is adjusting to her new body and abilities. He clenches his fist. I have better control over my dragon's will now that I've reached the white core stage. He places his hand on his head, worried. It's a good thing I left her at the castle. Again, Agrona's words echo in his mind. I'm sure those test subjects were grateful. Winsam, Alder, and the rest of the Azuras have abandoned you and Daikathan. Suddenly his memories shift. He sees his past life as Grey. Grey is tied tightly to a chair. A voice calls out, "Can you hear me?" Gray struggles to free himself, slowly opening his eyes. "Who are you?" A figure in the shadows spoke. "What is the last thing you remember?" Gray thought for a moment and replied, "I just won the tournament." The figure asked again, "What else?" Gray answered, "I accepted an offer to be mentored by a powerful person." The figure stepped forward, revealing a man with a mark on his face standing in front of Gray. Another man beside him asked, "What is the name of the woman? And what is the nature of your relationship?" Gray thought carefully. If they already know it was a woman, they're only looking for confirmation. He replied, "I know her as Lady Vera. I just met her." The man with the mark pointed at Gray and shouted, "Lies." The other man held him back and calmly asked, "What happened after you won the tournament, Gray?" Gray answered nervously, "I was heading back to my dorm room." Suddenly, the marked man grabbed Gray by the neck and shouted again, "Lies." He lifted Gray along with a chair and said coldly, "It would be wise to tell us which organization sent you to protect the legacy." Gray trembled, unable to scream. Tears filled his eyes as he thought, "What are they talking about? Organization? Legacy?" The man threw him down, and Gray cried out in pain. The other man turned to his partner and said, "Strip him. I'll get the white phosphorus." After removing Gray's clothes, the man held 2 small containers and said, "I believe you have information we need. Fortunately for you, we need you alive. For now." Gray thought weakly, "How long was I unconscious?" The man opened a bottle and said, "If you are who we think you are, you may have prepared for this. But if we are wrong, then this will be very uncomfortable." He dipped his gloved fingers into the substance and added, "This will hurt." Gray panicked. "What are you talking about?" The man pressed it onto Gray's chest. Gray's voice shook. "Wait. What are you doing? Please." Moments later, the man ignited it. Gray screamed in pain, his body shaking uncontrollably. Again, the man repeated it. "Don't do this," Gray begged. But the burning continued, and Gray screamed even louder. It became hard to track time, Gray thought. They would hurt me, then stop, giving me false hope, only to start again. Before they could continue, Gray cried out, "I'll tell you anything. Everything. Just stop." The man nodded. "That's better." He held the containers in his hands and said, "Now, I'll tell you a story. And you'll fill in the gaps if you want to avoid more pain." He continued, "Your name is Gray. Headmaster Olivia Wilbeck took care of you since infancy. The orphanage was your home. Correct?" Gray nodded weakly. The man leaned closer. "Which military institution trained you to become the legacy's protector?" Gray replied, "I've only completed my 2nd year at Cyrus Academy. I've had no prior training." The man clenched his teeth in anger. "So you're saying you defeated skilled fighters without training?" "I had help from my friends. But why would Wilbeck," the man interrupted angrily, "allow the legacy to walk around publicly with ordinary children?" Gray looked at him in confusion. "What is this legacy you keep talking about? I've never heard of it." The man's eyes widened. He stepped closer and said coldly, "There are only 2 things I want to know, Gray. Which organization sent you? And how much is the country of Trident involved in publicly announcing Lady Vera as your mentor?" He pressed the substance against Gray's cheek. Gray, terrified, whispered, "Please." The man lit a flame and brought it closer. "I don't know," Gray cried, sweat running down his face. Just as the flame was about to touch him, a sword suddenly appeared and struck the man holding the flame in the neck. Before anyone could react, another strike hit the marked man, sending him flying backward. A calm voice said, "You're safe now, kid." Gray's eyes filled with tears as he struggled to stay conscious. Standing before him was Vera, his mentor. She had come to save him. After taking a rest, Arthur took to the air using his magic. As he flew, he thought, the sensation of flying is exhilarating. He turned to look back at the forest and considered, Lena and her elven forces will be better off with General Aya, given her experience with the terrain. A small smile formed on his face as he surged forward at full speed. I should head back to the castle. But the transmission scrolls should provide enough information about the Alacrians for now. The view felt different flying without Sylvie. Memories of his past life surfaced, and he thought, she'll probably worry that I had another dream about my former life. I'll update her when I get back. Closing his eyes briefly, Arthur increased his speed. As he looked down, he thought, for now, I need to go where I'm needed the most. Suddenly, he stepped on the air to slow himself, raising a hand as he reduced his momentum. Looking down beyond the mountains, he spotted a massive wall. Fires burned fiercely, and the sounds of battle echoed across the land. An Alacrian rode a beast, charging forward, while 2 soldiers thrust their spears at it. Blood splattered as the beast let out a pained scream, its rider nearly falling off. Another Alacrian raised a shield spell, deflecting attacks and forcing the soldiers back. Observing the scene, Arthur thought, This is where I'm needed. The wall faces constant assaults as the Alacrians attempt to break through the defensive line. I've read many reports about these attacks, but this is the first time I'm witnessing it myself. At that moment, someone atop the massive wall aimed a fire spell at him. Arthur instantly noticed the attack, turned, and raised his hand, effortlessly blocking it before redirecting the flames downward. The soldier who had cast the spell stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend how Arthur had stopped it so easily. In the next instant, Arthur rushed toward them. Panic spread among the soldiers as he descended, landing firmly on the rooftop of the massive wall. The force of his arrival sent a powerful gust of wind swirling around them. "General!" someone shouted. The captain of the soldiers stepped forward, standing in front of Arthur Lewin, while the others saluted behind him. One soldier, trembling, stood beside the captain, the very one who had launched the fire spell. "My sincerest apologies for my subordinate's grave mistake," the captain said, bowing deeply. He forcefully pushed the soldier's head down as well. With anger in his voice, he added, "We had not received any notice that a lance would be visiting the wall. He mistook you for an enemy. I will reprimand this fool and see to his punishment immediately." Arthur Lewin smiled faintly, thinking, "It's been a while since I've been treated like this." Still smiling, he replied, "There's no need. I arrived unannounced from the Beast Glades, so the confusion is understandable." He then turned his gaze to the nervous soldier and said, "Good-eye, soldier. But next time you encounter an unidentified threat, report it to your superiors immediately. Understood?" The soldier straightened, still visibly nervous, and saluted. "Understood, General." Arthur Lewin stepped forward and asked the captain for his name and position. The captain walked alongside him and replied, "Captain Alban Kelris of the Bulwark Division." Arthur turned to him with a slight smile. "Well then, Captain Alban Kelris. Let's talk strategy." As they descended the stairs, Captain Kelris began to explain, "My division primarily consists of workers responsible for maintenance and construction of the wall. The constant stray attacks keep them busy. I submit daily reports on repairs, resources, and supplies." Arthur observed the soldiers as they worked tirelessly to reinforce and protect the wall. Nodding, he said, "Quite impressive. Calling this place the wall is quite misleading. When it's so much more," he thought. As they descended deeper along the wooden stairs, a loud noise echoed throughout the structure. "Please excuse the noise, General," Captain Alban Kelris said. "I've been told it can be quite overwhelming for those who aren't used to it." "Overwhelming indeed," Arthur Lewin replied. "But I regret taking so long to visit. The floors from here on are accessible to civilians as well," the captain explained. As they reached the next level, several soldiers noticed their captain. Two of them quickly stepped forward and saluted him. The captain immediately frowned and snapped, "Why are you saluting me in the presence of a lance?" The soldiers' eyes shifted toward Arthur, widening in surprise. Realizing their mistake, they quickly saluted again. "General!" Arthur let out a small laugh. "One salute is enough." "Yes, sir," the soldiers replied nervously. They continued walking, the heat increasing as sweat formed on Arthur's face. He wiped it away and asked, "Is there a fire nearby?" "We're passing through the main forge," Captain Kelris answered. "There's always a lot of heat and smoke here." The floor was filled with activity. Workers labored intensely, using magic to operate massive machines that released bursts of steam into the air. Arthur looked around in surprise, thinking, the mechanisms behind this wall are incredible. He paused in front of a huge piece of machinery, studying it closely. This looked similar to an old steam-driven hammer from Earth. But how? Then he noticed the use of gravity magic. One worker held a glowing piece of iron while another manipulated it with gravity, shaping it with precision. Nearby, two more workers used fire magic to heat and mold the metal. As they continued descending, Arthur kept glancing around, carefully observing every detail of the process. Eventually, they reached the civilian district. Captain Kelris turned to him and said, "The wall is quite a marvel, isn't it?" "It's amazing," Arthur replied, looking around. "The infrastructure and population have grown so much in just a few years. There's practically an entire economy here." "Exactly," the captain said as they walked on. "Since there's no law mandating service in the war, we offer rewards to adventurers who volunteer. They earn easy money, and we gain able-bodied mages and fighters. There is occasional tension between the soldiers and the adventurers." Arthur watched as children ran past, laughing and playing. A faint smile crossed his face. "But everyone here shares a common enemy beyond these walls," Captain Kelris finished. As they continued walking, Arthur Lewin's eyes drifted toward a group of adventurers. One of them, holding a sword, spoke to a nearby merchant. "Would this really stand a chance against a mutant?" the adventurer asked skeptically. The merchant let out a laugh. "Would any of us?" he replied before adding, "I'm just kidding, of course it can. I'll pass. But thanks, the adventurer said, shaking his head. On the other side, another merchant approached Arthur, offering him a pair of boots at a discounted price. Arthur simply waved his hand, indicating he didn't need them. He then glanced back at Captain Albert Kelris and asked, "Are the merchants here because of the adventurers?" "Yes, sir," the captain replied. "They're restricted from operating on the main supply route, so they set up shop here instead." As they moved down to a lower floor, Captain Kelris continued, "Even though the taxes here are quite high, they still come in droves. Without them, we'd have to worry about supplying food, clothing, weapons, and even entertainment for thousands of mercenaries." Arthur listened as they walked. "We pay the adventurers," the captain went on. "The adventurers spend their earnings with the merchants, and we collect taxes from the merchants to fund the adventurers. It keeps everything balanced." As they passed by food stalls, the smell caught Arthur's attention, and his stomach growled softly. He felt slightly embarrassed but kept walking. "Everyone earns a living," Captain Kelris continued, "and we all play a role in defending the wall." Arthur looked around with a faint smile. "It's brilliant," he thought. "A resourceful use of everything available." His gaze shifted to the captain. "The economy here says a lot about the senior captain managing this city-like fortress." Captain Kelris smiled slightly. "I'm sure flying down would have been much faster, but I hope this tour helped you become more familiar with the wall." "I appreciate it, Captain Albert," Arthur replied. The captain nodded. "This is where the captains and division heads hold their meetings." Arthur looked ahead, surprised. "That's a lot of guards," he thought. "You arrived at a good time," Captain Kelris added, slipping a hand into his pocket. "A meeting is about to begin. I was heading there when you showed up." He presented his identification to the guards, who quickly granted them entry. "The senior captain is inside," Kelris said as they walked in, along with the other captains and division heads. The senior captain, Arthur thought. Inside, a large table dominated the room, covered with a massive map. Several captains sat around it, holding documents as they discussed matters. Their attention shifted as Arthur entered. Captain Kelris saluted. The senior captain rose from his seat and spoke, General Arthur Lewin. It's an honor to have a lance present here." The others immediately began to stand out of respect, but Arthur raised his hand. "No need. Please stay seated." The senior captain nodded and continued, "Please have a seat and allow me to introduce myself. I am Trodia Flamesworth, the senior captain in charge of the wall." The scene shifts to the castle, where a voice echoes loudly, "Come on. You've got this." Inside, Sylvie, now in her human form, looks completely exhausted. She leans against the side table, her body trembling. Struggling to keep herself upright, she mutters, I can't." Her voice shakes as she repeats, "I can't do it." On the other side, Arthur Lewin's younger sister, Eleanor Lewin, raises both her hands, encouraging her. "You can do it," she says with determination. Eleanor is trying to teach Sylvie how to walk. Since Sylvie is in human form, she isn't used to standing or moving on her own feet yet. Sylvie looks at Eleanor and lifts her hands slightly, pleading, "You're too far this time. Come a few steps closer." But Eleanor shakes her head firmly. "No. You have to try walking further without any help." Taking a deep breath, Sylvie turns around and slowly attempts to stand properly. Her legs tremble as she carefully taps her foot forward, trying to move. As she manages to take a step, Eleanor beams with excitement. "That's it. You're doing really." Before she can finish, Sylvie loses her balance and begins to fall. Seeing this, Eleanor quickly jumps forward with her hands outstretched, trying to catch her. But instead, both of them tumble to the ground together. They stare at each other for a moment, panic in their eyes, before suddenly bursting into laughter. Still lying on the ground, they hold each other's hands, laughing freely at the moment. Back at the wall, a meeting was being held, and Arthur joined in. One of the captains, Captain Kruer, pointed at the map spread across the large table and said, "Based on their last transmission, there are currently 5 units in this region, and another 3 farther east." The senior captain in charge, Trodia Flamesworth, held a set of documents in his hand as he responded, "Captain Kruer, the log sheets for clearing the dungeons. How accurate is this timeline?" Captain Kruer replied, "Fairly accurate, taking everything into account." Before she could finish, Trodia placed the documents firmly on the table. "1 week is too long," he said coldly. "The number of corrupted beasts attacking the wall continues to grow. 4 days for each dungeon, that's all we can allow." Arthur watched him carefully. Throughout the entire meeting, he paid close attention to Trodia Flamesworth. He couldn't help but feel a negative bias toward him after hearing about the Flamesworth family's values from Jasmine and Hester. On the other side, Captain Kruer quickly placed several papers onto the table and protested, "But sir, rushing the expeditions to that degree will cause significantly more casualties." Arthur continued his thoughts as the discussion went on. After hearing everything in the meeting and seeing the man in person, all he felt was a wary sense of callousness. Some of these dungeons had never been cleared before. Without extreme caution, an entire unit could be wiped out. But in the end, he had come here as a lance, not as Jasmine's friend. Trodia Flamesworth waved his hand and replied firmly, "The wall is the last line of defense on the eastern border, and our numbers are already limited. If a soldier from your unit dies out in the Beast Glades, that soldier's family isn't in danger." Hearing this, Captain Kruer felt a wave of nervousness but remained silent. Arthur Lewin continued observing, his thoughts running quietly. Trodia Flamesworth may be a poor father with a cold personality. Trodia continued speaking, his tone unwavering. However, if the number of beasts from uncleared dungeons overwhelms the wall because your unit is too busy exercising extreme caution in one dungeon, many more lives will be lost here. And those monsters, and the Alacrians controlling them, will move on unimpeded to the nearby towns. Captain Kruer nodded, understanding the situation. Trodia looked at her coldly. 4 days. That is an order, Captain Kruer. Arthur glanced at him again, thinking, but his leadership is solid. Then Trodia turned to another officer. Captain Albert Kelris, what is the progress on the new routes for our Trailblazer division? Arthur's eyes shifted slightly. That's Tesh's division, he thought. Captain Albert Kelris raised his hand and replied, "We've just finished securing the 4th tunnel." He stood up and pointed at the map. "It's the longest one yet, and the entrance is hidden in a small crevice along a riverbank. A team of Earth mages is still reinforcing the tunnel, but it should be accessible to Captain Kruer's unit within the week." Trodia responded without hesitation, "Pull back a fourth of the workers and have them work at night instead. We were forced to flood another route just last week because its location had been compromised. Securing more underground routes is a priority." He then turned back to Captain Kruer. "Are there any updates on locating new teleportation gates?" Captain Kruer replied, "We've only allocated a single unit to scouting for gates. I'll need more time." Arthur spoke up, slightly puzzled. "Teleportation gates?" Trodia gestured lightly and explained, "Yes. The attacks on the wall are constant, and we send new troops every day. Right now, the best way for our soldiers to access the Beast Glades is through our underground channels. But those tunnels are often unstable, and traveling on foot is slow and dangerous." He continued, "However, with a train currently being built to connect the wall to Black End City, we will soon have easier access to the city's teleportation gate. If we are able to locate any gates hidden within the Beast Glades, we can connect them to the city gate. That way, we can move troops without hours of marching through unstable tunnels." Arthur asked, "How are you certain that there are any teleportation gates in the Beast Glades?" Trodia replied calmly, "We're not. Which is why we're only expending a limited amount of resources on the search." Arthur Lewin looked at the documents and thought, teleportation gates, along with the floating castle and Xyrus City, are relics left behind by the mages of old. These archaic stone arches are engraved with indecipherable runes. Yet entire cities have been built around them. Modern artificers have learned how to connect teleportation gates and change their destinations. But actually creating one remains a distant dream. After a moment, Arthur spoke. "What method is the unit using to track down the gates? I assume they're not just blindly wandering around." Trodia held the documents in his hand, resting his other hand against his chin as he considered the question. "I prefer not to waste even the smallest amount of resources," he said. He then placed the documents on the table and tapped them lightly. The gates constantly emit faint fluctuations of mana particles. Since these fluctuations occur across the entire spectrum of elements, the gates blend into the environment, making them difficult to detect. Arthur frowned slightly as he processed this. Then it would be similar to tracking mana fluctuations, like when I had to find Darv. Searching for deviations in ambient mana using Realm Heart was already difficult. But detecting fluctuations across all elements, while flying blindly over the entire Beast Glades. He took a deep breath. It would be a waste of time, especially since there might not even be any gates. "I understand," Arthur said calmly. Trodia nodded. "My apologies for having you sit through this meeting, Lance Arthur. We'll wrap it up shortly." Arthur shook his head slightly. "Actually, before you end the meeting, I would like to share what I've learned about the enemy forces." The scene shifts to the civilian area. People chatter among themselves, trying to appear cheerful, but beneath their smiles, they hide their fear. Arthur observes them quietly. According to the reports, many families reside within the wall's small makeshift city, mostly the families of soldiers, merchants, and others like them. Living here, right on the doorstep of battle, drives people to seek whatever comforts they can afford. Suddenly, the sound of an explosion echoes through the air. The wall is under attack again. Arthur's attention immediately snaps toward the sound. Around him, The civilians also look up, their expressions tense as the distant rumble reaches them. Nearby, a merchant waves his hand, trying to keep business going despite the situation. Your shoes look a bit thin for someone in these parts. Might I interest you in a pair of fine leather boots for your poor feet? Arthur glances around. If you look closely, you can see it, the subtle tension hidden beneath the surface. It's in the laborer's quick steps and downcast eyes. In the short, nervous exchanges between merchants and adventurers. Everyone is pretending not to be afraid. He picks up a pair of leather boots, still deep in thought. These people understand the threat of the Alacrians better than anyone. His mind drifts back to the earlier meeting. Trodia had smiled faintly and said, "Intriguing. General, you say that the Alacrian mages have a very limited and specialized form of magic manifestation. But what is stopping a striker from forming their mana into a protective shield?" Captain Kruer had added, as Senior Captain Flamesworth said, "I can't pass this information to my troops without certainty. They could be injured or killed if a striker suddenly launches a ranged spell or conjures a mana blade as a shield." Arthur had replied calmly, "You don't need complete certainty. Inform only the unit leaders and have them observe." Then, looking directly at Trodia, he had continued, "Our enemies use magic very differently from us. But different doesn't mean better. Study their abilities and exploit their flaws. The Council will be expecting reports based on observations of the enemy's limitations." Back in the present, Arthur sits while eating some barbecue, lost in thought. Even after learning about marks, crests, emblems, and regalias, I can tell they're still hesitant to believe the Alacrians are truly that different. Hopefully, this information will still give us an edge in the battles ahead. Suddenly, the sound of steady footsteps approaches. A troop of soldiers marches past, holding their spears as they head out. The merchant glances at them and says, "There goes the Southern Evening Patrol." An adventurer sitting nearby scoffs. "A waste of resources, if you asked me. They should send all the soldiers toward the glades." The merchant replies, "They probably want to ensure safety after what happened last week." The adventurer waves his hand dismissively. Losing a few supply carts won't matter if the Alacrians manage to break through the front lines. Arthur listens to their conversation, then looks ahead as he begins to walk forward. Focusing all your forces in one place is a sure way to lose a war. He exhales quietly. Well, time to get back to work. With renewed determination, Arthur steps forward. The scene shifts to the outside of the wall. From far away, the sound of movement echoes through the air as a winding road cuts across the mountains, leading toward the massive structure. Along that road, 4 carriages move steadily forward, carrying vital supplies. Everyone remains alert, focused on ensuring the cargo reaches its destination safely. One of the carriages is driven by Arthur Leywin's father, Reynolds Leywin. Narrowing his eyes at the distant structure, he says, "The wall is in sight." A cold wind sweeps across the path as the twin horns accompany them, guarding the supplies with vigilance. Inside another carriage, Arthur Leywin's mother, Alice Leywin, sits alongside Jasmine, one of the twin horns. Both remain tense but determined, committed to their duty of safely delivering the supplies to the wall. Suddenly, one of the creatures pulling a carriage lets out a loud, panic scream. Hearing it, Reynolds' gaze snaps toward the source. His expression shifts to shock as he quickly grabs the reins, trying to steady the frightened beast. "Stay alert! Something!" he shouts. But before he can finish, a burst of fire erupts behind them. Reynolds grits his teeth, his mind racing. Another ambush? One of the carriages is set ablaze, and the creatures pulling it shriek in agony, terrified by the flames. At the same time, Jasmine and the twin horns take their positions, raising their bows and preparing to counterattack. The fire spreads chaos among the convoy. The panicked creatures struggle wildly against their restraints. Despite Reynolds' efforts to calm them, they refuse to settle. With a violent jerk, one of the creatures breaks free and bolts down the road, dragging the carriage out of formation. Angela Rose dropped to one knee, quickly locating the source of the ambush. Raising his staff, he cast a spell and pointed ahead. "Over there!" A wave of magic shot forward, striking an Alacrian soldier, only for the enemy to raise a barrier and block the attack. At the same time, Alice Leywin and Jasmine leapt out of the carriage. Jasmine gripped her daggers and rushed forward without hesitation. Behind her, Helen Shard drew her bow and began firing arrows in rapid succession. One of the carriages lost its balance amid the chaos, tipping over as 2 men were thrown to the ground. Angela lifted his staff again, conjuring multiple spells into the air. "Give us cover!" he shouted. Nearby, Reynolds Leywin clenched his teeth, scanning the area. "Where are they hiding?" Durden Walker quickly reacted, casting a defensive spell that formed a barrier around the carriages and his teammates. Others scrambled to steady the remaining carriages while searching for the hidden attackers. Stepping into the center of the barrier, Reynolds raised his voice. "Get ready to fight. Don't let them damage the supplies." Helen glanced at Durden, noticing his panic. Durden, stay on defense. Give Angela and me a clear view. Nodding, Durden used his earth magic to raise two large stone platforms from the ground, lifting Angela and Helen upward. From their elevated positions, they gained a better view of the battlefield. Meanwhile, Jasmine charged toward an Alacrian hiding in the distance. The enemy hurled flames at her, but she reacted instantly, throwing both of her daggers. The blades cut through the fire and flew straight toward him. He quickly raised a barrier, deflecting the attack, but in that instant, an arrow pierced his neck. The Alacrian staggered in shock. It was Helen, who had taken the shot from above. Suddenly, another Alacrian appeared, riding a massive flying creature as he descended toward Helen, weapon raised to strike. Behind you! Angela shouted, immediately casting another spell. He hurled a large rock with his magic, striking the creature midair. It's coming down! He yelled. The beast let out a cry as blood splattered from the impact, losing control. Its rider jumped free to save himself. As he landed, he unleashed a barrage of small ice shards, but Helen's next arrow cut through the air and narrowly missed him. Reynolds, stop him! Helen shouted. The ice shards flew toward one of the Twin Horns members, but before they could hit, Reynolds leapt forward, summoning flames to intercept and shatter the attack. Without hesitation, he followed up with a powerful punch aimed at the Alacrian. But just before the blow could land, the enemy conjured another wave of ice, swinging it forward. The sharp shard slashed across Reynolds' arm. He gritted his teeth in pain as blood seeped from the wound. Move aside, the Alacrian sneered. Clutching his injured arm, Reynolds stood his ground, unwavering. Never. From above, Helen's shard fired a volley of arrows at the Alacrian. The enemy reacted quickly, raising a barrier that blocked every shot. At the same time, a wave of magic from Angela Rose surged toward him from another direction, but once again, the Alacrian reinforced his barrier and stopped the attack. Then, suddenly, his attention snapped elsewhere. Without warning, the barriers surrounding him shattered, leaving him confused and exposed. Still gripping his ice dagger, he turned toward the disturbance, only to realize too late what was happening. Seizing the opportunity, Reynolds Lewin charged forward, his fist engulfed in flames. In a single decisive strike, his blazing punch slammed into the Alacrian's chest, burning straight through it. The enemy collapsed to the ground, defeated. Reynolds and the members of the Twin Horns remained standing, breathing heavily from the battle. Moments later, a figure appeared in front of them. Reynolds immediately noticed and tensed, before recognizing him. It was Arthur Lewin. Arthur stood calmly, holding a captured Alacrian by the collar. I left this one alive for questioning, he said, tossing the prisoner down beside the supply beasts. We'll send soldiers to collect that creature as well for research. Everyone stared at him in surprise. Arthur looked around, slightly uneasy. What? Reynolds suddenly grabbed Arthur by the shoulder, laughing as he held on tightly. I don't think I'll ever forget that you're a lance now. The others joined in with laughter. Arthur scratched the back of his head, smiling awkwardly. Soon after, the convoy resumed its journey and finally arrived at the wall. The carriages passed through the gates, the supplies safely delivered as soldiers moved in to secure everything. Arthur stood to the side, watching as the supplies were handed over. That was my first time seeing the Twin Horns fight in years, he thought. They know exactly how to play to each other's strengths and cover each other's weaknesses. It's clear they've built that through years of experience and shared battles. His expression softened slightly. But how many more battles can they endure before the war takes its toll on them? A gentle hand tapped his shoulder, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see his mother, Alice Lewin, looking at him calmly. As they walked together toward the mess hall, Reynolds spoke up, glancing at Arthur with curiosity. I can't even sense your core anymore, Arthur. How strong have you gotten? Arthur smiled. I reached the white core not too long ago. Reynolds burst into laughter, clearly proud. Did you hear that? He said to the others. Alice gestured for the Twin Horns to sit with him, waving her hand warmly. Reynolds then leaned forward, pressing his forehead lightly against Arthur's, smiling. My boy. Arthur couldn't help but smile back, feeling a quiet sense of happiness. Watching them laugh together, Arthur felt a quiet warmth in his chest. Even though I knew my parents handled deliveries to and from the wall, I never expected to run into them here. It felt almost like luck, being able to share a meal with the Twin Horns again. As they ate, Reynolds looked at Arthur and said, We send your sister messages every time we return to Black End. Arthur paused mid-drink, surprised. Really? Ellie never told me about that. Reynolds chuckled. Your sister's going through a rebellious phase. Alice smiled softly and added, Most of the time, she just replies with I'm okay or I'm alive. Her expression turned slightly worried. Is she eating well? Making friends? Arthur set his cup down. If you're that concerned, why not visit the castle? I'm sure that's what Ellie really wants. Helen, overhearing them, spoke up while taking a sip of her drink. Security around the castle has tightened recently. Only high-ranking officials can use the teleportation gates, and even then, only for official business. Arthur turned to his parents with a small smile. I can take you myself. We can go to Black Bend together, and then head to the castle. Alice gently shook her head. We don't want to trouble you. Besides, a new underground transportation route is being built. She placed her hand over Arthur's. Once it's finished, we'll be able to visit you and Ellie much more often. Arthur quickly covered her hand with his own, his expression tightening with concern. But I've heard reports that the journey from Black Bend is becoming more dangerous. Just look at the battle you fought today. Reynolds frowned slightly. What about that battle? No one was seriously injured. Those Alacrians barely touched me. Arthur met his gaze, his voice firm. This time. But what about the next? Last time, Jasmine and Durden were unconscious. He pressed a hand against his chest. Ellie worries about you. I worry about you. Silence settled heavily over the table. The twin horns shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Angela suddenly stood up, forcing a nervous smile. Oh, right. We never took our belongings out of the carriage. Helen quickly caught on. Ah, you're right. We'd better grab them before anything gets stolen. They began to leave, gesturing for the others to follow. Durden and Jasmine stood as well, with Durden awkwardly adding, I wonder where our waiter went. Soon they were gone, leaving Arthur alone with his parents. Alice looked at him gently. Arthur, our responsibilities here may not be on the same scale as yours as a lance, but we're still doing our part in this war. We're fighting to end it. Just like you. Arthur shook his head. You're putting yourselves in danger. Everyone is in danger while Dicathan is at war, Alice replied calmly. Even you, Arthur. Yes, but I can handle it. Arthur snapped. Reynolds' expression hardened. Do you realize how hypocritical that sounds? He said sharply. So it's fine for you to risk your life, as long as Ellie, your mother, and I stay locked away somewhere safe? Abandoning our responsibility to our kingdom? Arthur's anger flared. I'm fighting this war to protect you. What if something happens to you or Mom while I'm away on a mission? His voice tightened. Even Ellie. The reason she's training so hard is because she wants to join you. What if she dies too, like Adam? That's enough. Reynolds snapped, clenching his teeth. He took a breath, his voice firm but heavy. Keeping my family safe is my priority. But I also want my family to live happily. That's why we're doing this. He looked directly at Arthur, his eyes filled with conviction. Dicathan may not be your only home. But it's ours. And if that means dying so Ellie can live in a better future, then so be it. Alice lowered her head quietly. Then, without another word, she stood and left with Reynolds. Arthur remained where he was, his hand trembling with anger. In a sudden burst of emotion, he slammed his fist into the table, cracking it. A moment later, he shot to his feet and launched himself into the air, flying off in the direction his parents had gone. The pressure from his sudden surge of power caused nearby objects to shatter as he sped forward. Arthur Lewin sat sadly on top of a mountain cliff, thinking about his recent conversation with his parents. The cliff was so high that even the massive wall in front of him looked small. A cool wind flowed around the area, adding to the quiet mood. As Arthur focused on his thoughts, a hand suddenly grabbed the edge of the cliff below him. Startled, he froze for a moment. Then the figure climbed up. It was Jasmine. You should have some respect for those who can't fly, she said, jumping up and sitting beside him. Looking at him, she added, so this is where you ran off to last night? We've been looking for you all day. When we returned to the inn, the owner was worried about the mess you left. Arthur rubbed his cheek nervously. Sorry about that. I'll send a gift to make up for it. But how did you find me? Jasmine breathed into her hands to warm them. Don't underestimate your mentor. Arthur smiled slightly. I never have. After a short pause, she asked, how long have you been at the wall? I just arrived yesterday, Arthur replied. He then lit a small flame in his hand using fire magic to warm her. Seeing this, Jasmine said softly, thank you. After a moment, she asked, did you get the chance to meet my father? Arthur added more fire to keep the air warm. I walked in during one of his meetings. Have you seen him? Jasmine shook her head. Not once, even after all my trips back and forth. She hesitated before continuing. I won't ask about what happened at the inn, but you should know that your parents really care about you and Ellie. Whenever your father meets someone new, he always talks about his son, the Lance, and how proud he is. Honestly, it's a bit annoying. Arthur chuckled lightly. I know they care. Jasmine looked up at the sky. Reynolds, Lewin, and Alice both feel a lot of guilt. No matter what we say, they blame themselves for not being there when Adam died. Arthur lowered his eyes, silently taking in her words. She continued, you know what happened to your mother before you were born. After what happened to Lensa, she was deeply traumatized. It took her a long time before she could use magic for anything more than minor injuries. Arthur flicked a small rock off the cliff. I know. That's why I thought they would stay at the castle until the war ended. But instead they threw themselves into the middle of it, traveling through dangerous lands, fighting off attacks. Before he could finish, Jasmine gently placed her hand over his and smiled. What they're doing now is for you and Ellie, but also for themselves, she said. They're trying to overcome their past mistakes and fears so they can become better parents. Arthur sighed softly. I know. I've been selfish too. I think all of us just need time to adjust. Jasmine looked at him with a hint of sadness. Just don't let your relationship with your parents turn out like mine with my family. There was a time when we could have fixed things, but I kept running away. And my father's pride kept him from reaching out. The wind continued to blow as the two sat quietly, lost in their thoughts. Arthur Lewin felt a sense of relief after hearing Jasmine's words. He looked at her and said, Thanks, Jasmine. Jasmine quickly replied, You better be thankful. My jaw is sore from all this talking. Despite her complaint, they continued talking, sharing stories. Some were light and funny, while others were heavy and serious. Arthur told her about his time with the Azuras, how he had defeated a Vritter retainer, and about Sylvie's human form. Hearing this, Jasmine was clearly surprised and shocked. In return, she shared stories about the adventures of the twin horns. They spent the entire night catching up. After a while, Jasmine stood up and stretched her arms. With a small smile, Arthur said, Thank you. For everything. Jasmine gently patted his head. Then, using her magic, she leapt off the cliff, leaving Arthur alone. Arthur looked up at the sky and let out a quiet sigh. After their conversation, he felt a little more at ease. The scene shifted to the castle, where many sounds echoed through the halls. Inside the kitchen, the elven chief was busy making a cake. As he carefully prepared one of the desserts, his eyes suddenly shifted. He had noticed something. It was Sylvie, peeking from the side, watching the cake with clear desire. After finally getting some food, Sylvie walked on her feet while eating. She thought to herself, how does Arthur do this all the time? It's so tiring to use mana just to walk. Behind her, a maid watched her curiously. As Sylvie stepped forward, she heard a voice coming from a nearby room. I think I'm ready. No, I am ready. Does that sound too desperate? Hearing this, Sylvie quietly snuck inside. It was Eleanor Lewin, talking to her beast. Sylvie asked politely, What are you doing? Startled, Eleanor quickly waved her hands. Nothing. Sylvie smiled and gently wiped her face with her hand. We should head down. Arthur Lewin will be arriving soon. A few minutes later, Arthur Lewin arrived at the castle. Heavy rain was falling outside, leaving him completely drenched as he stepped in. He paused at the entrance, trying to shake off the water. The servants bowed their heads, welcoming him back. Sylvie and Eleanor Lewin, along with her beast Boo, were also there to greet him. As Arthur moved forward to hug his sister, Ellie noticed how wet he was and quickly stepped back. Since you're completely soaked, can we skip a hug? She said. Meanwhile, Sylvie was busy eating her food. Arthur ignored Ellie's protest, laughed, and pulled her into a hug anyway. No way. I want the real thing. I just bathed. Ellie shouted, trying to push him away. Arthur continued hugging her, as she struggled. Then he looked at Sylvie and said with a smile, I see my fearsome dragon is growing into a healthy young girl. Sylvie paused and asked through their bond, Did something happen? Arthur replied, We'll talk about it later. He then released Ellie and raised his hand, using wind magic to drive both of them with a gentle gust. As they walked together, Ellie spoke excitedly, I broke into the light red stage while you were gone. I've been training with Boo every day. Even Commander Virion praised me. He said I'm way ahead of other conjurers my age. Sylvie rode on Boo, quietly listening to their conversation. Ellie continued, I might even be able to skip the mandatory soldier training. Arthur smiled, but his thoughts drifted. She's getting bolder about joining the army. What would our parents say? I didn't get to talk to them again before I left. Maybe if they were here, Ellie wouldn't be so eager to fight. Noticing Arthur seemed distracted, Ellie spoke again with a smile. You know, Princess Kathleen has been really helpful too. She's been sparring with me and helping me improve my mana control. Arthur quickly responded, You know, I can teach you magic when I'm free. I was a professor at Cyrus Academy, after all. Ellie rubbed her cheek awkwardly. 4. Like a semester. Then she folded her arms and said calmly, Thanks for the offer, but I think learning from you would just discourage me. Arthur frowned slightly. What do you mean? Ellie looked up at him. I know we're only 4 years apart, but we still share the same blood. You're already a white core mage and a quadra elemental. If you tried to teach me, I'd just end up comparing myself to you. Arthur looked at her quietly, a bit saddened. Suddenly, Sylvie turned while riding Boo, laughed, and waved her hand. It's okay. Your brother's talent is considered an anomaly even among Azuras. Don't compare yourself to a freak like him. Arthur scratched his head awkwardly. Freak is a bit harsh, isn't it? Ellie laughed. No, I think freak describes you perfectly in this case. They all laughed together. After a while, Ellie and Boo said their goodbyes. Arthur and Sylvie waved back as they left. Nearby, a servant respectfully stepped forward and opened a door, guiding Arthur inside. As Arthur entered the room, his eyes widened in surprise for a moment. The old man sitting in the chair waved his hand and said, "Ho, if it isn't the young Lance." Arthur Lewin looked at him and smiled nervously. "I see the meetings have taken a toll on you." The old man yawned and stretched his arms. "I didn't even want to join this little club in the first place, but it couldn't be helped. My back hasn't been this sore since the days my mother used to whip me as a child." Arthur stepped forward with Sylvie. "Councilman. Councilwoman." Virion Aerolith looked at him. "You've finally arrived." The Elven Queen and Princess welcomed Arthur back, while Queen Priscilla Glader said calmly, "You've come at a good time, General Arthur." Prince Curtis Glader, holding a stack of documents, added, "Yes, we were waiting for your return to continue discussing your report." Arthur glanced at Virion, confused. "Continue?" Virion smirked and tapped his finger, as if to say, "Did you really think you could avoid this meeting?" Arthur sighed inwardly. "That's why I sent a transmission scroll with all the necessary information." As Arthur and Sylvie took their seats, Virion spoke, "General Arthur, your report mentioned 2 separate but coordinated attacks near Elenwar. Is that correct?" Arthur nodded. "Yes, that is correct. I have nothing new to add." Prince Curtis spoke up, "Then let's get straight to the point. I believe we should keep our forces as they are and send reinforcements to the Elshire Forest only when necessary." The Elven Queen looked at him seriously. "Councilman Blaine, your suggestion implies that you do not consider Elven territory worth defending." Curtis frowned. "Don't twist my words, Councilwoman Muriel. This has been the enemy's only attempt to enter Elven territory. Compare that to the near-daily attacks on the wall. It should be obvious that protecting Satan's borders takes priority." The Elven Prince responded firmly, "No one is saying that defending the Elshire Forest should take priority over Sapin. However, just as Elven soldiers are stationed at the wall to help protect Sapin, there should be a consistent defense along the forest borders as well." Queen Priscilla waved her hand dismissively. The Elshire Forest itself is a natural defense. Its mana-laden fog has deterred outsiders for generations. The attacks from yesterday would have failed eventually, even if those units had been left alone. The Elven Queen clenched her fists in anger. Across the table, the old Earth Mage tapped his fingers silently. Priscilla continued, "The Alacrians and beasts would have gotten lost and starved long before reaching any of Elenwar's cities, even those near the borders." Suddenly, the Elven Prince shouted, "The forest is still part of the kingdom of Elenwar. There are tribes living outside the main cities. By your logic, we might as well abandon the wall in Sapin and sacrifice the border cities to reduce the land we need to protect." Prince Curtis snapped back, "That is not a fair comparison. If Sapin were to fall, even its outermost cities, the Alacrians could march straight into the heart of your lands as well." The Elven Queen narrowed her eyes. "Watch your tone, Councilman. You speak as if the elves owe you something, yet we have sent many mages to help defend against the Alacrians. If even a fraction of those forces were assigned to guard our forests, this meeting would not be necessary." Queen Priscilla replied calmly, "The truth remains, Muriel. While the Elshire Forest is part of your kingdom, no elven city or town has faced direct battle." The Elven Prince sighed, placing a hand on his forehead. "All we are asking is to recall some of our soldiers to Elenwar so they can defend their homeland." Curtis responded sharply, "Those soldiers are no longer yours alone. Have you forgotten? The Council was formed to unite the 3 races against an outside threat. Our duty is to remain impartial and lead the entire continent to victory over the Alacrians." The Elven Prince fired back, "You speak of impartiality, yet you focus only on what benefits your own kingdom." Suddenly, Virion slammed his hand down, releasing a burst of mana that shook the room. "Enough. I've heard both sides. Before you reduce yourselves further by arguing like spoiled children, I will speak." The room fell silent. "Based on the pattern of attacks, Sapin remains the primary target for the Alacrians," Virion continued. "The easiest path to the major cities of both Sapin and Elenwar is through the northern range of the Grand Mountains, and through the wall. We must assume the enemy knows this and will continue focusing their efforts there." He paused before adding, "As for Elenwar's defense, we will relocate several Trailblazer units to the dungeons near the southern border. If another incursion occurs, they can emerge and provide immediate support." Prince Curtis nodded. Don't worry, Alduin. The Elves' higher forest is vast, and its fog is a powerful deterrent. As things stand, Elenwar will remain safe. Alduin lowered his head, still looking troubled, but said nothing. The scene shifted to the Elenwar forest. Deep within the dark woods, the Alacrians were using their magic all around. Their spells spread across the trees as they worked. One of the Alacrians, holding mana in his hand, spoke to another. How much longer do you need, Circe? My veiling barrier won't last much longer, especially while covering such a wide area. Circe looked up, her magic already flowing into a massive tree. Done, she replied calmly. After clearing one of the 3 points of the array, Circe lowered her hand and said, It's done. One of the Alacrians turned with relief. Finally. As he stepped forward, Circe's eyes shifted toward him, her expression firm. Don't celebrate just yet. There's still 1 point left. Raising her hand again, she began casting the spell. The 3-point array slowly started to connect. Behind her, another Alacrian stepped forward and created a protective barrier with his magic, shielding them as the 3rd point formed. As the final connection was completed, a faint glow pulsed between all 3 points. Circe exhaled softly. The 3-point array is stabilized. A female Alacrian smiled slightly. Good job, Circe. Now let's move before any elves find us. Circe lifted her hand again, using her magic to scout the surrounding area. Her vision extended far beyond the forest, searching for any signs of enemies. After confirming the area was clear, she waved her hand. This way, she ordered. The group followed her deeper into the forest. I don't even know how long it's been since we started this mission, Circe thought as they moved forward. We've been on edge for too long. They continued setting up more 3-point arrays in different locations. Some Alacrians stayed behind to guard each completed point, while Circe worked on forming the next array. As they advanced further into the forest, Circe's thoughts grew heavier. We're coming across more and more fallen allies. Ahead of them, several bodies of their subordinates lay scattered on the ground. The sight made the group fall silent. The deeper they went, the thicker the fog became, covering the forest in a dense veil. Visibility dropped, and the silence grew suffocating. Only the sound of their footsteps echoed faintly. Suddenly, one of the Alacrian girls raised her hand, stopping Circe in her tracks. The entire group froze. Their eyes widened at what lay ahead. One of the Alacrians stepped closer, examining the scene. These spikes. They're not sharpened. They've been twisted into this shape. Plant magic, another muttered. A different Alacrian turned angrily toward Circe. I thought you said this path was safe. Circe wiped the sweat from her face, keeping her voice steady. We'll have to stop here so I can scout another route. It's hard enough navigating this forest without their constant complaints, she thought, frustration flickering in her mind. They soon found a place to rest, climbing up into the massive branches of towering trees. Sitting atop one of the thick branches, they took out their food. Circe sat calmly, gazing into the distance. Merciful Vritra. Nearby, one Alacrian tossed a piece of food toward a girl, who caught it effortlessly. Sitting beside her, another spoke with a sigh. We didn't set as many arrays as we planned today. The girl nodded slightly. But we still managed to push further into the forest. Circe thought, it's not easy keeping these arrays undetectable. If there's even the slightest mana leakage, the elves will sense it. One of the Alacrians, eating casually, muttered, we could have gone even further if Circe wasn't so slow. Circe heard him but remained quiet. Fane's hostility is only slightly more annoying than Maeve treating me like a child, she thought. Beside her, Cole smiled warmly and held out a piece of food. Hey, Circe. I saved the biggest piece for you. Circe hesitated, taking it nervously. Which is still far less annoying than Cole's interest in me, she added in her thoughts. As they ate, Cole glanced at Fane. Don't act like you didn't need a break, Fane. Fane leaned back against the tree. I'd rather get this mission over with. Their quiet conversation faded, and Circe's thoughts turned heavy again. They've trained together for years for this mission. But I've only known them for a few weeks. If their sentry hadn't died the same time I received my emblem, I wouldn't even be here. One of the Alacrian girls spoke up, her tone practical. You know we can't go any deeper into the forest safely. Not until Circe's emblem recovers. Circe lowered her gaze. But that doesn't change the fact that this mission's success depends on me. Fane rested his head back against the tree and said calmly, it's not like we're the only team out here. Cole nodded. Yeah. Maybe one of the others has already secured a route. Silence settled over the group. Out of all the teams, we're the most likely to succeed, Circe thought. Even with my lack of experience, my emblem gives us a clear advantage. Suddenly, she stood up. I won't be able to use my emblem again for another day after this, she said. A faint mark on her back began to glow as she activated her power. Mystery of true sense. It allows me to see all 4 elemental mana particles, she thought. But for now, wind attribute mana is enough. She focused, scanning the surrounding area. Mana particles gathered toward her, flowing back into her body. Her breathing grew heavy as the strain took its toll. Thane looked at her. Well? Were you successful, Circe? Cole quickly stood, concern flashing across his face as he saw her condition. Circe steadied herself, then looked at Thane and gave a faint smile. The kingdom itself is still too far. But I found a large area with strong mana fluctuations. It's about a day's travel from here. One of the Alacrian girls leaned forward. A settlement? A town? Cole's face lit up. So we're heading the right way. Good. That means all of this hasn't been for nothing. He smiled proudly. Great job, Circe. Really, great work. Even Thane allowed a small smile. As expected from a member of the Millview blood. I was starting to wonder if he truly belonged to that lineage. One of the girls narrowed her eyes. Thane, don't. Before she could finish, all of them suddenly froze. They felt it, a presence. Circe turned sharply, stepping forward. Her expression hardened as she raised a hand to shield her eyes, focusing into the distance. Elves, she said quietly. Her voice grew tense. 3 of them. The scene shifted to the castle, where the council was gathered for a meeting. Arthur Lewin stood before them and spoke calmly. Since the matter of Elenwar has been decided, I would like to update the council on what I've learned from the latest interrogation. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Arthur continued recounting everything he had discovered, both from his recent battle and from the Alacrian he had interrogated. He spoke in detail about their runes, their unique combat styles, and the abilities they possessed. Each word carried weight, painting a clearer picture of the enemy they were facing. After hearing Arthur Lewin, Virion Erelus stroked his beard thoughtfully. It seems we've been underestimating the abilities of Alacrian mages, he said. Underestimating? Blaine Glader replied with a frown. If anything, learning how limited their magic is makes me think we've been overestimating those Alacrian bastards. Alduin Erelith, the Elven King, nodded in agreement. I have to agree with Councilman Blaine. This seems like a clear weakness in their fighting tactics. An elderly council member spoke up, his tone calm but firm. I don't think it's that simple. The room quieted as he continued. On the surface, their specialization may appear to be a weakness. However, from what General Arthur Lewin has discovered, their method of awakening and training in magic is far more advanced than ours. The Muriel Erelith, Queen of the Elves, leaned forward slightly. How so? This is only speculation, the old man replied, but based on their system of marks and crests, Alacrian mages seem to focus intensely on a single spell, refining it, evolving it, and mastering every possible variation. He paused before continuing. While mages of Dicathan train in a wide range of spells within their elemental attributes, these Alacrian mages devote their entire lives to perfecting just one. His voice grew heavier. On the battlefield, versatile mages are not always as effective as specialized soldiers who excel at one thing. The scene shifted to the forest. 3 elves stood facing the Alacrians, their bows drawn, arrows glowing with magic as they aimed at their enemies. A magical arrow shot forward, cutting through the air towards Circe. Circe reacted instantly, rushing forward. Behind her, Cole cast a protective barrier just in time. The arrow struck the barrier and shattered, falling harmlessly to the ground. Without slowing down, Circe charged ahead. One of the elves focused on her, leaping forward with a spear aimed to strike. But in a swift motion, Circe closed the distance, driving her weapon into the elf's back. The elf screamed as the blade pierced through, blood spilling as he collapsed. The scene shifted back to the castle's council chamber. The old man continued, We must send this information to our captains, as well as to the guilds and military academies. They need to develop strategies to counter these specialized mages. Arthur spoke calmly. I've already stopped by the wall and informed the captains there. Virion nodded approvingly. Good. Then let us proceed to discuss how best to deploy our forces. As the council continued their discussions, Arthur Lewin took a slow, heavy breath. Just as I expected. The meeting has turned into a full-blown debate. Around him, the council members argued once again about where their resources were most needed. Bund had made it clear that he and his loyalists would take charge of eradicating the Alacrian supporters in Darv. However, the Alacrians had already used underground tunnels to move their forces toward the Darv-Sapian border. Worse still, Alacrian ships had been sighted along the western shores of Sapin. As a result, Telmor, Itistan, and Maber were forced to strengthen defenses not only along the eastern front, in case the wall failed, but also along their western borders. Alduin Erelith made another appeal regarding Elenwar. With recent disturbances coming from the Beast Glades, it was possible that the Alacrian forces in the north were actually heading east toward Elven territory. In the end, it was decided to send Aya and Elder Camus to survey the southern border before deploying any full units. Virion Erlith nodded. This will serve as a temporary solution. At least until Lord Alder and the Azuras contact us again. Arthur's expression darkened. He remembered a past encounter, when the leader of Alakria had taken control of Sylvie. The Azuras will no longer aid you in this war. Winsome, Alder. All of them have abandoned you in Dicathan. The memory lingered. Arthur lowered his hand slightly, his voice turning somber. Actually, I have news regarding that as well. After explaining what he had learned, the room fell into tense silence. Virion suddenly slammed his hand onto the table and stood up. Those conceited sons of. As if it wasn't enough that they used us and this war for their own purposes. They broke their own treaty to attack the Vritra. And they still failed. He turned away in frustration. Experiments. 1 in 5 mages. His voice hardened. What else did Agrona say in that message? Muriel Erlis spoke up, her tone uneasy. And how exactly did you receive this message from Agrona? Arthur paused for a moment. Sylvie still doesn't know that Agrona took control of her body. It's better if they believe it came from another Alacrian. He answered calmly. Agrona temporarily possessed one of the captured soldiers to deliver the message. Possessed? The Queen repeated, clearly shaken. Arthur continued. He used the failed assault as leverage, forcing the Azuras and Ephiotis to cut off all communication with us. The old councilman nodded slowly. That explains why we haven't seen more sides or retainers. He likely kept his strongest forces in Alakria in case something like this happened. Muriel's expression tightened. But that raises another concern. Will they come to Dicathan now? The gates they hid in the Beast Glades. What if the retainers and sides are already here? The Queen of Sapin responded, there haven't been any teleportation gate sightings for months, not since the last one was destroyed. One soldier reported seeing an Alacrian mage halfway through a portal before it collapsed. The mage died within seconds. She continued, for now, the Trailblazer Division is focused on eliminating corrupted beasts and their controllers. The Prince of Sapin added then. Should we expect them to arrive by ship from the western coast? If that's the case, no amount of wall building will make a difference. Arthur listened quietly. Even Blaine is beginning to doubt the wall. His thoughts drifted. In my past life, wars between nations were rare. Kings settled conflicts through paragon duels. Despite all the lessons Lady Vera drilled into me about warfare, suddenly, Virion clapped his hands, cutting through the tension. We have much to consider, he said firmly. But for now, I suggest we rest. A clear mind makes better decisions than an exhausted one. We'll reconvene at sunrise. Arthur remained silent. Even with all the strategic aims she made me practice. Nothing truly prepares you for this. The council members began to leave the room. The old man stretched and yawned. Honestly, I'd rather throw myself onto the battlefield and fight face to face than sit through another meeting like this. Arthur let out a quiet laugh at that. One by one, the others exited, and the chamber doors slowly closed. Left alone, Arthur stood still, his expression heavy. Nothing really prepares you for the weight of these conversations. Lost in thought, he didn't notice the soft presence behind him, until Sylvie gently placed a hand on his shoulder. After the meeting, Arthur, Lewin and Sylvie arrived at their room. Feeling exhausted, Arthur removed his royal jacket and sat down on the bed, letting out a deep breath. Sylvie looked at him with a calm smile before saying, Do you want to see what I've been practicing? Using her magic, she transformed the scales on her body into different clothes. Enjoying Arthur's reaction, she smiled proudly and said, I can mold my scales into different outfits now. Arthur looked at her in amazement, and gave a small clap. Then, as Sylvie sat down on a chair, Arthur asked, What else can you do? Swinging her feet back and forth, Sylvie replied, I've mostly been focused on functioning in this bipedal form. She smiled gently before continuing, Apart from the lack of stability these silly legs provide, I can understand why the Azuras prefer this form. Arthur smiled. Oh? Do tell. Arthur thought to himself that although Sylvie and he had shared thousands of conversations through their minds, casually talking like this felt refreshing. Looking at her hand, Sylvie explained, mana manipulation, and even using ether, is somehow easier in this form than in any other. Arthur immediately understood. So that was why the Indraths appeared as humans instead of dragons. Then he asked, What are your magic capabilities like now that the seal has been broken? Because the Indrath clan are ether users. Sylvie began. She raised her hand, gathering mana around it. Most of my mana manipulation abilities revolve around strengthening my body. But I can also release a large amount of mana at once. Arthur looked at her nervously. Sylvie? Please don't destroy this room. Or the castle. Laughing softly while holding the mana in her hand, Sylvie teased, Is the mighty lance scared of a little girl now? Arthur laughed. Those jagged horns kind of ruined the little girl part, Besides, you still stumble over your own feet, Sylvie. Let's not endanger everyone in the castle. With a smirk, Sylvie snapped her fingers, causing the mana to disappear. I'm glad I was able to break the seal. I'll be much more useful out in the field now. Her expression softened slightly. But there's still a part of me that feels foreign. I know there's far more to my abilities than I can currently imagine. Arthur looked at her reassuringly. Well, you'll have plenty of opportunities for self-discovery. You heard what they said during the meeting. Things are only going to get more hectic from here on. Hearing that, Sylvie fell silent for a moment. Then she leaned back in her chair with a laugh and said, At least we'll have each other to rely on. Once I gain better control over this form. She raised her fist excitedly. I feel like the two of us defeating a scythe won't be impossible. Arthur chuckled. Won't be impossible, huh? Leaning back onto the bed, Arthur closed his eyes and replied calmly, Not the best odds, but definitely better than before. Sylvie laughed and jumped onto the bed beside him. Then she looked at Arthur and said, If we have time, we should spar before going on a mission. I'd like to test the extent of my control over ether in this form. In a relaxed tone, Arthur answered, We'll be lucky if we even get a good night's sleep without being disturbed. Sylvie buried her face into the bed and groaned, You jinxed it. Just then, a knock echoed through the room. Arthur opened the door to find a soldier standing outside. The soldier saluted respectfully and said, I apologize for the disturbance, General Arthur, but Commander Virion wishes to see you in the dungeon. Arthur frowned in surprise before following the soldier down into the dungeon. When he arrived, he noticed that everyone was already gathered there. After seeing Arthur, Virion Aerolith nodded and said, Good. Everyone's here. An old man stroked his beard and asked, What is all this about? The elven prince added curiously, Yes, why couldn't this wait until morning? Virion replied, I called all of you here because this man, he gestured toward the person beside him, Ento, informed me that Gentry finally managed to get one of the prisoners to talk. The Queen of Sapin asked sharply, Who? The retainer? Virion glanced at Ento before answering, I'm not sure. Arthur, now curious himself, asked, And where's Gentry now? Shouldn't we go inside instead of waiting out here? Ento bowed his head slightly. Master Gentry will be here soon. Suddenly, the door burst open, smoke pouring in from the entrance along with the figure who had pushed it open. It was Master Gentry, wiping his bloody hands with a piece of cloth as he stepped inside. After seeing him, Virion Aerolith immediately asked, Gentry, what exactly is going on? Gentry bowed apologetically. My apologies, everyone. I was just finishing maintenance on the retainer's restraint system when he called for me. Virion frowned. What did the retainer say? Did you finally break him? Tell us. Unfortunately, no, Gentry replied. Hearing that, the Elven Queen shouted angrily, Then why did you feel the need to drag us down here at this godforsaken hour? Her husband placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her down. Adjusting his glasses while still holding the blood-stained cloth, Gentry continued nervously, I have yet to break the retainer. However, thanks to yours truly. The traitor Radias has finally spoken. The room immediately fell silent. But Gentry added, He will only speak to General Arthur. At those words, everyone turned toward Arthur Lewin, who himself looked equally surprised. The dwarven elder slammed his fist angrily. That traitor split the dwarven kingdom in two, ruined our reputation, and left me to clean up his mess. Who is he to make demands? The Prince of Sapin asked curiously, Do you think he's trying to strike some kind of deal with General Arthur? The Elven Queen placed a hand on her chin thoughtfully. If he simply wanted to negotiate, he would have spoken to Commander Virion or another member of the council. Virion looked toward Arthur. Perhaps it's because of your connection to Elijah? Arthur lowered his head slightly and replied in a troubled voice, That's what I'm afraid of. He clenched his fist as countless memories of Elijah Knight flashed through his mind. The first time they met in the dungeon, barely surviving together. The days they spent happily attending the academy side by side. And the moments when Elijah, overwhelmed with sadness, leaned on Arthur for comfort. Suddenly, Gentry cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention back to him. Council members, Lance, he said carefully, it has been extremely difficult to get a traitor to speak. Perhaps it would be best to take advantage of this opportunity while he is still willing and able to talk. Once again, all eyes shifted toward Arthur. Arthur looked at Virion, who silently nodded, giving him permission. Lead the way, Gentry, Arthur said before stepping forward. The two of them walked deeper into the dungeon, leaving the others behind. Meanwhile, far away in the forest, an Alacrian soldier named Circe sat peacefully beside the edge of a river. Folding his legs comfortably, he dipped his feet into the cool water while washing the blood from his arms. As he splashed water onto himself, he thought with satisfaction, sneaking away from camp was definitely worth it. Moving his feet lazily through the river, he continued thinking, It's not like I didn't take precautions first. I understand why Maeve is worried. but we've managed to avoid all the elves so far. He washed his face with water before sighing. Besides, how am I supposed to complete my mission covered in blood and grime? Suddenly, the sound of rustling leaves echoed behind him. Circe's eyes immediately shifted toward the noise. It was Cole. Cole? Circe asked in surprise. Why did you follow me? Can you maintain the barrier from here? Cole shook his head nervously. I can't. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Circe quickly put his shoes back on and stood up. We shouldn't be here. Let's get back to the others. Covering his face in frustration, he muttered. Fane will skin me alive if he finds out we both abandoned our posts. Suddenly, Circe noticed something in the distance. His eyes widened instantly. That's... Cole looked at him in confusion, but before he could ask anything, 4 arrows infused with mana shot toward them from the darkness. Run, Circe! Cole shouted as he immediately started sprinting away. At the same moment, Circe raised his magic, deflecting the incoming arrows midair and changing their direction as the 2 of them fled through the forest. While running through the forest, Circe shouted, I can sense 3 of them. We have to hurry back to camp. It's risky, but Fane and Maeve will be ready to fight. Cole followed closely behind him, maintaining his magic barrier to block the incoming arrows. As the 2 of them ran faster, one of the elven soldiers continued chasing them through the trees. Circe quickly pointed behind them. They're getting closer, Cole warned. Suddenly, a figure burst out from behind a tree. It was Fane. With incredible speed, Fane thrust his spear forward and slashed directly at the pursuing elf. At the same moment, the second elf fired another arrow in frustration. Fane immediately rushed toward him. But before the arrow could hit, Cole expanded his barrier to protect him. Nearby, Maeve raised flames in her hand, preparing her magic. Fane drove his spear straight into the elf's stomach, killing him instantly. At the same time, the third elf charged toward Cole and Circe while Cole's attention remained focused on protecting Fane. The elf swung his blade toward Cole. Clang! A spear blocked the attack at the last second. It was Fane again, reacting instantly to save Cole. Then Maeve raised her hand and shouted, Watch your back. Fane quickly stepped aside as Maeve released a burst of fire magic directly at the elf. The flame struck him head-on, sending him crashing to the ground as his body burned. For a brief moment, the group stood there catching their breath. Then Fane turned towards Circe and angrily shouted, What the hell happened? Circe lowered his head nervously. Before he could explain, Maeve placed a hand on Fane's chest and said firmly, Explanations later. We need to get out of here first. Fane clicked his tongue and looked away, while Maeve kept her eyes on Circe. That was when she noticed something strange. Circe was trembling in place, sweat dripped down his face, and his eyes were filled with fear. Circe? Maeve asked cautiously. The others noticed his expression as well and immediately turned toward him. With a shaking voice, Circe whispered, More elves are coming. His face turned pale as he continued, A lot of them. As Radius sat inside the prison, his entire body was covered in blood and wounds, while heavy chains tightly restrained his hands and feet. The moment he heard the prison door creak open, he quickly lowered his head in respect. As Arthur Lewin stepped forward, Radius bowed deeper and spoke softly. My gratitude for your time and presence. Allow me to begin. Arthur frowned in confusion. Begin? Radius slowly raised his head and began to recite a poem, his voice echoing throughout the dark prison cell. A lad of humble origins, born wrapped in rags within a sorrowful little town. Hearing those words, Arthur was startled for a brief moment. However, Radius continued, Yet he was destined for far more. Born from and for a life of renown. And as with all heroes to be. As the poem went on, memories flashed through Arthur's mind. The lad had the looks, and the lad had the might. His mother taught him of the world, while his father taught him how to fight. His blood knew well they could no longer contain the fire raging within him, burning hotter than a king's funeral pyre. Radius smiled faintly despite the pain covering his body. Until the day came when the lad realized there was a far greater stage awaiting him. So they packed their bags and bid their small town farewell. His expression darkened, but woe. As all stories go, tragedy struck. Arthur remained silent, while Radius continued his recital. Yet never fret, never doubt, because as all stories go, a hero never falls so easily. So he grows and he grows. Through heartache and death throes. Never ceasing. Always overcoming. Radius slowly lifted his eyes toward Arthur. Alas, every light requires a shadow. Every hero requires a foe. The brighter the light, the darker the night. Arthur's expression gradually became more confused as he listened. What happens, hero to be, when the one who has crossed both time and space shines even brighter than thee? Perhaps one maiden's shining night is another's deadly blight. Will the sides of light and darkness only be decided Suddenly, Radius grabbed Arthur's hand tightly and asked in a trembling voice, "By whoever wins the final fight?" Arthur's eyes widened in shock. He immediately pulled his hand away, causing Radius to collapse onto the ground. Lying there, Radius looked up at Arthur and laughed weakly. "Ah. Good. You're real. I feared you were merely another illusion, and that one of my performances had gone to waste. I practiced this many times, you know. I had almost forgotten how warm another person could be." Arthur narrowed his eyes coldly. "It seems your time spent here has made you unbalanced." Radius slowly pulled himself upright, gripping a broken branch beside him for support, as he laughed painfully. "Unbalanced? Not crazy, insane, or mad? Perhaps cracked or nutty. But unbalanced?" He chuckled before continuing. "Regardless, whether you choose to ignore my words, poetry or prose alike, is entirely your own decision." Arthur stared at him carefully. "So that poem you just recited?" Radius leaned back against the wall, his body trembling with pain. "I thought a simple heart-to-heart conversation would be rather boring. And though I'm not particularly skilled in the art of poetry, I needed some way to pass the time." Then he looked directly into Arthur's eyes. "Or perhaps this is merely the rambling of a man who has become unbalanced." Arthur continued staring at him silently. Radius smirked weakly. "My rhyming may have been somewhat elementary, but it was catchy, was it not?" Suddenly, Arthur slammed his fist into the wall beside Radius, causing deep cracks to spread across the stone. His voice turned cold with anger. "I don't think you understand the gravity of your situation, Radius. You're going to remain here for a very long time, and it will not be pleasant. How much you cooperate with the council, how much information you provide to Dicathlon, will determine exactly how unpleasant your imprisonment becomes." Radius coughed painfully as Arthur's hand tightened around his neck. His weakened body trembled while he struggled to breathe. After a moment, Arthur released him and stepped back. "Now is not the time to worry about whether your rhymes are catchy or not." Radius held his neck, coughing heavily before replying with a faint smile. "I know precisely what sort of position I'm in. And I've already told you exactly what I wish to say. Whatever meaning you gain from it is none of my concern." Arthur glared at him angrily, yet remained silent. The scene shifted to the room of Arthur Lewin, where Arthur sat alone at his desk, writing a report about the strange information Radius had revealed to him. As the pen moved across the paper, Arthur let out a frustrated sigh. "I'm so frustrated I can barely think straight." He tapped his fingers against the desk while holding his head in exhaustion. "I hope I'm remembering this correctly." His eyes drifted toward the unfinished report as he continued thinking. "The main message I got from that poem was about a hero. But there was something more hidden within it. It almost felt as if it had something to do with me." Arthur narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "But how did Radius know details about my childhood? Not only did I grow up in a humble town like Ashbur, but he also mentioned the lad leaving his town behind before tragedy struck." He clenched his teeth. He couldn't have learned all of that from a simple background check through the council. "Something about this doesn't feel right." Arthur leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "Does the brighter the light, the darker the night refer to my enemies becoming stronger as I grow stronger myself?" Confusion continued to cloud his mind. But then, what did the shining night and the deadly blight mean? He couldn't understand the true message Radius was trying to convey. Frustrated, Arthur slammed his hand against the table before suddenly standing up from his chair. After pacing around the room for a moment, he finally collapsed onto his bed. What if none of it means anything at all? He covered his face with one hand. What if this was all just a way to gain attention? Or create confusion? Arthur stared silently at the ceiling. Hopefully he's willing to perform an encore. As those thoughts crossed his mind, fragments of his past life suddenly resurfaced within his memories. A large house appeared in his mind, with rainwater pouring heavily outside. The sharp sound of a wooden stick echoed through the air before striking against someone's arm. "I'm in pain," Grace shouted nervously. "I thought I dodged that." Standing before him, his instructor calmly held the wooden stick in her hand. "You're focusing too much on my weapon," she said sternly. She raised the stick slightly. "Your vision should encompass your opponent as a whole. So tell me, what do you see? What's different about me?" Gray rubbed his aching arm and replied cautiously, "Aside from the obvious?" Before he could finish, the stick struck him once again. His teacher glared at him while lowering the stick. "Don't get smart with me, kid." His teacher smiled faintly and asked, "Well?" As Gray stood there rubbing his sore arm, memories resurfaced in his mind. Several months had passed since his capture and subsequent rescue by Lady Vera. After his injuries had fully healed, his lessons under her guidance had finally begun. Though her training methods were brutal and her personality was as warm as a block of ice, Gray couldn't deny that she was an incredibly effective teacher. Vera pointed toward the ground with a wooden stick in her hand. "You pivoted using your lead leg, bringing your back foot forward to extend your reach. As she spoke, Vera calmly folded her hands behind her back and began walking around him. Good. Although, if you weren't able to figure that out from the track marks on the ground, then you wouldn't deserve to be my. Before she could finish, Grace smirked teasingly and interrupted her. Then I don't deserve to be your student? For a brief moment, Vera stared at him silently before tapping the back of his head with his stick and pushing him forward. Grace sighed inwardly. Despite her cold attitude, her home alone revealed just how wealthy and influential she truly was. The two eventually stopped beside a large fish pond. Standing near the water, Gray looked at Vera curiously. How do I get better? Vera answered calmly. Try catching a fish with your bare hands. Gray blinked in surprise as he stared into the clear pond. Whoa. I've never even seen a live fish before. Then Vera added, without using ki. Gray immediately looked at her in disbelief. What? He glanced back at the fish nervously. Won't they die if they leave the water? I don't think I could afford to replace even one of these. Vera sighed. Don't worry about that. Just try. Gray hesitantly stepped into the pond and reached toward one of the fish. The instant his fingers touched it, the fish slipped away effortlessly. So fast. He tried again. And again. And again. Yet no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't catch even a single fish. He used both hands, lunged forward several times, and even splashed water everywhere, but the fish always escaped him with ease. Finally exhausted, Gray sat at the edge of the pond and looked at Vera in frustration. What's the point of this anyway? He stood back up angrily. It's impossible to catch one with your bare hands. Without saying a word, Vera stepped into the pond herself. She slowly lowered her hand into the water and effortlessly caught one of the fish. Is that so? Gray stared at her in shock. Yes, it is. There's no way you can. His eyes widened as he saw the fish calmly resting in her hand. What? No way. He pointed at her immediately. Do it again. Sure. Vera gently released the fish back into the pond before slowly lowering her hand into the water once more. A moment later, she caught another fish just as easily as before. Then she smiled faintly. Gray looked at her with complete disbelief. I don't get it. You moved so slowly. Suddenly, suspicion appeared on his face. Wait. Did you train these fish to swim into your hands? Vera raised an eyebrow. Do I look like someone who would waste my time doing something so pointless? Gray scratched his cheek awkwardly. I guess not. Vera released the fish back into the water. I did this to show you something. You and these fish, these tiny creatures that managed to make a fool out of you, are similar. Before Gray could respond, Vera suddenly struck toward him with her hand. Gray reacted instantly and dodged backward without hesitation. Vera's eyes narrowed slightly. Your reaction speed is fast. Frighteningly fast. She lowered her hand. But it's instinctual. Untamed. Just like these fish. Gray frowned in confusion. I don't understand. What do you mean by untamed? Lady Vera calmly explained. By the time your opponent's muscles flex in preparation for a punch, your brain has already sent a signal to your body to react. Against students or inexperienced fighters, this gives you a tremendous advantage. She slowly walked around Gray while continuing her explanation. However, if this ability remains untrained, stronger opponents will easily predict how you intend to dodge. Just as I predicted, the fish would surge forward the moment I reached for it. Gray nervously rubbed the back of his head before smiling slightly. So how do I tame this ability? By learning to respond. Gray blinked in confusion. Isn't that the same thing? Vera gently tapped him on the head. One is intentional. The other is instinctual. She folded her arms behind her back. So far, we've only focused on basic conditioning. But I think you're finally ready to begin learning how to properly respond to attacks, instead of merely reacting to them. Gray's eyes lit up immediately. So now comes the fun part. Vera stared at him expressionlessly. Fun for me. Gray let out a defeated sigh. Just as Vera was about to continue speaking, a butler hurried toward them. Ma'am. Mr. Gray has received an urgent call from a Mr. Nico. Gray immediately turned toward him. The butler continued anxiously. It seems there was some kind of explosion at Whitholm. The enforcers have locked down the school and ordered all students and staff to stay away until further notice. Hearing those words, Gray's face turned pale. He covered his mouth in shock. Oh my God. Nico. Vera stepped forward calmly. Go, Gray. See to your friend. Then return. Gray quickly nodded, but before he could leave, Vera spoke once more. And remember this. Gray paused and looked back at her. A panicked man may drown in a puddle, while a calm man may swim across the ocean. Her sharp eyes remained fixed on him. Since your classes seem to be cancelled for today, we'll continue working on your reactions later. Gray immediately climbed out of the pond and sprinted away as fast as he could toward the city to meet his friends. Behind him, Vera stood silently beside the water, watching him disappear into the distance. Gray rushed through the halls. A strange sense of dread tightened around his chest as he sprinted toward the communication room. Without slowing down, Gray grabbed the communication receiver the instant he reached it. "Nico," he called out immediately. "Nico, are you there?" For a brief moment, only static answered him. Then finally Gray. Nico's trembling voice came through the line. The fear in his voice immediately made Gray's stomach sink. "Nico, what happened?" Gray asked quickly. "Are you okay?" On the other side of the call, Nico sounded completely panicked. "I don't know what's happening," he stammered. "I checked it a few days ago and everything was fine. It was working perfectly." Gray frowned in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Then Nico's breathing became uneven. "The key restrainer," he whispered. "It must have malfunctioned." Gray's eyes widened slightly. Then Nico said the words that made his chest tighten. "This is all my fault." Gray immediately tried calming him down. "Slow down," he said firmly. "What are you blaming yourself for? You're not making any sense." There was another pause. Then finally Nico spoke again. "It's Cecilia." The moment Gray heard her name, his expression hardened. "What happened to Cecilia?" Nico inhaled shakily before answering. "She had another accident." Gray's grip on the receiver tightened. His mind instantly went back to all the previous incidents, Cecilia's uncontrollable power, the strange surges of ki, the dangerous outbursts she could barely suppress. But from Nico's terrified voice alone, Gray already knew this incident had to be far worse than the others. "Gray," Nico said desperately. "Can you come to the academy right now?" Gray stayed silent for a moment. "The enforcers are here," Nico continued nervously. "They'd been questioning everyone, conducting interviews, and asking all kinds of questions." His breathing became more frantic. "I'm scared, Gray." That single sentence hit harder than anything else. "I think they're going to take her away." Gray's eyes narrowed immediately. "Please," Nico begged quietly. "Come as soon as you can." For several seconds, Gray said nothing. Then, finally, he asked the question he feared the most. "Is Cecilia alive?" Nico answered immediately. "Yes, she's alive." Gray let out a quiet sigh of relief, but Nico continued. "She's okay physically, I think. But they locked her up." Gray closed his eyes for a moment. "This time was really bad," Nico whispered. "She destroyed part of the administration building." Silence filled the room around Gray. Inside his mind, conflicting thoughts clashed against one another. If he asked Lady Vera for permission to leave, would she allow it? Probably not. Vera would most likely tell him to stay focused on his future, avoid unnecessary distractions, and let the enforcers handle the situation. And honestly, part of Gray knew she would probably be right. Still, hearing Nico sound this terrified twisted something painfully inside him. Gray tried to find a way out of the situation without directly refusing. "The enforcers told everyone to stay away from the academy," he said carefully. "Even if I came, they probably wouldn't let me inside." He forced his voice to sound convincing. "I want to help, but there's not much I can do right now." On the other end, Nico fell silent for a moment before speaking again. "Then maybe we can meet somewhere else," he suggested quickly. "We need to figure out what to do if they really try to take Cecilia away." Gray's chest tightened. He could hear the desperation in Nico's voice, the fear and helplessness. And yet Gray panicked internally. He didn't want to get dragged into this situation. Not now. Not when his future was finally beginning to change. Not when Vera had already started shaping him into something greater. Gray swallowed hard before trying once again to calm Nico down. "No, listen to me," he said firmly. "We don't even know what's going to happen yet. Panicking won't help anyone." Then, almost unconsciously, he repeated the same words Vera had told him earlier that day. "A panicked man can drown in a puddle," Gray said slowly, trying to remember the exact quote. "But a calm man can swim across an ocean." Or something like that. He rubbed his forehead awkwardly. "The point is, we need to stay calm." Nico took a shaky breath. "Yeah." For a moment, it sounded like he was trying to steady himself. But then he quietly asked again, "So, where should we meet?" Gray froze. Guilt struck him immediately. But instead of agreeing, he shut the idea down completely. "I can't come," Gray said flatly. "I have lessons." The moment the words left his mouth, the atmosphere changed. Gray quickly continued before Nico could respond. "Don't worry so much. Everything's going to be fine." Even as he said it, the words sounded hollow. Still, he kept going. "You just need to keep your head down and avoid causing trouble." Then Gray tried to justify it further, both to Nico and to himself. Maybe this could actually help Cecilia in the long run. If important people notice her condition, maybe she'll finally get proper treatment. He lowered his voice slightly. Then she won't have to rely only on your inventions anymore. The line became quiet. When Nico finally spoke again, his voice sounded smaller somehow. Okay. There was disappointment in his voice, and Gray could hear it clearly. But Nico still tried to hold himself together. Sorry, Nico said softly. I know you already have a lot on your plate trying to become king and all. Gray immediately felt worse after hearing that. So, I'll let you go now. Gray tightened his grip on the receiver. Call me once you know what the enforcers decide to do, he said. Sure, Nico replied weakly. Then the call ended. The room fell silent. Gray slowly lowered the receiver back into place while staring blankly ahead. Everything's going to be fine, he whispered quietly to himself. Back in the present, Arthur sat silently in his room. That memory still haunted him because now he understood the truth. That was how both Gray and Arthur survived painful moments, by telling themselves that everything would somehow work out, repeating comforting lies until they finally started believing them. Arthur slowly closed his eyes. It was a memory he would never forget. Dream or not, far below the floating castle, deep within the underground dungeon, the night remained cold and quiet. Gentry sighed tiredly. Tonight certainly turned out more eventful than expected. He stretched slightly before turning away. Make sure you finish wrapping things up early tonight, he said casually. I'd rather not spend another sleepless evening down here. With that, Gentry began walking down the corridor, but then a sound echoed from inside the retainer's prison cell. Anto froze instantly. The noise had been subtle. Then suddenly, something moved, fast, far too fast. A dark blur shot toward Ento from inside the cell. His eyes widened in terror. The bucket slid from his hands while metal instruments clattered loudly throughout the dungeon corridor. Before Ento could even scream, the shadow was already upon him. Arthur descended the cold stone staircase toward the underground prison, adjusting the collar of his formal coat with visible discomfort. The neatly pressed black uniform felt stiff around his shoulders, and the polished boots echoed sharply against the dungeon steps. He hated wearing these formal clothes. They were restrictive, impractical, and far too rigid for someone constantly moving between battlefields. But after arriving late and underdressed to one too many council meetings, Virion had made his opinion painfully clear. If Arthur showed up looking like a wandering mercenary again, the commander would personally lecture him for an hour straight. So despite the irritation crawling beneath his skin, Arthur endured it. Only a few days had passed since his last dream of Gray's past life, yet the memory still lingered vividly in his mind. The strange conversation with Rhodius refused to leave him alone. Ever since hearing that bizarre poem, fragments of Gray's old memories had begun surfacing more frequently, almost as if the words themselves had stirred something buried deep inside him. Arthur clenched his jaw slightly. Maybe the poem truly was connected somehow. Maybe Rhodius knew something impossible. Or maybe the old traitor was simply insane. Arthur exhaled slowly as he continued down the dim corridor illuminated by flickering mana lamps. He hoped that this time, Rhodius would stop speaking in riddles and finally explain himself directly. As he reached the final turn of the staircase, he noticed the guard stationed outside the prison corridor. The elf sat lazily beside the cell entrance, head tilted downward, apparently asleep. Arthur stared at him for a moment before sighing quietly. This guy really drifts off on duty a lot, he thought. A faint smirk tugged at Arthur's lips. Deciding to test him a little, Arthur carefully concealed his mana presence and silently stepped forward using the same stealth technique he once used to sneak past the hypersensitive raptor squirrels in Ephiotis, creatures capable of sensing even the slightest disturbance in the air. Arthur moved without a sound, but the moment he came within reach, a blade instantly pressed against his neck. Arthur froze. The elf guard stood before him with frightening speed, sword drawn and eyes razor-sharp. His sleepy appearance had vanished completely. Pure instinct radiated from him. Then recognition struck. The guard's eyes widened in horror. He immediately lowered his weapon and stepped back, bowing apologetically. My apologies. I sensed someone sneaking up behind me and reacted before thinking. Arthur raised an eyebrow. You reacted while asleep? The elf's face flushed with embarrassment. Please don't tell Commander Virion, he pleaded quickly. I only have a few more days of guard duty left. If I stay down here any longer, I'll have to start running laps on the wall just to stop my muscles from wasting away. Arthur couldn't help letting out a small chuckle. Relax. I'm not reporting you. The guard sighed in relief. Honestly though, Arthur admitted, Virion was right about your senses being exceptional. The elf grinned proudly at the compliment. These senses have saved my life more times than I can count. The guard sheathed his sword before asking, Are you here to visit another prisoner? Arthur shook his head. Same one. Then he glanced toward the deeper part of the corridor. Is Gentry inside? The elf snorted. There hasn't been a single moment when he wasn't inside. Arthur blinked. Wait. He sleeps down here too? The elf nodded immediately, with all the smell, blood, and screaming apparently. Both of them grimaced at the same time. That's disgusting, Arthur muttered. It really is. They continued their conversation as Arthur asked whether the elf at least had his own room, hopefully somewhere far away from these depths of despair. The elf let out a tired laugh and said that he did, but he still couldn't wait to finish his assignment there and finally return home. Arthur glanced at him curiously. You're not returning to the battlefield? The elf shook his head. I'm being reassigned to the forest. Then a faint smile crossed his face. That's what I meant by home. Arthur paused slightly. Their forest. The memory resurfaced immediately. The towering trees, the thick manna fog, the strange silence hidden beneath the forest's beauty. The first time Arthur entered Elshire, he had only been a child, and it had been entirely by accident. The elf stopped walking for a second, clearly surprised. You? Arthur nodded. When I was younger. The guard stared at him in disbelief. Not many humans enter the forest and come back alive, he muttered. Much less a child. Arthur smiled faintly. I'll tell you the story someday if you tell me why you're getting demoted to guard duty. The elf instantly replied without hesitation. I guess we'll both never know. Arthur laughed quietly under his breath. Eventually, they reached a cluttered side room near the deepest cells of the prison. The elf pointed toward a hunched figure buried beneath papers, restraints, and scattered tools. There, he said. That's where he sleeps. Gentry suddenly jolted awake at the sound of footsteps. HM? What's going on? He fumbled around for his glasses before finally spotting Arthur standing at the doorway. The old torturer blinked. Well now, he muttered. To what do I owe the pleasure of the general disturbing my rest? Arthur crossed his arms. I was simply returning the favor from last night. Gentry let out a dry laugh. Fair enough. Arthur's expression quickly turned serious. I need you to open Rodius's cell. There's something I want to ask him. Gentry nodded immediately as he stood up. Of course. As they walked through the corridor, Gentry spoke again. And my apologies for dragging the entire council down here last night. Arthur glanced at him. You thought Rodius was finally going to reveal something important. I still think he might. Arthur remained silent for a moment. That's why I'm here. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Eventually, they arrived outside Yuto's reinforced containment chamber. Arthur frowned slightly. Something felt wrong. Gentry reached for the mechanism and slowly opened the chamber door. The moment it creaked open, dark smoke spilled into the hallway. Arthur's eyes narrowed instantly. Gentry froze. The elf guard immediately stepped forward with his sword drawn. As the smoke slowly cleared, the horrifying scene inside became visible. Antle collapsed on the floor. Blood seeped through the gaps in his suit as broken tools and overturned buckets scattered across the room. The entire chamber looked devastated. Black spikes of corrupted mana erupted violently from the ground and walls like twisted spears, tearing apart the prison floor. And in the middle of it all, Yuto sat slumped against the wall, barely conscious. Yet despite his condition, a twisted grin stretched across the retainer's face the moment he saw Arthur. Arthur's eyes widened slightly. That's impossible. The restraints were still active. Yuto's mana should have been completely sealed. Gentry immediately rushed toward the retainer, while the elf guard focused his senses outward. There's nobody else here, the elf reported sharply. I can't sense any intruders. Arthur stepped cautiously into the chamber, confusion growing rapidly. Did he somehow break free? Arthur muttered. But something felt off. Yuto wasn't escaping. He wasn't even moving properly. Then Arthur realized something far worse. Rodius. Arthur instantly turned and rushed toward the neighboring cell. The metal door stood partially open. Arthur reached it in seconds, and stopped cold. Rodius lay sprawled across the prison floor. Dark spikes had pierced completely through his body. Blood spread beneath him in thick crimson pools. His eyes were empty. Dead. For a brief moment, silence consumed the entire corridor. Arthur stared at the corpse in shock, his mind racing violently. Then Yuto laughed weakly from behind him. A slow, broken laugh filled with cruel amusement. The next morning, the atmosphere inside the castle felt far heavier than usual. The bright halls that once radiated quiet comfort and safety now felt tense and suffocating. Inside the grand meeting room, every member of the council had gathered once again. Virion stood at the head of the chamber, his face etched with a grim expression. The exhaustion in his eyes was impossible to hide. Beside him stood Gentry, the usually composed torturer, who now looked pale and visibly shaken. The horror of what had transpired in the dungeon still clung to him. Virion turned to Gentry and spoke in a firm but controlled tone. Describe everything exactly as it happened. Leave out no details. Before Gentry could respond, Queen Priscilla spoke gently from her seat. We understand your distress. she said calmly. But the more clearly we understand the incident, the better we can determine what truly happened and prevent it from occurring again. Gentry nodded weakly, struggling to compose himself. I could have stopped it. The room fell silent. Gentry lowered his head. But I was asleep. King Blaine narrowed his eyes. You didn't hear anything at all? Before Gentry could answer, the elf elbowed in front of council. I can personally assure the council, he said confidently, that if there had been any struggle or intrusion, I would have heard it, even from the first floor of the dungeon. Then it's Arthur turn telling about Elf. After witnessing his extraordinary senses firsthand earlier that morning, he knew Albold was not exaggerating. Then Arthur spoke. As I mentioned before, by the time we arrived, they were already dead. Queen Muriel turned to him immediately. Then explain exactly what you saw. Gentry nodded and recounted the scene carefully. When we entered the chamber, the room was already covered in black spikes. Yuto was still barely alive at the time. Albold continued from there. Yuto was leaning halfway outside his cell. One of the spikes had pierced directly through his mana core. We couldn't determine whether he escaped on his own or whether someone helped him. He paused briefly. I intended to investigate the chamber further while General Arthur went to Radia's cell. Arthur finished for him. I wanted answers regarding the poem he recited the previous night. But by the time I reached the cell, Radia's was already dead. Arthur's eyes hardened slightly as the gruesome image resurfaced in his mind. His body had been pierced straight through the heart by the same black spikes. Several council members exchanged grim looks. Arthur continued in a calm, measured tone. Gentry had been sleeping near the chamber, and Albold was guarding the main entrance. Earlier this morning, Albold was able to detect me even after I completely concealed my mana presence. Between the prison levels and the upper floors, numerous guards were stationed throughout the castle. If someone truly infiltrated this place, they left absolutely no traces behind. A heavy silence settled over the room. The situation made no sense. Virion eventually spoke. Since every witness account aligns perfectly, the council has concluded that none of you were involved in the deaths. Gentry visibly relaxed at those words, though guilt remained etched across his face. Arthur stayed silent, but his thoughts continued racing. The deaths of Radias and Yuto were catastrophic. Not only had Daikathan lost 2 major prisoners, but one of them had been a retainer, living proof that the enemy could bleed. Keeping Yuto in prison had given the people of Daikathan a sense of control. A symbol that the war was still manageable. Now even that illusion was gone. As for Rhodus, the council did not mourn the traitor himself, but the valuable information buried with him was another matter entirely. Virion eventually turned toward Gentry. You are granted temporary bereavement leave until the council requires your services again. Gentry bowed deeply. Understood. Virion then looked toward Albold. You will return to the Elves' Higher Forest immediately and assist the forces stationed there. The elf stood straight and saluted sharply. Yes, Commander. Arthur quietly observed the council members as the meeting continued. Despite their composed expressions, he could tell that every single one of them understood the gravity of the situation. If word spread that enemy prisoners had died inside the most secure location in Daikathan, panic would erupt instantly. So the council made the same choice countless rulers throughout history had made. When faced with fear and uncertainty, they buried the truth. The incident would be covered up completely, no public announcement, no rumors, and no mention of infiltration. Virion finally turned toward Arthur. Until further notice, you will remain on standby. Arthur bowed slightly. Understood. The meeting eventually came to an end, and one by one, the council members departed the chamber in exhausted silence. Later, Arthur found Virion standing alone beside one of the massive castle windows. The old commander stared quietly at the window below. Far beneath the castle, children ran through the garden, laughing while spending time with their families. Their peaceful atmosphere made them feel safe. To them, the castle still represented safety. Arthur stepped beside Virion. You must be worried about everyone's safety. Virion did not answer immediately. Instead, he continued looking outside. After a long pause, he finally spoke. Do you really think I'd allow civilians to remain here if I believed they were in danger? Arthur stayed silent, but inwardly he admitted Virion had a point. If an enemy infiltrator truly possessed the ability to enter the castle unnoticed, then why target prisoners? Why not assassinate council members or the lances? Why kill Radias and Yudo specifically? The more Arthur thought about it, the less sense it made, and yet, Agrona's words continued echoing in his mind. Arthur remembered the conversation clearly, Agrona speaking through Sylvie's body, calmly discussing the war as though human lives were nothing more than pieces on a board. We are progressing into the next stage of the war. It will not benefit your side. Agrona did not want to destroy Daikathan. He wanted its resources, its people. He intended to use the continent itself as fuel for his future war against Epheotis. Arthur's thoughts shifted back toward Radia's. The poem. The strange wording. The hidden meanings. Was Radia's truly trying to warn him? Had he deliberately hidden the truth within poetry to avoid triggering some kind of curse? Arthur's eyes narrowed. Cynthia had died under mysterious circumstances too. Was it the same curse? The same invisible force silencing anyone who learned too much? Arthur's thoughts were interrupted when Virion spoke again. To be honest, I'm at a complete loss. Arthur looked at him in surprise. Virion rarely admitted uncertainty. The scale of this war, Virion continued while staring out the window, is unlike anything this continent has ever faced. Arthur slowly nodded. Things have been quiet lately. Too quiet. A heavy tension settled between them. Arthur looked out over the floating castle toward the endless horizon beyond the clouds. I can feel it. Something big is about to happen. His expression darkened. But I still don't know what. As Arthur walked through the long hallways of the castle, his mind remained tangled in restless thoughts. The polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of the mana lamps above. But even the calm atmosphere of the castle could not ease the tension building inside him. Everything was happening too fast. Every day brought new threats, new discoveries, and new uncertainty. The war that once felt distant had now spread across the entire continent like an unstoppable storm. Arthur let out a quiet breath as he continued walking toward his room. Part of him still could not understand why Virion had ordered him to remain on standby while the other lances were scattered across Dicathan, handling critical missions. Aya had already been deployed to Elenwar, monitoring the southern borders after the recent Alacrian incursions through the forest. Micah was deep within Darv, hunting down radical dwarven groups and Alacrian sympathizers who were destabilizing the kingdom from within. Vari had stationed herself along the western coastline, personally overseeing the fortification of major cities in preparation for a possible naval assault. Byron was scouting the northern range of the Grand Mountains, searching relentlessly for any sign of scythes or retainers entering Dicathan. Everyone was moving. Everyone was fighting. Yet Arthur remained in the castle. He frowned slightly. Still, he trusted Virion. The old commander was not the type to make meaningless decisions. If Virion wanted him here, then there had to be a reason for it. Arthur simply had not figured it out yet. As he reached the door to his room, he suddenly heard muffled voices coming from inside. "You have to help me. Promise?" Arthur paused, then slowly opened the door. The moment he stepped inside, Ellie instantly turned toward him with a bright smile, while Sylvie sat suspiciously close beside her on the couch. Boo rested lazily on the floor nearby. Arthur narrowed his eyes immediately. "That doesn't look suspicious at all." Sylvie crossed her arms innocently. "You're overthinking it." Arthur was not convinced for even a second. Ellie quickly changed the subject before he could question them further. "What happened? Why did it take you so long?" Arthur sighed tiredly as he loosened the collar of his coat. "Another council meeting." Then a faint smile crossed his face. "But I'm free now." Ellie's eyes lit up instantly. "Does that mean you're finally ready to spend time with your precious little sister?" Arthur chuckled softly. "Sure, as long as you don't mind spending that time at the training grounds." He glanced towards Sylvie. "She and I still need to test a few things before we end up in a real fight." Sylvie nodded immediately as the three of them began walking through the castle halls together. Arthur glanced sideways at Sylvie. "So, what exactly were you two talking about before I came in?" Sylvie immediately looked away. "I'm sworn to secrecy." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "That makes it sound even more suspicious." Ellie quickly avoided eye contact. Arthur shook his head with a helpless smile as they continued toward the training grounds. Despite everything happening around them, seeing Ellie and Sylvie getting along so naturally genuinely made him happy. Eventually, they arrived at the massive indoor training hall. The moment Arthur pushed the heavy doors open, the familiar scent of stone, metal, and burned mana filled the air. Arthur stepped into the center of the room before stretching his arms casually. "We should warm up first." Ellie immediately began stretching beside him. Arthur glanced towards Sylvie. "You joining us?" Sylvie stared at them blankly. "Why?" Ellie giggled. "To loosen your body before training." Sylvie hesitated before awkwardly attempting to copy their movements. Her human form still clearly felt unnatural to her. Every stretch looked stiff and unbalanced, and several times she nearly lost her footing. Arthur tried not to laugh. Eventually, Sylvie leaned too far sideways and nearly toppled over completely. But Ellie quickly caught her before she could hit the floor. Sylvie blinked in surprise. Ellie smiled proudly. "See? You're getting better already." Arthur shook his head in amusement. "All right, let's start the real training before one of you breaks something just by stretching." Sylvie straightened herself before walking toward the center of the arena. "How do you want to do this?" Arthur asked. Sylvie raised a hand. "Just stand still for a moment." Almost immediately, A glowing sphere of white energy began forming around her palm. The mana condensed rapidly into a dense, shining projectile. Then she fired it directly toward Arthur like an arrow. Arthur instantly swatted the projectile aside with the back of his hand. But despite casually deflecting it, his expression shifted slightly in surprise when he noticed a faint burn mark left behind on his skin. Arthur blinked. When did you learn to use mana arrows? Sylvie looked mildly pleased with herself. Watching Ellie manipulate elemental mana gave me a few ideas. Several more glowing arrows rapidly formed around her hands. This is one way to better take advantage of my own traits. The arrows shot toward Arthur one after another. This time, Arthur caught the projectiles directly in his hands before they could explode. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Interesting. Compared to Ellie's arrows, these are much more compact, almost solid. The raw destructive output is not especially high, but the mana density is absurd. They don't dissipate immediately after impact either. Arthur quickly realized that although Sylvie had drawn inspiration from Ellie's techniques, the composition of the spell itself was completely different. Ellie manipulated elemental mana. Sylvie manipulated pure mana itself. Sylvie folded her arms confidently. Dragons can only manipulate ether and pure mana. Arthur glanced at the glowing energy still lingering around her hands. Then what exactly is this arrow? Sylvie hesitated slightly. I'm not entirely sure. That answer immediately caught Arthur's attention. Sylvie looked down at her hands thoughtfully. Ever since I started spending more time in my human form, I've gotten a much better understanding of my core. But there's still a part of it I can't fully access. Arthur smirked slightly. Maybe you'll unlock it once you get stronger. Then dozens of fireballs suddenly materialized around him. The temperature inside the training room instantly rose. For now, Arthur continued, let's test how versatile your control over pure mana really is. The fireballs launched simultaneously. The arena exploded into flames. Ellie quickly shielded herself from the heat, while Boo growled uneasily. But when the fire finally cleared, Sylvie stood completely unharmed. A translucent white mana barrier surrounded her body flawlessly. Not even a scratch reached her. Arthur immediately followed with another attack, this time summoning sharp flaming arrows. Create separate panels, he instructed calmly. Block each projectile individually. The arrows shot forward. Sylvie reacted instantly. Several floating mana shields materialized around her body, intercepting every single arrow with perfect timing. Arthur nodded approvingly, then vanished. In the next instant, he appeared directly behind Sylvie in her blind spot. Arthur swung his blade toward her side, attempting to catch her off guard. But before the strike could land, black and violet dragon scales instantly spread across Sylvie's arm, hardening into armor. Clang! Arthur's attack bounced harmlessly away. Sylvie turned toward him smugly. Arthur could not help smiling. Your mana control is impressive, he admitted honestly. And your reserves are massive. He studied the scales covering her arm. Your natural defenses are strong too, even if this form slows your physical movement slightly. Then his expression became more serious. But your attacks still aren't strong enough to threaten a retainer or scythe yet. Sylvie nodded without arguing. My defenses are weaker in this form too, she admitted. And you definitely held back just now. She glanced toward Dawn's ballad resting in Arthur's hand. If you actually swung seriously with that sword, I probably would have lost an arm. Arthur smiled slightly but didn't deny it. Sylvie continued explaining. My mana control is far better in this form, but my dragon form allows me to release much larger amounts of mana at once. Arthur nodded thoughtfully. Less refined, but more destructive. Exactly. Arthur then raised a hand again. One more test. Sylvie tilted her head curiously. Create a square mana panel in front of me, Arthur instructed. And keep it stable. A glowing shield appeared instantly before him. Arthur took a stance and struck it. The impact shook the entire arena floor, but the shield didn't break. Arthur's eyes widened slightly in genuine surprise. Good. Then he pointed toward the opposite side of the room. How far can you maintain control? Sylvie sent the shield floating across the arena while Arthur observed carefully. Keep moving it. The shield twisted, rotated, accelerated, and shifted direction rapidly through the air while Sylvie maintained full control over it. Arthur watched closely, then suddenly spoke again. Now convert it into an arrow. The shield instantly collapsed inward before reshaping itself into a glowing projectile. Sylvie fired it forward immediately. Arthur smiled. Not bad at all. At this point, Arthur finally began understanding how they could properly coordinate during battle. Sylvie's control, defense, and adaptability could complement his combat style perfectly. As the two of them resumed sparring, Ellie stood quietly near the sidelines beside Boo, watching the overwhelming exchange of power unfold before her eyes. Explosions shook the arena. Mana clashed violently. Arthur and Sylvie moved at speeds Ellie could barely follow. For the first time in a long while, Ellie truly realized just how massive the gap between her and them had become. Arthur finished his sparring session against Sylvie. Through their battle, he gained a much better understanding of Sylvie's abilities in her human form. Although she had become significantly stronger, the long training session had completely exhausted her. Meanwhile, Ellie stepped forward, gripping her bow with excitement. As Sylvie walked back, the two girls lightly tapped each other's arms, wishing one another good luck. The moment Sylvie reached Boo, she immediately collapsed onto the giant bear's soft arm to rest. While sitting comfortably on Boo's arm, Sylvie secretly spoke to Arthur through their mental connection. "Your sister really wants to impress you, so don't be too hard on her." Ellie, meanwhile, raised her bow with determination, ready to begin her training session. Arthur secretly replied to Sylvie with a small grin. "Ah, that's no fun." Without warning, he slammed his pawn into the ground. Several large chunks of rock erupted from the earth and shot toward Ellie at high speed. Ellie's eyes sharpened instantly. She quickly channeled mana into her bow and created multiple mana arrows. One after another, the arrows flew through the air, shattering every incoming rock into pieces. Not a single projectile reached her. After effortlessly destroying all of Arthur's attacks, Ellie lowered her bow slightly and smirked. Her confidence was obvious as she challenged Arthur to try something more difficult. Arthur Lewin raised his arm, and dozens of fireballs instantly materialized around him, floating in the air like miniature suns. Through his mental connection with Sylvie, Arthur smirked and said, "At this rate, I might not even get the chance to go easy on her. This is going to be great practice for both of us." Without hesitation, he launched a barrage of fireballs toward Ellie. The glowing projectiles raced across the training field one after another. Ellie reacted immediately, firing mana arrows with incredible speed and precision. Each arrow struck its target perfectly, causing the incoming fireballs to explode before reaching her. One fireball slipped through the barrage and shot straight toward her. Ellie quickly shifted her position, narrowly dodging the attack before drawing another mana arrow and firing again. Watching her movements, Arthur couldn't help but smile. Then, raising both hands, he gathered cold mana around him. "Let's try something a little more challenging." The temperature around the training grounds dropped instantly as dozens of ice birds formed around Arthur. With a flick of his wrist, the frozen constructs surged toward Ellie from multiple directions. Ellie didn't slow down for a second. She continuously fired mana arrows, destroying every ice bird in midair before it could reach her. While Ellie focused on eliminating the incoming ice constructs, Arthur quietly gathered a massive amount of fire mana behind him. The sudden surge of power caught both Sylvie and Boo's attention. Before their eyes, a gigantic beast made entirely of flames took shape. The fiery creature resembled Boo, towering over the training grounds while radiating intense heat. Arthur folded his arms and looked at Ellie. "Your offense is impressive," he admitted. "But what happens when you face a spell that you can't simply shoot down?" Ellie smiled confidently. Slowly, she raised her bow and condensed a powerful mana arrow. The enormous fire beast charged toward her. Without the slightest hesitation, Ellie released her arrow. The mana projectile shot forward like a beam of light. Arthur calmly watched the attack and said, "It'll pass right through." But before he could finish his sentence, his eyes widened in shock. Boom! The mana arrow completely destroyed the massive fire beast in a single shot. The entire construct exploded into countless flames before disappearing. Silence filled the training grounds. Ellie stood there with a confident smirk on her face. Arthur stared in disbelief. Before he could say anything, Ellie grinned and spoke first. "That was impressive? Superb? Jaw-dropping?" Arthur cleared his throat and nervously rubbed his chin. "Not bad," he said. "It wasn't bad at all." Ellie's face immediately fell in disappointment. Ignoring her reaction, Arthur continued. "Since your arrows are made entirely from pure mana, your reload speed and draw speed are significantly faster than those of a traditional archer. Your accuracy has also improved tremendously." Despite trying to sound calm, Arthur was genuinely impressed by how much stronger his sister had become. Ellie crossed her arms and pouted. "Those compliments seem somewhat dull." Arthur smiled and gently placed a hand on her head. Before he could say anything else, Sylvie stepped forward with a grin. "What your brother really means to say is that he's very proud of how much you've grown." Arthur immediately flicked Sylvie on the forehead. "Hey! No verbally expressing my thoughts." Sylvie rubbed her forehead while laughing. Arthur shook his head with a small smile before opening his hands. "Your stamina still needs improvement," he admitted. "But you'll get there with enough training and experience." Sylvie then subtly nodded toward Ellie, encouraging her to bring up what she had wanted to ask. Looking nervous, Ellie hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Speaking of getting enough experience, I was wondering if maybe I could, Arthur raised an eyebrow. "You know what?" Ellie looked away and sighed. "Never mind." Before she could back out, Sylvie grabbed her hand and gave her an encouraging smile. Just say it. Arthur's curiosity grew. Does this have anything to do with whatever you two were talking about before I came back from my meeting? Ellie took a deep breath. I want. She paused for a moment before blurting it out. I want to fight in the war. The words echoed through the training grounds. Arthur froze. Even though part of him had expected it. Hearing her say it aloud still caught him off guard. You said it yourself. Ellie continued. I've improved a lot. Arthur remained silent, while Sylvie watched him carefully through their mental connection. Encouraged by his silence, Ellie continued. I'm confident that I'm stronger than a lot of the soldiers who have already been assigned to combat squads, and many of them barely graduated from school. She tightened her grip on her bow. And I'm not asking to be sent to the front lines. I'm an archer. I'd be perfectly fine serving in the reserves or supporting from the rear. For a long moment, Arthur simply stared at her. Then he stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. I can see how hard you've been working. Ellie's eyes brightened. Arthur sighed. I'm not saying no. Her expression immediately lit up. But, Arthur continued, I'm also not sure if I'm allowed to make that decision for you. The excitement on Ellie's face faded slightly. Arthur lowered his hand. Mom and Dad aren't here. And to be honest, we haven't exactly been seeing eye to eye lately. Ellie looked surprised. You guys still haven't made up since last time? Arthur blinked. How did you know that? Ellie rolled her eyes. I'm young, Arthur. Not dumb. Arthur couldn't help but laugh. After thinking for a few moments, an idea suddenly came to him. How about this? Ellie immediately leaned forward. Arthur smiled. Come on a mission with me. If you do well, you'll have my blessing. Ellie's eyes widened. Arthur continued. I can't speak for Mom or Dad, but I won't stand in your way. For a moment, Ellie simply stared at him. Then she practically launched herself at him and wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. Really? Thank you. Arthur laughed despite himself. Nearby, Sylvie smiled warmly. Through their mental connection, she said, That was surprisingly fair of you. Arthur simply smiled in response. Just then, the doors to the training grounds opened. Arthur turned toward the entrance and was surprised to see Queen Muriel walking inside. The Queen of Elenwar approached gracefully, her elegant robes flowing behind her. A gentle smile rested on her face as her eyes swept across the scene before her. It looks like another Lei Win is preparing to help save the continent. Arthur, Sylvie, and Ellie respectfully greeted Queen Muriel. Stepping forward, Queen Muriel smiled warmly. Hello, General Arthur, Eleanor, and Sylvie. Please continue your training. There's no need to stop on my account. Arthur slipped a hand into his pocket and returned her smile. What brings you to the training room so late in the evening, Queen Muriel? I tried to check in on the children who train here from time to time. Queen Muriel replied. Many of them are wonderful kids, and quite a few are citizens of Elenwar. Arthur smiled to himself. The King and Queen of Elenwar were truly involved with their people. As Arthur and Queen Muriel continued their conversation, Ellie and Sylvie resumed their training. I wasn't expecting the room to be cleared out though. Queen Muriel continued. My apologies for eavesdropping on what seemed to be a family conversation. Arthur chuckled. No worries. It wasn't anything serious. It sounded quite serious to me. Queen Muriel replied knowingly. Arthur scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Well, before he could continue, Queen Muriel turned toward him and said, Everyone is doing what they can to help in this war, aren't they? Her gaze shifted to Ellie. She's quite brave. She must take after you. She reminds me a little of Tesha. Arthur's expression softened. Do you remember the time Tesha overheard some of the castle chefs complaining that cured meat had been going missing? Arthur laughed. Of course I do. Tesha practically forced me to investigate with her. In the end, we caught Virion red-handed stealing meat during his supposed diet. Queen Muriel laughed as well. Despite her invitation, I was too busy with the tri-union discussions to join the investigation. Her smile gradually faded as she looked up at the ceiling. At the time, I thought those meetings were the worst of my worries. But in hindsight, her eyes drifted toward Ellie and Sylvie training together. Those were some of the most peaceful moments of our lives. Lowering her head slightly, she added, We probably should have appreciated them more. After a brief silence, she smiled gently. Well, it was good running into you, General. She turned and began walking toward the exit. Queen Muriel. She stopped and glanced back. Arthur met her gaze with a determined expression. With the Council's guidance, the Lances and I will do everything we can to make sure those peaceful times return again. Queen Muriel responded with a small, calm smile. Without another word, she continued on her way and left the training room. Arthur watched her departure in silence. Nearby, Sylvie and Ellie exchanged curious glances before looking back at Arthur, wondering what was on his mind. Over the next 4 days, Arthur continued training Ellie and Sylvie while refining his own mana skills. As he explored his new powers, he gradually unlocked new limits and gained a deeper understanding of his abilities. Damn. How did Alfred and Ren do this? Arthur wondered. Not that either of them would have offered to teach me if they were here. Ellie and Sylvie trained relentlessly until they were both physically and mentally exhausted. Ellie was becoming increasingly skilled at manipulating pure mana without relying heavily on her mana reserves. Arthur found himself continually surprised by her progress and potential. Sylvie had yet to unlock many of the abilities hidden within her core, but she had become much more confident in controlling her human form. They hadn't had the opportunity to practice coordinated combat together, but both Sylvie and Ellie were clearly showing signs of improvement. After another intense training session, the two girls collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. Arthur smiled down at them. That was a fun session. Sylvie groaned and rolled onto her back. Maybe for you. Ellie sat up and looked at Sylvie excitedly. It's impressive how much more versatile your pure mana attacks have become, Sylvie. They hold up really well, even against Arthur's elemental spells. Arthur chuckled and flicked Ellie on the forehead. You shouldn't compare yourself to her. Sylvie is a dragon. Pure mana is naturally all dragons can manipulate. Sylvie grinned. Well, that and ether. Arthur nodded. For most mages, pure mana can only come directly from their core, and it takes time to gather and purify. Elemental magic also uses mana, but it's powered by the ambient mana surrounding us. He continued his explanation. Not only must the pure mana spell originate from the caster, but it's also much harder to control once it's been released. That's why it's so impressive that you can detonate an arrow after you've already fired it. Ellie's eyes sparkled. Really? Is it that impressive? Arthur smiled. It is. Ellie immediately turned towards Sylvie. All right. Sylvie, can you make those moving panels again? I want to try hitting them. Sylvie laughed as she climbed to her feet. I guess I should practice reacting to your arrows as well. Suddenly, the training room doors burst open. A soldier rushed inside and immediately saluted. General Arthur! Arthur's expression became serious. What is it, soldier? The soldier lowered his salute, visibly worried. News has arrived of a massive horde of corrupted beasts. Arthur, Ellie, and Sylvie froze for a moment. Then the soldier continued urgently. They've been sighted advancing from the wall. After hearing the soldier's report, everyone was shocked. Arthur Lewin immediately realized what it meant. So the smaller skirmishes were merely tests for a much larger scale attack. Stepping forward, Arthur quickly asked, Has the council been informed? Yes, General. The soldier replied. Preparations are already being made. Good. I'll report to the commander. Before he could finish, Ellie interrupted with determination. I'm coming with you. You promised, remember? Arthur looked at her. His thoughts immediately turned to the danger ahead. This is far too dangerous. She could be seriously injured, or even killed. Ellie, Arthur said firmly. This is a massive horde of corrupted beasts. Yes, Ellie argued, but you'll be with me, and I'll have the protection of the wall. Through their mental connection, Sylvie spoke to Arthur. This is a good opportunity. We'll be nearby. Shooting arrows from the top of the wall will be little more than target practice for her. Arthur glanced at Sylvie. But what if the beasts break through? He asked mentally. I know you won't let that happen. Sylvie replied confidently. The soldier cleared his throat nervously. General Arthur, they're waiting. Arthur remained silent, still struggling to decide whether to take Ellie with him. Finally, he turned around and began walking away, with Sylvie following beside him. Ellie's shoulders slumped in disappointment. Then Arthur suddenly looked back. What are you waiting for? He asked. Let's go. Ellie's face lit up instantly. Wait for me! She shouted excitedly as she ran after them. Along the way, the soldier introduced another officer. Officer Strigan will brief you on the situation at the wall. The officer saluted sharply. Greetings, General Arthur. I am Officer Jeweler Strigan. One of the members of my scouting squad in the Beast Glades was the first to spot the horde. As they continued walking, Arthur listened carefully. From your report, Officer Strigan, this horde sounds formidable. Sylvie's voice echoed through their mental connection. They're still only mana beasts, Arthur, even if they are corrupted. Arthur nodded before asking. How long until the horde reaches the wall? At their current pace, Jeweler replied. We expect them to arrive within 2 days. After finishing his report, the officer saluted once more. That's all the information I have, General. Please report to the commander. The departure group will be ready at the dock within the hour. Thank you, Arthur replied. He then looked at Ellie, Boo, and Sylvie. The three of you can head to the teleportation gate first. I'll meet you there. Both Ellie and Sylvie nodded before leaving. Arthur approached the commander's office and grasped the handle before entering. Commander, Officer Strigan has already briefed me on the logistics. There have been no sightings of Sais or retainers, but I'll remain vigilant. As Arthur stepped inside and closed the door behind him, Commander Virion nodded. Thank you for coming, Arthur. Before you leave, I prepared something for you. He pointed towards a large box resting on the table. Curious, Arthur opened it. Inside was a suit of armor. After several attendants helped him put it on, Arthur examined himself. The armor's appearance was somewhat extravagant, decorated with intricate engravings and elegant trimmings. However, despite its impressive appearance, it remained practical and lightweight. Virion knew exactly what kind of armor suited me, Arthur thought. Unlike those ceremonial outfits designed purely for appearance, this armor offers genuine protection while allowing me to move freely. Virion smiled approvingly. Much better. Arthur looked down at the armor, feeling a renewed sense of determination. You really do like your furs, Arthur remarked. Virion chuckled and placed a hand on his shoulder. Yes, I do. This mantle is an old piece of mine from my younger days. Although it doesn't look nearly as good on you as it did on me, I'll let you keep it. A small smile appeared on Arthur's face. Thank you for the outfit. As he spoke, memories surfaced of the years Virion had spent training him, teaching him, and guiding him throughout his childhood. And thank you for everything else as well. Virion turned his face away, hiding his emotions. Thank me, he said quietly. By making sure the wall doesn't fall. Arthur bowed respectfully. I will. With that promise made, the young lance turned and prepared to face the coming storm. Arthur Lewin, accompanied by Virion, Ellie, and Sylvie, soon arrived at the dock. Upon seeing the rest of the council gathered there, Arthur raised an eyebrow in surprise. Oh? The rest of the council is here as well? Of course, Virion replied with a smile. We all wanted to see you off. He then gestured towards two mages standing nearby. These are Gavik Lund and Callum Hembrel. They are the mages I've chosen to support you at the wall. Both men immediately saluted. Gavik stepped forward and shook Arthur's hand. General, it's a pleasure to meet you. Arthur glanced around the dock before noticing the flying mounts that had been prepared. Judging by those mounts, I assume we'll be traveling by air? Yes. Virion answered. The nearest teleportation gate is in Backbend City, and the train line hasn't been completed yet. Fortunately, the castle's current location is relatively close to the wall. Arthur nodded before turning towards Sylvie. Do you think you'll be able to carry Ellie while she's holding Boo? If the journey isn't too long, I should be able to manage. Sylvie replied. Nearby, Gavik suddenly looked surprised. Wait, the little girl and her bear cub are coming with us? We're heading towards a massive army of mana beasts. Arthur's expression immediately hardened. She's an adept conjurer who will be valuable to the defense effort. And since when was it acceptable to refer to a general's sister as a little girl? Gavik's eyes widened. My apologies, General Arthur. I didn't realize she was your sister. Before the awkward silence could continue, one of the elderly council members patted Gavik on the shoulder. Relax, lad. The old man laughed. Gavik has a daughter about Ellie's age. He's simply concerned. Meanwhile, Queen Priscilla gently placed both hands on Ellie's shoulders. Your talents will be a great support to our troops at the wall. Thank you, Queen Priscilla. Ellie replied shyly. Nearby, Prince Blaine stepped forward and shook Arthur's hand. Take care of our soldiers out there. I will, Arthur replied confidently. Virion then raised his voice. Everyone, prepare for departure. As Arthur stepped forward, a voice called out from behind him. Arthur. Turning around, he saw Queen Muriel approaching. Tesha isn't currently stationed at the wall, she said softly. But on the off chance that you happen to run into her, I made some of her favorite sweets. I would greatly appreciate it if you could give them to her. Arthur accepted the small bag with a warm smile. Of course. Muriel smiled gently. You don't have to go out of your way, but somehow the two of you always seem to find your way back to each other. At that moment, Sylvie transformed into her dragon form. The sudden appearance of the majestic dragon drew everyone's attention. It seems they're ready to leave, Muriel remarked. Arthur's gaze shifted towards Sylvie. Ellie was already climbing onto the dragon's back while carefully holding Boo. The elderly council member chuckled cheerfully. Good luck, lad. Arthur looked towards Virion one final time, silently asking for permission to depart. Virion simply nodded. Arthur stepped forward. Wind mana gathered around his feet as he approached the edge of the floating dock. Looking down, he couldn't help but think, sometimes I forget just how high the castle is above the ground. Behind him, Sylvie carefully secured Ellie and Boo on her back. Ellie gripped Sylvie tightly, though her body still trembled slightly. Arthur noticed immediately. You sure you want to leave all this comfort and beauty behind for war? He asked. It's not too late to change your mind. Ellie shook her head firmly. You can't convince me, brother. I've already made up my mind. She paused before adding. Though, I am a little nervous about flying for the first time. Arthur laughed. Then make sure you hold on tightly. Sylvie lowered her head towards Ellie. I won't drop you. She then glanced at Boo. And I won't drop either of you. A determined smile appeared on Arthur's face. Raising his hand, he shouted. Let's move out! Without hesitation, he leapt from the edge of the dock. Powerful currents of wind mana surged around him, allowing him to fly through the air. Moments later, the soldiers followed, mounting their flying beasts and soaring into the sky alongside him. Together, they departed from the castle and began their journey towards the wall, where the approaching horde of corrupted mana beasts awaited them. Several hours later, Ellie had fallen asleep while riding on Sylvie's back in her dragon form. She was holding on tightly, her eyes closed as she rested during the long journey. Meanwhile, Boo had also drifted off to sleep, curled up comfortably in one of Sylvie's large claws. As they continued flying through the sky, Arthur glanced towards Sylvie. It's been a few hours now. How are you holding up? He asked through their mental connection. Sylvie replied with a hint of amusement. It seems that despite all of my magical and physical abilities, I wasn't designed to be an efficient mode of transportation. One of the soldiers riding a flying mount nearby waved a colored cloth towards Arthur, signaling something to him. Arthur looked over, immediately understanding the message. We're almost there, he told Sylvie through their mental link. You'll be able to rest once we land. Sylvie was silent for a moment before asking, Are you ready for the battlefield again? As they flew past the icy mountain range, Arthur considered the question carefully. Honestly, he replied, I'm not sure what to expect. I've spent the past 2 months sparring with the same 5 mages. A faint smile appeared on his face. In a way, beasts are much more unpredictable than people. At that moment, a blast of freezing air swept past them. The icy mist soaked both Ellie and Boo. Boo suddenly woke up with a confused growl, blinking as droplets of water dripped from his fur. Ellie also woke with a start, shivering slightly as she realized she was completely damp. Seeing their reactions, Arthur couldn't help laughing. Sylvie then spoke again. Arthur, look down. Arthur shifted his gaze towards the ground far below. His eyes widened. A massive horde of mana beasts was charging across the landscape at terrifying speed. The sight instantly reminded him of Officer Strigen's report. Our best estimate places the horde's size at somewhere close to 20,000 beasts. As Arthur flew above the advancing army, he carefully observed the creatures below. The majority appeared to be between D-class and B-class. Nearby, the soldiers exchanged signals with one another while maintaining formation. Arthur's thoughts drifted back to the rest of the officers' briefing. But several A-class and even some S-class mana beasts have also been spotted. At the time, Arthur had immediately questioned the report. How many S-class beasts? Officer Strigen had answered grimly. We weren't able to get close enough for an exact count because of the Alacrian mages accompanying them, but we're certain there are at least a dozen. Arthur had stared at him in disbelief. A dozen corrupted S-class mana beasts? Back in the present, Ellie looked down at the horde and gasped in shock. The seemingly endless sea of monsters stretched across the land below. Sylvie glanced towards Arthur. You're smiling, she noted curiously. A confident smirk appeared on Arthur Lewin's face as he continued staring at the approaching army. Inside the walls, people were busy with their daily routines, while countless conversations and chatter echoed throughout the area. As the soldiers stationed on the walls passed by, they spoke amongst themselves, and the sight of the senior captain and senior officers quickly drew everyone's attention. When they suddenly stopped, one of the officers looked up and said, Here they come. A moment later, Arthur Lewin arrived alongside Sylvie, Ellie, and the rest of their team. The powerful beating of the dragon's wings and the flying mounts created strong gusts of wind, forcing the people below to brace themselves as the group descended. They soon landed on the ground in front of the senior captain and senior officers. One of the senior officers immediately stepped forward and saluted General Arthur Lewin. Arthur walked forward and exchanged a firm handshake with Senior Captain Flamesworth. Meanwhile, behind him, Ellie carefully dismounted from Sylvie and stepped onto the ground. Sylvie then shifted into her human form. Meanwhile, Arthur Lewin continued greeting the senior officers, shaking hands with each of them. I didn't think I'd have the pleasure of meeting you all again so soon, Arthur said with a smile. As he spoke, he noticed Sylvie standing nearby. Through their mental connection, he said, You shouldn't have stayed in your draconic form, Sylvie. They're staring at you, not me. Arthur could hear the murmurs spreading through the crowd. Is that the lance they sent to fight for us? One person asked in disappointment. He looks so young, another remarked. Hearing the growing gossip, Arthur quickly channeled mana into his voice, allowing everyone nearby to hear him clearly. He let out a light laugh before calling out, People of the wall! The crowd immediately fell silent and turned their attention towards him. The wall itself is an impressive fortress built for the sole purpose of defending our homes, Arthur declared proudly. But the soldiers stationed here are among the strongest in the kingdom, and they are even more impressive than the fortress itself. He paused briefly before continuing. My presence may prove unnecessary. Even so, I hope to expedite our victory with as little loss to our forces as possible. The crowd erupted into cheers. The uncertainty that had lingered moments ago was replaced by confidence and excitement. Arthur then turned towards Captain Albinth. My younger sister would like to contribute to this battle. Her skills as a magical archer should be of use to your bulwark division. If you'd like to test her. Before he could finish, Captain Albinth raised a hand. No need for that, General. Ellie looked at her brother curiously. Captain Albinth continued. Lance's word is more than enough for me and my men. Holding the pendant on her hand, Ellie turned to Arthur. I don't need a babysitter. I still have the pendant you gave me. Arthur smiled. Extra precautions won't hurt. At that moment, a nearby soldier approached after being summoned by Captain Albinth. Stella, the captain said. This is General Arthur's younger sister. The soldier bowed respectfully. Ellie returned the gesture. Eleanor Lewin. Captain Albinth nodded before addressing Stella once more. I'm leaving her in your direct care. Make sure she's properly equipped before taking her to the top level. Yes, Captain. Stella replied immediately. She stepped forward and gestured politely. Please follow me, Lady Eleanor. As Ellie departed with Stella, Arthur watched them leave before turning back to Captain Albinth. My apologies for asking one of your soldiers to guard my sister like this. I thought the wall would be a safe place for her to begin her service. Normally, I would agree with you, Captain Albinth replied. The officers began walking together along the battlements. But with the size and strength of the beast army approaching, I can't say that for certain anymore. The scene shifted to the meeting room. Senior Captain Flamesworth stood at the head of the table, leading the discussion alongside the other captains. Let's review our current troop distribution before we dive into battle strategy and tactics, he said. A large map was spread across the table. Flamesworth pointed towards it as he explained. Each large marker represents 1,000 troops, while each small marker represents 100. Using a pointer, he moved several markers across the map for emphasis. Not including the freelance adventurers, we have just under 2,000 soldiers from the Bulwark Division mobilized. Captain Jesmia? Captain Jesmia stepped forward and adjusted one of the large markers. One of my scouting units returned only a few minutes before General Arthur arrived, he reported. Their leader will be joining us shortly to deliver a full report. Flamesworth nodded. I expect we'll see an influx of adventurers as news of this horde spreads. However, their numbers won't significantly affect any plans we make here. He then turned to Arthur. Commander Virion has often praised your strategic acumen. Would you care to offer a plan of action? Arthur shook his head. I'm unfamiliar with the inner workings of the wall and its personnel. I think it would be best if you took charge, though I may offer a few suggestions here and there. Noted, Flamesworth replied. Then let's proceed. Arthur observed the senior captain carefully. While he held little fondness for the man who had cast Jasmine aside, Arthur had to admit that Trodius's efficient and ruthless nature was well suited to a position of authority. The basic premise of the plan was simple: kill as many corrupted beasts as possible before they reached the wall. That meant several units would be sent out as cannon fodder, operating beyond the range of the mages stationed on the wall. Flamesworth continued moving markers across the map. Our greatest advantage against the approaching enemy is that we possess strategy rather than overwhelming numbers. There are only a handful of Alacrian mages directing the horde. He pointed to several positions on the map. While we send a steady stream of soldiers and augmenters from the Bulwark Division to impede the enemy's advance, 2 units from the Trailblazer Division will move out early and position themselves on both flanks. His pointer traced 3 converging paths. With concentrated attacks coming from 3 directions, by the time the beast horde reaches the wall, our conjurers, with General Arthur's assistance, should be able to eliminate the remaining forces. Arthur listened silently, one hand resting on his chin in thought. At that moment, Sylvie's voice echoed through their mental connection. Something feels off. While the lives of the soldiers being sent beyond the wall aren't cheap, the plan itself seems reasonable, Arthur replied. No, Sylvie answered. That's not it. Arthur tapped his finger lightly against the table. Captain Flamesworth noticed. General Arthur? Is something the matter? Arthur looked up. My apologies. I was simply thinking, if you're dissatisfied with the plan I propose. Arthur interrupted him. Whether this is a good strategy or a bad one, I'm not entirely certain yet. However, I have a feeling that this attack will most likely be their last on this front. Captain Albinth frowned. What do you mean? Arthur pointed towards the map. The Alacrians have been sending a steady stream of corrupted beasts towards the wall. While effective, it isn't a sustainable long-term strategy. He turned towards Captain Jesmia. You stated that your troops have cleared out most of the dungeons the Alacrians were using to conceal their teleportation gates, correct? Yes. Jesmia replied. Arthur nodded thoughtfully. We quickly discovered that the Alacrian teleportation gates within the Beast Glades were severely limited in the number of times they could be used. Even some of the more stable gates discovered by the Trailblazer Division were considered too unstable for safe travel. His expression darkened. The fact that the Alacrians must gamble every time they send troops into Dicathan speaks volumes about the ruthlessness of their leaders, Arthur continued. With only a few gates available for the Alacrians to slip into Dicathan, it will be nearly impossible for those who have already crossed into the Beast Glades to receive supplies. One of the captains nodded. Considering how untamed those lands are, they'll be busy just trying to survive once their supplies run out. Arthur agreed. Exactly. Which is why I believe they may be committing everything they have to this final attack. Captain Flamesworth's expression grew serious. Not that I disagree with you, General Arthur, but how does that change our current predicament? Arthur met his gaze. It means we may need to rethink our plan of sacrificing soldiers in order to keep the wall completely intact. Captain Albinth immediately spoke up. If it means not having to send my soldiers in a single-file line to their deaths, then I'm all ears, General. As am I. Captain Jesmia added. Captain Flamesworth raised a hand. A moment, please. Narrowing his eyes, he folded his hands together. While I am fully in favor of preserving as many of our men as possible, I prefer a plan that isn't based solely on a feeling. Arthur nodded. Fair enough. This is speculation on my part as well. However, my stance remains the same. Keeping our soldiers alive is imperative. We need to remain flexible. Having experienced soldiers that we can divide and reallocate in future battles will be far more valuable than an immovable wall. Flamesworth frowned. We would be risking a vital structure in the defense of both Sapin and Elenwar. If the wall is left in ruins, what happens when an Alacrian army attacks shortly after the beast horde? Arthur answered calmly. Would a fortified wall hold off enemy mages better than our own mages could? The room fell silent. Captain, I'm not suggesting that we simply abandon the wall. I'm suggesting that we sacrifice parts of our fortress instead of sacrificing our men. Captain Flamesworth remained silent for a moment, carefully considering Arthur's words. Finally, he picked up his pointer and handed it to Arthur. Please continue. Arthur accepted it and stepped towards the map. Using the pointer to indicate several locations, he said, So, here's what I have in mind. The scene shifted to the forest, where the sounds of battle still echoed through the air. One of the Alacrians was engaged in combat with an elven soldier. Blocking the elf's sword, the Alacrian shoved him backwards before thrusting his spear forward, slicing across the elf's shoulder. The elven soldier collapsed to the ground and died. After the battle, one of the Alacrians sat down beside a tree, breathing heavily as he tried to catch his breath. However, Circe immediately spoke up. No time to rest. Put up a barrier as wide as you can, then help me throw these bodies into that ditch over there. One of the Alacrians tossed the bag towards her. Patch up Fane. Circe caught the bag and turned towards Fane. An arrow was lodged deep in his shoulder. Before she could react, Fane grabbed the shaft and yanked the arrow free. Blood immediately began flowing from the wound. Wait. Slow down, Circe said, quickly pulling out bandages and medical supplies. She pressed the cloth against the wound to stop the bleeding. Fane sat down with a grimace. Hurry before I bleed out. As Circe applied medicine to the injury, Fane continued speaking. We've been on the run for days because of your little stunt at the stream. Do you understand how reckless that was? By putting the elves on our trail, our chances of surviving this mission have become that much lower. Meanwhile, the other Alacrians gathered the bodies of the fallen elven soldiers and searched for a place to conceal them. Fane looked at Circe. You're not the only one who's tried. We all want to get home. Behind them, the other Alacrians finished hiding the bodies amongst the undergrowth and loose earth. Suddenly, Circe's eyes widened. She had sensed something. The Alacrian girl noticed her expression. What is it? Circe quickly turned towards the forest. Two more figures are approaching. They're moving cautiously. Behind him, Fane gripped his spear and rose to his feet. One of the Alacrians glanced nervously at the girl. The barrier won't be enough to hide us if they've already detected traces of our magic. Fane stepped forward. Go. The others immediately understood what he meant. The Alacrian girl waved her hand at the remaining soldiers. Come on. Without hesitation, they began moving in a different direction. Circe stared at Fane. Wait. What? What are you going to do? The Alacrian girl answered for him. Fane is the only one fast enough to stay ahead of them. He's going to lead them away and give us a chance to escape. Fane continued walking forward without looking back. The scene shifted to the El's higher forest, where the Alacrians climbed a massive tree, trying to remain hidden among its thick branches. As Circe climbed higher, her footing suddenly slipped. She lost her balance and nearly fell from the tree, but Maeve quickly reached out from a nearby branch and grabbed her hand. With a firm pull, Maeve helped Circe back onto the branch. From a higher branch, Cole looked down at her and asked, Can you use True Sense yet? Circe closed her eyes and replied, I'm on it. She activated her True Sense. After a few moments, she opened her eyes with a relieved smile. We're almost there, just a couple more days. Maeve, sitting beside her on the branch, removed the mask covering her face and sighed. Look, Circe. Before she could continue, Circe quickly raised her hand, signaling everyone to stay silent. Moments later, they heard hurried footsteps approaching. Captain Albold emerged from the forest, scanning the area carefully. One of his subordinates spoke up. We should head back, Albold. We've already strayed far beyond our survey route. We're miles away from the last sighting. Are you sure you heard something? It wasn't exactly a sound, Albold replied. More like an inkling. The subordinate chuckled and waved his hand. I swear, if you weren't a chaffer, I would have already left. Maybe we should signal General Aya. Albold narrowed his eyes. No. We just need to catch that one damned Alacrian. Once we do, we'll get information on the others. Hidden high in the tree, the Alacrian smiled to himself. Fane is alive. Meanwhile, Albold's subordinate continued searching the forest. But how the hell did he manage to make it this far north? Watching from above, Circe silently prayed. Please, just keep walking. Suddenly, Albold stopped. His eyes shifted toward the tree. His expression hardened with fury. He had found them. The moment their hiding place was exposed, the battle erupted. Circe immediately turned and sprinted away as fast as she could, gritting her teeth in panic. Behind her, Maeve and Cole held off the pursuing elves. Arrows rained toward them, but Cole raised a powerful barrier to block the attacks while Maeve unleashed blazing flames at their enemies. Their only goal was to buy Circe enough time to complete the mission. Breathing heavily, Circe ran as fast as she could. Maeve. Cole, please make it out safely. Eventually, she reached the first destination. Dropping to her knees, she dug a small hole beside a tree and whispered to herself. You're okay, Circe. You're doing great. She bit down on her thumb until blood flowed. I have to survive. For your brother, for Seth. Using her blood as the medium, she amplified the mana flowing through the array. A massive magic circle spread across the tree. She hurried to another tree and repeated the process. Suddenly, she heard rustling nearby. Her eyes widened in panic, but after waiting a moment, she calmed herself. It's nothing. If someone were here, they would have killed me already. She continued running toward the next location. Almost there. I'm a sentry, respected and valuable, but nearly defenseless compared to strikers like Fane, casters like Maeve, and even shields like Cole. Have they already gone ahead of me into the afterlife? As more blood dripped from her fingers. She completed another array. Cole would have been the first to fall, protecting Maeve and Fane. Without him, Maeve would have been next. Her fingers trembled as she whispered. Blood, honor me. Light, guide me. Vritra, protect me. Once the final array was complete, another rustling sound echoed through the forest. Circe quickly hid behind a nearby tree. A wounded figure stepped into view. It was Fane, leaning on his spear. Looking at Circe, he gave a tired smile. You look like shit. Circe's eyes widened. Fane! She rushed toward him, intending to hug him, but Fane immediately stopped her with one hand. What are you? Quiet, Circe. His expression suddenly turned serious as he sensed a powerful presence approaching. There's no time. Can you still run? Circe swallowed nervously. I think so. Fane gently pushed her away. Then run. He turned around and spun his spear into a ready stance. I'll hold him off. With tears forming in her eyes, Circe gave him one last look before forcing herself to run. Moments later, Captain Albold charged through the forest, gripping a sword in each hand. Just as he reached the clearing, he stopped. Standing before him was Fane. With a powerful swing of his spear, Fane unleashed a violent shockwave that rushed toward Albold. Albold crossed both of his blades and blocked the incoming strike, the impact sending a powerful gust through the forest as the battle between the two warriors began. The scene shifted to the wall, where Arthur Lewin was sparring with the soldiers. With a single, swift swing of his sword, Arthur remained standing calmly in place, one hand resting behind his back. The force of his strike knocked the soldier's sword from his grip, sending it clattering onto the ground. Arthur lowered his blade and said calmly, Your movements are too stiff. You need to loosen your shoulders and wrists until the very last moment of your swing. If you can't do that, then the sword you're using is too heavy for you. The soldier steadied himself after the impact, then bowed respectfully. Thank you for the advice, General. Arthur nodded before calling out. Next. Another soldier stepped forward, gripping two practice swords as he prepared to spar. At that moment, Sylvie arrived. Through their mental connection, she said, I thought you said you were going to get some rest before setting out. Arthur glanced at her and replied mentally. I couldn't fall asleep, so I figured I'd warm up my body while training a few soldiers. He then asked, How was your trip to the top of the wall? Is Ellie doing okay? Arthur raised a hand, signaling the approaching soldier to wait. The soldier immediately stopped, surprised. Sylvie answered through their bond. She's adjusting pretty well. She was practicing her archery from the edge of the wall with the other soldiers. One of them looked about her age. Arthur sighed. The soldiers are getting younger and younger. Just then, Captain Gavik stepped forward and bowed respectfully. General, Captain Albin and his troop are busy tearing down most of the support beams holding up the underground passages. Captain Jesmia is repositioning her troops near both ends of the wall. But, is it really necessary for you and Lady Sylvie to go alone? Arthur looked at him seriously. Listen. I know Commander Virion sent you here to assist with the wall's defense, but I doubt he intended for you to fight beside me. Stay here and continue your duties. Captain Gavik exchanged nervous glances with the other captains before bowing once more. Yes, sir. After they departed, Sylvie said through their mental connection, We could have used their help. They seemed really determined to come with us. Arthur signaled for the waiting soldier to continue the sparring match as the soldier stepped forward with a confident smile. Mentally, Arthur replied, Gavik has a daughter who looks about my age, maybe even younger, if the picture in his pendant is recent. Sylvie folded her arms with a teasing smile. And here I was thinking how cold my bond has been toward these poor soldiers. Arthur smiled faintly. It seems you're getting better at keeping your thoughts from leaking into mine. Pointing his sword toward the waiting soldier, Arthur answered through their bond. A man has to be able to keep a few secrets. Just then, a familiar voice called out from behind him. Mind if I have a go? Arthur instantly recognized the voice and turned around. Standing before him was Tesha. Sylvie immediately ran over and wrapped her in a warm hug. Tesha blinked in surprise, not recognizing her at first. We missed you. Still stunned, Tesha looked at her carefully. Sylvie? Arthur dismissed the waiting soldiers with a wave of his hand while Tesha gently held Sylvie's hands. My bond always had a deep fondness for Tesha, Arthur thought. She even called her mama at one point. Smiling brightly, Sylvie asked, "How did you know it was me?" Tasha smiled warmly and knelt slightly. "I'd recognize you anywhere." Arthur quietly watched the two. Tasha was still trying to process the fact that the little fox she once knew had grown into a human. Tasha and her team had arrived at the wall an hour earlier after being withdrawn from the beast glades ahead of the approaching horde. Sylvie's smile softened. "I'm really happy to see you. I just wish it were under better circumstances." Tasha gently placed a hand on Sylvie's head. "I feel the same. But I'm glad I got to see both of you anyway." She smiled warmly. "I still can't get over how cute and pretty you look in this form. Just look at those ears." Sylvie blushed before glancing at Arthur. Through their mental connection, she said, "When we were in Epheotis, my grandmother always told me I'd grow up to be a very pretty dragon." Arthur chuckled. "I'm not sure most people would describe a 20-foot pitch black dragon with glowing yellow eyes as pretty." Watching the two silently communicate, Tasha smiled. "Is this how you always talk inside your heads?" Sylvie grinned mischievously. "We were getting along quite maturely until you showed up, Tasha. Your presence must be affecting Arthur." Tasha covered her mouth and laughed. Arthur reached over and pinched Sylvie's cheek. "And there's that snarky little attitude I've missed so much." Sylvie stuck out her tongue at him playfully. Still smiling, Tasha gently held Sylvie's hand. "Hey, Sylvie, as much as I've enjoyed chatting with you." She looked toward Arthur. "Do you mind if I borrow Arthur for a little while?" Arthur lay in and Tasha smiled gently as they waved goodbye to Sylvie. "See you later," they said in unison. Sylvie smiled back and waved her hand. "Try to have some fun while you're with her, Arthur," she said through their mental connection. "Don't think about everything else for a little while." On the other side, Tasha glanced at Sylvie before looking at Arthur with a soft smile. "It's surprisingly easy to get used to Sylvie in that form." Then, with a charming smile, she asked, "Well, shall we be off?" Arthur smiled politely and bowed his head slightly. "After you, princess." As they walked side by side through the bustling market, Arthur couldn't help but think how strange it felt to be strolling peacefully with Tasha. They stopped at one of the market stalls. The owner immediately recognized Tasha and greeted her warmly. "What a pleasant surprise! Our stall is closed for the day, but we'd love to have you visit again." Tasha smiled brightly. "Of course. I'll stop by once the battle is over. Just make sure to save me some of the fish snacks." Arthur remained silent as his thoughts drifted. It almost felt as though there wasn't a battle against thousands of monstrous beasts waiting just beyond the horizon the very next day. Suddenly, a young girl came running toward Tasha. "Lady Tasha! You're finally here!" she called excitedly. "My master has finished a new set of armor she's been working on for you." Arthur stood quietly beside Tasha, observing the scene. It was a rare feeling, the simple comfort of standing beside someone he had spent so many years of this life with. Tasha knelt down, gently placed a hand on the girl's head, and smiled warmly. "Oh, please tell Senya that I'll come visit her later tonight. Thank you for delivering the message, Nat." Nat saluted confidently. "Understood." With a cheerful smile, Nat turned around and ran back toward her master's workshop. Arthur and Tasha waved goodbye as she disappeared into the crowd. For the first time in a long while, Arthur's thoughts weren't consumed by his responsibilities as a lance and a general. The role he had accepted for the sake of Dicathan had slowly begun turning him back into the man he had been in his previous life. But now, this world held people he truly cared about, and somehow, that only made everything even harder. Seeing Tasha laugh so freely, Arthur couldn't help but smile. She looked so cute, he thought. Noticing his gaze, Tasha tilted her head and looked at him with a playful smile. "What?" she teased. "Has being apart for so long finally made you realize how pretty your childhood best friend is?" Arthur met her eyes and smiled. "Actually, yes." Tasha froze for a moment. Her cheeks flushed a deep shade of red as she looked away, caught completely off guard by his honest answer. "I see," she replied nervously. "Well, it's good that you know now." Arthur simply smiled, though his thoughts remained elsewhere. "I have to become stronger. I can't afford to make another mistake, if I want to keep everyone alive." Trying to lighten the mood, Tasha stepped ahead and pointed toward a nearby food stall. "Hey! There's a barbecue stand over there that I've always wanted to try. It looks like they're still open." Arthur rubbed the back of his head awkwardly without saying a word. Seeing his hesitation, Tasha grabbed his hand and pulled him along with an excited grin. "Come on." Moments later, the two arrived at the barbecue stall. Tasha happily took a bite of a grilled skewer, her eyes sparkling with delight. "This is way better than the food at Cyrus." Arthur chuckled as he noticed a bit of sauce on the corner of her mouth. Reaching out with a handkerchief, he gently wiped it away. Tasha blinked in surprise. "Hey!" Arthur smiled teasingly. "Were you saving that for later?" Pouting slightly, Tasha quickly finished her skewer before glancing at the untouched one in Arthur's hand. "If you're not going to eat that." Before she could snatch it, Arthur swiftly moved the skewer out of her reach. "You wish." Tasha folded her arms and pouted. "As expected of a lance." Arthur raised an eyebrow, still holding the barbecue skewer. "Of course. It's imperative for a lance to learn how to defend his food from treacherous allies." After a brief pause, he laughed softly. Fine, here. He held one of the skewers out toward her. Without warning, Tesha leaned forward and took a big bite directly from the skewer while Arthur was still holding it. Arthur's eyes widened in surprise as he stared at her. Tesha simply smiled, looking thoroughly pleased with herself. As the sun slowly began to set, Arthur and Tesha continued walking side by side through the market. I'll have to take Ellie there later, Arthur said. Tesha looked at him in surprise. Oh? Ellie's here? Arthur nodded. Yes. She's on the highest level of the shelter. Once the training is finished, she should be safe up there. He folded his arms thoughtfully before adding. And my parents are in Black Bend right now, so I don't have to worry about them. Tesha glanced at him with a gentle smile. You've really thought of everything, haven't you? Just then, her eyes landed on another market stall. Oh! She exclaimed excitedly. Korea loves those. I'll be right back, okay? Arthur smiled. Yes, ma'am. Watching her hurry off, Arthur let out a quiet breath and smiled to himself. A nearby shopkeeper noticed him. Excuse me, sir. Do you see anything you like? Arthur walked over to the small shop and looked over the items before pointing to one. I'd like to purchase this. The shop was run by an elderly woman and her young son. The moment they recognized Arthur as one of Dicathan's generals, the old woman smiled warmly. Please, General. Take it. It's on the house. Arthur shook his head politely. No, thank you. I'd like to pay for it. It's a gift, you see, and I'd feel better if I bought it myself. The young boy pointed toward Tesha in the distance. Is it for that pretty lady over there with the silver? Before he could finish, his mother lightly smacked him on the head, silencing him. We're honored to have your business, General Arthur. Arthur smiled awkwardly, paid for the gift, and walked back toward Tesha. As soon as he left, the old woman and her son looked down at the payment. Their eyes widened. A gold coin? Meanwhile, Tesha was happily eating a bag of wonton chips when she noticed Arthur approaching. Do you want some too? She asked between bites. Arthur raised an eyebrow. What happened to buying some for Korea? I did, Tesha replied with a grin. Hers are already in my dimensional ring. Arthur chuckled before reaching into his storage ring. Actually, I have something for you. Curious, Tesha watched as Arthur pulled out a small bag of candy. Your mother asked me to give this to you if I happened to see you, he said. Tesha stared at the candy in surprise. Is this? Arthur nodded. She said it's your favorite. Carefully taking the bag from him, Tesha's eyes lit up with joy. Oh my gosh! Thank you for bringing this to me. After a brief moment of silence, Arthur asked, when do you leave for your next mission? Tesha looked at him. Later tonight. Arthur turned his gaze away, rubbing the back of his neck before shyly raising a hand toward her. There's a place I'd like to show you before you leave. He hesitated for a moment before asking. Is that all right? Tesha looked at him in surprise. Then, with a warm smile, she gently reached out and placed her hand in his. Arthur led Tesha to the top of the wall, where a quiet cliff overlooked the vast beast glades. As they stood side by side, the evening breeze brushed past them while the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tesha gazed at the breathtaking scenery, her emerald eyes shining with wonder. The view from here is even better than the one from the castle, she said with an amazed smile. Seeing the genuine happiness on her face, Arthur couldn't help but smile as well. After a moment of comfortable silence, Tesha turned to him. I wanted to say this earlier, she said softly. But it's been a while, Arthur. Arthur cleared his throat awkwardly. So, where are you heading for your next mission? Tesha brushed a strand of silver hair behind her ear. Elenwar. They're sending my unit along with several other elves from the Trailblazer division. Because of the recent Alacrian attacks? Arthur asked. She nodded. Yeah. Walking to the edge of the cliff, Tesha sat down and looked out across the forest. Captain Jesmia is providing support since our scouts confirmed several sightings of Alacrian stragglers throughout the woods. Arthur remained standing for a moment before speaking. The captain had a difficult decision to make, especially with the beast horde approaching. He slowly sat down beside her. Even so, I'm glad you won't be here for this battle. Tesha looked at him in surprise before smiling teasingly. Your loss. She puffed out her chest proudly. Even if I'm still no match for a lance, I recently broke through to the mid-silver stage. Arthur smiled warmly. Congratulations. You truly earned it. Folding her arms, Tesha looked at him with a playful pout. I wonder when the mighty General Arthur, who is actually younger than me, will finally start treating me like someone who can take care of herself. Arthur quickly raised his hands in surrender. I know you can take care of yourself. I'm sorry if that came out the wrong way. Rubbing the side of his cheek awkwardly, he continued. Spending time with you today made me realize just how much you've changed. Tesha smiled cheerfully. Am I supposed to take that as a compliment? Arthur nodded. What I mean is, you have a different aura now. I'm not talking about your mana, although your core has improved, but... His words faded away. This feeling. How long have I liked Tesha? Tesha tilted her head curiously. Like what? Arthur remained silent. How would she feel if she knew my secret? Would she react the same way my parents did? With disgust? With betrayal? When no answer came, Tesha laughed softly. Looks like the mighty lance has finally run out of words. She smiled warmly. Still, thank you for bringing me here. I've always thought of the Beast Glades as nothing but a dangerous, blood-soaked place. She looked back toward the horizon. I never realized it could be this beautiful. Arthur watched her quietly before smiling. I've always loved this view, but this place is tied to a painful memory. He looked out across the sunset. So, I thought coming here with you might help replace it with a better one. It doesn't matter how I feel, Arthur thought. I should bury these feelings, lock them away until they disappear. Don't be selfish. Tesha looked at him gently. Has it? It'll be better for both of us, Arthur continued to think. Has it made the memory better? Tesha asked softly. The two sat quietly beside each other, their hands only inches apart. After a long silence, Arthur slowly reached out. His fingers gently found hers. Tesha looked down in surprise but didn't pull away. Arthur carefully placed a delicate necklace into her hand. This is for you. Tesha stared at the necklace as it caught the warm light of the setting sun. Her eyes sparkled. It's so beautiful. She smiled brightly before teasing him. Is this a reward for the wonderful tour I gave you today? Arthur's face turned slightly red. No. He took a quiet breath. It's because I like you? Tesha froze. Her cheeks flushed crimson as she stared at him in stunned silence. Then, with a nervous laugh, she gently leaned her shoulder against his. I'm sorry. I think I must have misheard you. I could have sworn you said. Before she could finish, Arthur spoke again, his voice firm despite the nervousness in his eyes. I love you, Tesha. Tesha's heart skipped a beat. Blushing even deeper, she asked in a trembling voice. What do you mean by love? Do you mean, as a friend? Like family? Or… Before she could finish, Arthur gently held both of her hands. Their eyes met. With complete sincerity, he said, I love you, Tesha Aerolith. As Arthur finally confessed his love to Tesha, she froze in surprise, her cheeks turning bright red. Blushing shyly, she looked at him in disbelief. Holding both of her hands, Arthur gazed into her eyes and said, I hope you feel the same way about me. Maybe we can start a relationship. Together. Tesha could hardly believe what she had just heard. You're lying, she whispered. Arthur smiled nervously. I'm not. Then he asked softly, Do you want me to be? Tesha quickly shook her head. No. I don't know. It's just… I always imagined things would happen differently between us. Pouting slightly, she looked at him and said, I thought I'd have to become stronger, prettier, and older to impress you and sweep you off your feet. Arthur chuckled warmly. Can I still look forward to you sweeping me off my feet? Embarrassed, Tesha gently pushed him on the chest. Oh, be quiet before I sweep you right off this mountainside. She then took out the necklace Arthur had given her earlier and held it in her hands. Can you help me put this on? She asked. Arthur carefully unclasped the necklace and fastened it around Tesha's neck. Here, he said with a smile. Half for you, half for me. Using her plant magic, Tesha summoned a small magical vine and carefully shaped it into another necklace. Arthur watched in amazement as she skillfully wove the vine into a perfect chain. She attached the other half of the necklace to it before handing it to Arthur. Turn around, she said. And bend down a little, you're too tall. Arthur blushed in surprise and did as she asked. As she gently placed the necklace around his neck, Tesha wrapped her arms around him from behind and softly whispered, I love you too, idiot. She held him a little tighter before continuing. But we're at war. We both have responsibilities and people who are counting on us. Arthur turned to face her and nodded. I know. And there's something else I want us to promise. Tesha tilted her head. What kind of promise? Arthur took both of her hands again and looked into her eyes. A promise to stay alive, so that we can have a future together. A relationship, a family. Tears filled Tesha's eyes as a bright smile spread across her face. Arthur. I promise. Overcome with emotion, Arthur softly called her name. Tesha. At that very moment, Arthur's expression suddenly changed. A terrifying feeling washed over him. He immediately stood up and stared toward the distant horizon. What's happening? He muttered. It's too soon. The reports were wrong. They can't be only a few hours away. Using his enhanced senses and soul power, Arthur looked far into the distance. His face grew pale as he saw countless enemies approaching. The beast horde, he said grimly. It will arrive by dawn. Meanwhile, in the forest of Circe continued running as magical attacks rained down behind her. She narrowly dodged each one without looking back. Her body was covered in wounds, but she forced herself to keep moving despite her growing fear. At the same time, Fane was holding off Albold. He blocked several of Albold's attacks, but Albold seized an opening and sliced off one of Fane's arms with his blade. From a distance, Albold's subordinate kept aiming magical arrows at Circe. Another glowing arrow shot through the air, flying straight toward her. Circe continued running without turning around, determined to reach the final array. Just as the arrow was about to strike her, Circe sensed the danger and glanced back. Before it could hit her, the badly wounded Fane suddenly appeared in front of her and split the magical arrow in half with his spear. Even after losing an arm, Fane shouted, "Idiot! Didn't I tell you to keep running?" Seeing Fane covered in blood, Circe stared at him in horror. "Fane, your arm!" Blood continued pouring from his shoulder, but Fane remained calm. "I don't need it to protect you. Focus everything you have on the final array. Finish it, and our mission will be a success. Can you do that?" With trembling determination, Circe nodded. "I can." At that moment, Albold rushed forward with his sword raised. Fane spun his spear and prepared to stop him once again. Meanwhile, Circe hurried ahead and began creating the final array. As she worked, worried thoughts filled her mind. If the elf is still alive, then Maeve and Cole have met their end. Our lives are the light that will guide Alacria to victory. I'll need more blood to strengthen this array. Damn it, it's still not enough. Suddenly, another magical arrow struck Circe in the back. She cried out in pain as blood flowed from the wound. At the same time, Albold unleashed a powerful sword wave that blasted Fane backward. He crashed into a nearby tree close to Circe. "Fane!" Circe cried. Despite his injuries, Fane planted his spear into the ground to keep himself standing. Blood trickled from his mouth as he struggled to speak. "The array." Circe looked at him with tears filling her eyes. Without giving Fane a chance to recover, Albold leaped high into the air for another attack while his subordinate continued aiming magical arrows from afar. Fane stood alone against both enemies. "We've made it this far, but I can't go any farther," Circe thought. "I've had enough. I just want to die." Then the image of her younger brother, Sath, appeared in her mind. But what about Sath? He doesn't want to die. Gathering the last of her strength, Circe forced herself onto her knees and crawled toward the array. "Even if I can't survive, shouldn't he be able to?" "Sath, I don't think I'll ever be able to visit you again." With her final breath, she completed the array. "I hope you can forgive your sister for not being able to make it back home." Using her soul sense, Circe looked into the distance and realized that the mission had finally been completed. Tears rolled down her face. "I'll always keep you in my heart, Sath, forever." But at that very moment, the elf captain appeared high above the battlefield, overlooking the entire scene. Raising a hand, the captain unleashed a devastating wave of energy. The attack slammed directly into Fane, finally bringing him down. Still lying on the ground, Circe smiled weakly. "It worked. Our mission is complete." With her final thoughts, she declared, "Even this cursed forest won't keep you safe anymore. Every sentry will follow this trail and lead our army straight to the heart of your kingdom. The Alacrian army is coming for you." The scene shifted to the wall, where the echo of countless marching footsteps filled the air. Soldiers rushed to their positions with weapons in hand, preparing for the coming battle. Merchants and civilians quickly packed their belongings and moved to safety inside the fortress. Blacksmiths worked tirelessly, forging and sharpening swords as fast as they could. Along the top of the wall, rows of soldiers took their positions with bows drawn, aiming toward the battlefield below. As the sun slowly rose above the mountains, every soldier stood ready. Ellie was also on the wall, quietly reading Arthur Lewin's message. "I will be nearby. Stay safe." After reading it, Ellie sighed softly and stared silently into the distance. Outside the wall, soldiers surrounded the military camp. Inside, Arthur held his cracked sword while examining it. "Despite all its cracks, this sword is still better than any other weapon I've used. But I really wish this damn weapon would manifest already." Sylvie, sitting beside him, looked over and said through their mental connection, "Throwing that metal away now would be a good idea." Just then, the tent flap opened, and a blacksmith entered. "Please excuse the intrusion. Father, I brought the weapon you asked for." Inside the meeting tent, Captain Trotius Flamesworth sat with the other captains. Standing beside her chair, she replied, Come in." Arthur noticed the newcomer. Trotius introduced her. "This is Senior Flamesworth, the master blacksmith here at the wall, and my daughter." Arthur immediately recognized the name. He remembered Tesha mentioning Senior when a young girl had delivered a message to her. "So that little girl's master is Senior Flamesworth." Stepping forward with a gentle smile, Arthur introduced himself. "Arthur Lewin. It's nice to meet you." However, he couldn't help thinking, Tesha seems to have a good relationship with her, but even so, hearing the word daughter come from Trotius's lips still annoys me. Senya respectfully bowed her head. Trotius waved her hand. "You're just in time." Before Senya could speak, Trotius proudly continued. "Senya is one of the finest blacksmiths in Sapin, on par with the master smiths of Darv thanks to her exceptional control over fire attribute mana." Senya presented a sword to Arthur. "I heard from Tesha that you prefer thinner blades." Arthur accepted it and slowly drew the blade from its sheath. "I'm sure it isn't anywhere near as well crafted as your own weapon." Senya smiled politely. "Even so, having a few backup weapons won't hurt." Arthur swung the sword several times. Swoosh! Shink! Slash. After testing its balance, he infused it with lightning mana. Not bad. I think it'll suffice. Senya lowered her eyes and calmly replied. I'm honored. Arthur could sense the disappointment hidden behind her expression. I suppose all the Flamesworths take great pride in their craftsmanship, for better or worse. He sheathed the sword before turning toward Trotius. Have the ground troops ready to advance as soon as I leave. Trotius nodded. I'm aware of the plan, General. As Arthur and Sylvie walked toward the exit, Trotius called out. Don't worry about us. We'll be waiting for your signal. Just come back in one piece. Your presence is what holds this wall together, General. Arthur stepped outside the camp. The bright morning sunlight shone directly into his eyes, forcing him to shield them with his hand. Suddenly, the thunderous voices of thousands of soldiers filled the battlefield. General Arthur! Arthur! General! Their cheers echoed across the wall, their morale soaring at the sight of him. Sylvie spoke through their mental connection. Looks like their morale is high. Arthur suddenly froze. Ignoring Sylvie's voice, his eyes searched the ranks below. Then he saw him. His father. Standing proudly among the soldiers. A wave of horror rushed through Arthur's mind. If father's here, then mother, and the twin horns. His eyes frantically searched the army. They must all be here as well. They were supposed to be in Black Bend City, far away from this battle. Meanwhile, the soldiers continued cheering his name. Sylvie gently tugged on Arthur's sleeve before saying seriously through their mental connection. Arthur, everyone is watching. Arthur clenched his fists. I wanted to run to father right then and there, to demand that he leave. To tell him to take mother and the twin horns away from the wall. He took a deep breath. But I couldn't. Even as a general, I didn't have the heart to stop him. From the army below, Reynolds Lewin saluted his son. He stood tall, completely prepared for battle. Not with that look on his face, Arthur thought. If I tried, he would never forgive me. Arthur slowly returned the salute. Reynolds smiled back, his eyes filled with pride and emotion. Arthur smiled faintly. If everything goes according to plan, most of these soldiers will survive, and Dad is one of the strongest. Sylvie transformed into her dragon form. A powerful aura spread across the battlefield, lifting the spirits of every soldier even higher. But Arthur's heart grew heavier. The true weight of this battle finally sank in. I brought my sister here, my mother, my father, even the twin horns. Using wind magic, Arthur leapt high into the air before landing gracefully on Sylvie's back. Looking down at the countless soldiers gathered beneath him, only one thought remained in his mind. Their lives, the lives of every man and woman defending this wall, depend on me. The scene shifted to a few hours earlier. Arthur Lewin and Tesha stood in the forest when the ground suddenly began to rumble. Thick clouds of smoke rose in the distance, signaling the approach of the beast horde. Arthur turned to Tesha. I'll warn everyone. You need to regroup with your teammates. You have a mission to accomplish. Tesha looked at him with worry. The beast horde is more than a day early, Arthur. The people here aren't prepared for this. I should stay in. Before she could finish, Arthur gently interrupted her. That's why I'm here, Tesha. You have your orders, soldier. Arthur took Tesha's hand. After a brief hesitation, she lowered her gaze and nodded. Okay. I'll gather my team and report to Captain Jesmia before I leave. Arthur placed one hand on her shoulder while still holding her hand. Good. And Tesha, be careful. She smiled softly. That's exactly what I was going to tell you, dummy. Without warning, Tesha leaned forward and kissed Arthur on the lips. Arthur's eyes widened in surprise, and a faint blush appeared across his face. Holding the pendant Arthur had just placed around her neck, Tesha smiled shyly. Remember our promise. The scene shifted back to the present. Arthur rode on Sylvie's back as she soared through the sky in her dragon form. Through their mental connection, Sylvie spoke calmly. Nothing has changed since you decided to bring Ellie along. Arthur remained silent. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped Sylvie's back. She's right. He thought sadly. Despite the beast horde arriving early, all the preparations have already been made. Mother and Ellie both have Phoenix WYRM pendants to protect them. Ellie also has a transmission scroll in case she needs to contact me. After a moment, Arthur spoke through their mental connection. But the timing of everything feels wrong. What are the Alacrians trying to accomplish? Far below them, countless corrupted beasts charged across the battlefield. Sylvie answered firmly. Focus, Arthur. You're about to enter battle. Arthur took a deep breath before letting out a small laugh. Sylvie smiled. Are you ready? Arthur returned the smile. Not as ready as you are. Ahead of them, the Alacrian beast riders roared as their massive mounts trampled everything in their path. Still riding on Sylvie's back, Arthur looked toward the advancing horde. How about we give them a little welcome gift? Sylvie grinned. My thoughts exactly. She opened her mouth and began gathering an enormous sphere of mana. The surrounding air trembled as the energy continued to grow. The giant corrupted beasts below looked up at the dragon in horror, freezing as they sensed the overwhelming power gathering above them. With a deafening roar, Sylvie unleashed a massive blast of mana. The attack crashed into the ground below, creating a devastating explosion that shattered the earth and carved a massive trench across the battlefield. The advancing beast horde was forced to a sudden halt, their path completely cut off. And with that, the battle began. Sylvie unleashed a massive wave of mana that crashed into the front lines of the corrupted mana beast horde. The devastating blast tore through countless beasts, shattering their bodies into pieces that flew across the battlefield. The Alacrian soldiers riding the corrupted beasts were thrown violently to the ground. Yet, instead of retreating in fear, the beast horde only roared even louder. Without the slightest hesitation, they continued charging forward as if nothing had happened. Sylvie continued firing wave after wave of mana from her mouth. Riding on her back in his dragon form, Arthur Lewin narrowed his eyes. Why are those mana beasts so calm? He wondered, focusing on the battlefield. Arthur quickly realized the reason. The Alacrians behind the horde were protecting them with powerful barrier spells, their magical shields blocking much of Sylvie's mana waves. Looks like we won't be able to rain spells down from the comfort of the sky, Arthur said. Sylvie stopped attacking and glanced at him. After you, she said. Arthur smirked before leaping from Sylvie's back at incredible speed. Try to keep up, he said. Surrounded by a powerful aura, Arthur shot toward the battlefield like a meteor. The pressure radiating from his descent sliced through every corrupted beast in his path. The moment he landed, a massive explosion erupted. The ground shattered, leaving behind a deep crater as countless corrupted beasts were torn apart by the impact. The surviving beasts turned toward Arthur with furious roars before charging at him from every direction. Arthur simply smiled. It's been a long time since I've had a real fight. Behind him, Sylvie descended into the battlefield as well, slaughtering corrupted mana beasts with ruthless efficiency. She crushed some beneath her claws, blasted others away with her breath, and swept entire groups aside with a single swing of her powerful tail. Looking toward Arthur, Sylvie grinned. Try to keep up, Arthur chuckled before disappearing in a burst of speed. With a single swing of his blade, he cleaved a massive corrupted beast in half. The remaining beasts roared in rage and rushed toward him without fear. Arthur never slowed down. His sword flashed through the battlefield, carving through the horde with unmatched precision. Heads rolled across the blood-soaked ground, limbs were severed, and enormous bodies were split cleanly in two. Every swing claimed more lives, yet the corrupted beast horde continued charging relentlessly toward the wall, surrounding Arthur from every direction. Arthur frowned as he noticed something strange. They're not stopping. They just keep charging toward the wall. Nearby, Sylvie, still in her dragon form, tore through the corrupted mana beast horde. With each swing of her massive claws, countless beasts were crushed beneath her overwhelming strength. Meanwhile, Arthur surged through the battlefield, lightning crackling around his body as he unleashed bolts of electricity that ripped through the advancing horde. Suddenly, a massive pack of corrupted wolf beasts rushed toward him. The wolves slowly spread out, surrounding Arthur from every direction. They bared their fangs and let out furious roars, preparing to attack from both sides at once. Arthur remained perfectly calm, his lightning blade humming in his hand. These ones seem to have some brains, he muttered. Without warning, Arthur stomped his foot into the ground. Ice magic. Jagged pillars of ice erupted violently from beneath the earth, bursting upward like frozen spears. The towering spikes impaled the charging wolf beasts, lifting their frozen bodies high into the air. Arthur tightened his grip on his blade. In the next instant, he vanished. Moving at incredible speed, he dashed through the frozen pack, his lightning blade flashing through the air. Blood sprayed across the battlefield as he carved through the giant corrupted wolves one after another, leaving the impaled beast hanging motionless from the towering ice spikes. Just then, another corrupted beast launched itself toward Arthur from above. Without even looking up, Arthur raised one hand. A bolt of lightning erupted from his palm, instantly tearing the beast apart before it could reach him. High above the battlefield, Sylvie soared back into the sky in her dragon form. She unleashed another devastating wave of mana that obliterated hundreds of corrupted beasts below. Through their mental link, Sylvie spoke. Arthur, something's wrong. Most of these beasts aren't even fighting back. They just keep marching toward the wall. Only the stronger ones and their packs are actually resisting. Arthur glanced toward her before replying through their mental connection. The Alacrians must be controlling them. They're forcing the beasts to reach the wall no matter the cost. A confident smile spread across Arthur's face. Then let's turn up the heat, Sylvie. Mana gathered around both of Arthur's hands as he combined multiple elemental spells into several brilliant spheres of energy. With a single motion, he launched them into the advancing horde. The elemental projectiles exploded upon impact, reducing countless corrupted beasts to nothing but shattered flesh and flying debris. Scanning the battlefield, Sylvie suddenly spoke again. Arthur! Some of the powerful mana beasts are breaking away from the horde, but I still don't see any Alacrian mages. Before Arthur could answer, an enormous corrupted lion burst through the battlefield at incredible speed. With a thunderous roar, the beast swung its massive paws straight at Arthur. Arthur instantly slipped past the attack with effortless precision. Neither do I, Arthur replied through their mental link. But let's thin out a few of these stronger ones before the horde reaches the wall. Activating Thunderclap Impulse, Arthur disappeared in a flash of lightning. The corrupted Lion King, Romazer Grimalkin, immediately gave chase. The two clashed at blinding speed. Romazer repeatedly lashed out with its razor-sharp claws, each strike carrying enough force to crush solid stone. Arthur narrowly evaded every attack, weaving effortlessly between the beast's relentless assaults before leaping high into the air. As he watched the lion's movements, Arthur's eyes narrowed. This Razor Grimalkin's speed and agility are on par with Cordry, my martial arts master from Ephiodus. It could tear most adventurers to shreds. A confident smirk appeared on Arthur's face. But that won't be a problem for me. Arthur raised one hand as mana gathered around his body. Boom! A powerful gust of wind erupted around the Razor Grimalkin, lifting the massive beast off the ground. For a brief moment, it was completely helpless, and that was all the opening Arthur needed. He vanished. In the next instant, his sword flashed through the air. The Razor Grimalkin was sliced into pieces, its body crashing back onto the battlefield. Arthur calmly walked toward the remains. He bent down, grabbed the beast's severed head, and lifted it high into the air. Staring across the battlefield with a cold, terrifying expression, he muttered, "Who's next?" Sylvie immediately sensed a change in Arthur. Through their mental bond, she could feel the bloodlust radiating from him. "Arthur, get a hold of yourself." Arthur paused. "The beasts may be corrupted, but they are still intelligent creatures." Sylvie continued, "We have no choice but to kill them for the greater good. But that doesn't mean you should enjoy it." Arthur stared silently at the severed head in his hand. Slowly, his expression softened. Sylvie was right. He had completely lost himself in the heat of battle. I really did lose myself to the bloodlust. For a moment, Arthur wondered if this was simply what war did to people. After fighting countless battles and taking countless lives, did warriors eventually become monsters themselves? It would have been easy to blame the war. But Arthur couldn't lie to himself. He had enjoyed it. That realization unsettled him. The duels he had fought in his previous life had always been controlled. There were rules, regulations, and boundaries. Even against powerful opponents, there had always been limits. But this was different. This was war. There were no rules. No one would stop him. No one would call an end to the battle. Arthur could kill without question. However, there was no time to dwell on those thoughts. Another S-class mana beast charged directly toward him. Arthur immediately turned his attention to the new threat. Then he noticed something. Someone was standing on top of the enormous beast. An Alacrian mage. The enemy held a strange stone pulsing with dark purple energy. Arthur narrowed his eyes. So that's what they're using. The Alacrians weren't controlling the beasts with ordinary magic. That mysterious stone was somehow influencing them. Arthur raised his hand as a blazing fireball formed in his palm. It seems they can barely contain this beast's will. He launched the fireball directly at the beast's face. Boom! The explosion engulfed its head. Nothing happened. The creature didn't even flinch. Arthur frowned. An iron hyrax. It was one of the most physically resilient mana beasts he had ever encountered. Its enormous body was covered in thick metallic plates that could withstand even the strongest attacks. But Arthur wasn't about to give up. Instead of targeting the beast itself, he fired multiple fireballs at the Alacrian mage riding on its back. The mage was forced to dodge. Arthur immediately followed up. The ground beneath the iron hyrax erupted as a massive spear of ice shot upward. The beast shattered the ice effortlessly and continued charging forward as though nothing had happened. Arthur clicked his tongue. This thing is causing almost as much destruction as Sylvie and I combined. Before he could think any further, he launched another fire spell. Boom! A shimmering barrier appeared, blocking the attack. The Alacrian mage had regained his balance and created a protective shield around the beast. The iron hyrax smashed through the ice, restraining one of its legs with ease. Arthur immediately called out, "Sylvie! I could really use your help!" The iron hyrax let out a thunderous roar. Sylvie glanced at the beast before looking back at Arthur. "How did you manage to make it this angry?" Arthur didn't have time to answer. The beast charged. "Pin it down!" Arthur shouted. "Hold it for as long as you can." Its enormous jaws opened wide, preparing to swallow Arthur whole. Then everything stopped. Sylvie activated Static Void. The gigantic iron hyrax froze in place, completely motionless. Sylvie immediately landed on top of the beast. Arthur raised his hand, creating an earth shield to block the massive cloud of dust created by the beast's sudden halt. "Don't kill it yet," Arthur called. "I'm not sure I can hold it much longer," Sylvie replied, struggling against the beast's overwhelming strength. She glanced at its armored body. "These plates are even thicker than my scales." She gritted her teeth. "Hurry, Arthur! I can't keep it frozen forever." Arthur wasted no time. He sprinted toward the Alacrian mage standing on the beast's back. The enemy was clearly struggling to maintain control. Arthur reached him and snatched the strange purple stone from his hand. Holding it up, Arthur asked, So this is what you're using to control the mana beasts? The Alacrian didn't answer. Instead, he smiled. Arthur's eyes widened. Then he realized what was happening. No! Before Arthur could stop him, the mage bit down on the poison capsule hidden inside one of his teeth. His body instantly went limp. He died on the spot. Arthur stared at the corpse, his expression darkening. Why are these Alacrians so obsessed with killing themselves? It was becoming absurd. Every time Arthur tried to interrogate one of them, they chose death instead. He looked down at the strange purple stone. If you're not going to answer me, I'll find out myself. Arthur crushed the artifact in his hand. The moment it shattered, the iron hyrax let out a deafening scream. A wave of strange purple energy burst across the battlefield, spreading through the air and across the ground until it reached every corrupted mana beast. Then, everything stopped. For a brief moment, the entire battlefield fell silent. Every corrupted mana beast stood completely still. Arthur watched carefully. The purple glow faded from their eyes. The moment the influence disappeared, everything changed. One mana beast suddenly turned and attacked another, then another joined. Within seconds, the entire horde descended into chaos. The corrupted mana beasts began slaughtering one another. Claws tore through flesh. Fangs ripped into bodies. Massive creatures collided as they fought their own kind. The horde that had been marching relentlessly toward the wall only moments earlier was now destroying itself from within. Arthur stared across the battlefield in stunned silence. The tide of the battle had completely turned. And all it had taken was the destruction of the artifact that had been controlling the corrupted mana beasts. Breaking that black stone flipped a switch. An entire section of the horde suddenly awakened and began tearing each other apart. Arthur Lewin scanned the battlefield, thinking, it's good for us if they turn on each other, but not if they attack everything in sight. Suddenly, a group of giant beasts charged straight at Arthur. Standing his ground, Arthur tightened his grip on his blades. Wind and lightning mana surged into both swords, while his eyes glowed with fierce determination. In a single swift motion, he slashed through the wing of one giant beast. With his second swing, he cleanly severed another beast's head, cutting it into pieces. At that moment, Sylvie called out through their mental link. Arthur! The Alacrian! Arthur quickly turned his head and saw the Alacrian leaping across the backs of the giant beasts. He's still alive, Arthur thought in surprise. He noticed the Alacrian clutching a small bag in one hand. What's that? Some kind of powder? Before Arthur could think further, one of the giant beasts let out a deafening roar and lunged at him with its massive jaws wide open. Startled by the sudden attack, Arthur spun around and slashed with both blades, instantly decapitating the beast. Damn it! Sylvie! Arthur shouted through their mental link. Sylvie immediately flew after the fleeing Alacrian. Terrified, the Alacrian dropped the bag he was carrying, but another giant beast roared and charged between him and Sylvie, blocking her path. Meanwhile, Arthur carved his way through the horde. Using wind mana, he twisted one blade in a deadly arc, slicing apart every beast in his path. At the same time, he drove his lightning-infused sword straight through another giant beast, killing it instantly. Still in her dragon form, Sylvie soared through the battlefield. The giant beast swung its massive tail at Sylvie, but she swiftly pushed herself backward with a powerful flap of her dragon wings, narrowly dodging the attack. Meanwhile, beneath the giant beast's enormous foot, the Alacrian was crushed instantly. His body was torn apart under the tremendous force, and the mangled remains fell lifelessly to the ground. Still soaring through the air, Sylvie used the momentum from her wings to create some distance between herself and the giant beast. Through their mental link, she called out to Arthur. I can't keep distracting it forever, Arthur. We need a plan. Meanwhile, Arthur relentlessly carved through the horde. Wielding both blades, he spun in smooth, circular motions, slashing up and down with deadly precision, cutting every beast that approached into pieces. Suddenly, the giant beast standing in the distance let out a furious roar and slammed its massive fist into the ground. Arthur glanced at the creature, his thoughts racing. Why isn't it changing like the rest? It still has control over itself, unlike the other beasts that have gone completely berserk. He continued cutting down the beasts surrounding him as another thought crossed his mind. We can't leave it alone. Not if it manages to reach the wall. Realizing the danger, Arthur swiftly sliced through another giant beast that charged at him. Then he shouted, Enough! A terrifying wave of killing intent erupted from Arthur. The nearby beasts instantly froze in fear. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably, and many of them turned and fled in terror. Seeing this, Sylvie called out through their mental link, Arthur! Arthur took another step forward, his overwhelming killing intent continuing to pour out. The surrounding beasts shook violently, unable to gather the courage to attack him. His expression darkened, his glowing eyes radiating an overwhelming aura that crushed the fighting spirit of every creature nearby. The giant beast that had been attacking Sylvie stopped and stared directly at Arthur as he stood before it, meeting its gaze with an unyielding glare filled with killing intent. For a long moment, the giant beast simply stared back. It didn't dare attack. Without saying a word, Arthur slowly raised one of his blades and pointed it directly at the giant beast. The creature let out a frightened roar before turning around and retreating, quickly walking away from the battlefield. Arthur finally let out a deep breath. Sylvie landed behind him and said through their mental link, "It's been a while since I've felt you unleash your killing intent. A good reminder not to tease you too much." Arthur turned around and noticed that several beasts were still scattered across the battlefield. Through their mental link, he replied, "It seems my killing intent only works on the more intelligent and powerful beasts. The weaker ones just freeze in place." Arthur Lewin bent down and picked up the bag the Alacrian had dropped before he was killed. Opening it, Arthur examined the contents before saying to Sylvie, "The beasts avoided the Alacrian after he covered himself with this." Still in her dragon form, Sylvie leaned closer and sniffed the powder inside the bag. Through their mental link, she said, "It has a strange smell." Arthur continued studying the bag before replying, "The Alacrians must have discovered some kind of substance that repels these corrupted mana beasts." Sylvie nodded. "The other Alacrians on the battlefield must be carrying more of it." Arthur looked at her and said, "Then we need to find it, for the sake of our soldiers." Just then, another deafening roar echoed across the battlefield. In the distance, the corrupted beasts were still tearing each other apart, while others continued charging toward the wall. Arthur tightened his grip on the bag and looked at Sylvie. "Let's get to work." Meanwhile, atop the wall, Captain Albin stood silently, observing the battlefield. Behind him, his soldiers remained in formation, patiently waiting for his orders. After watching the battle for a while, Captain Albin clenched his fists, his expression growing increasingly tense. Cinder stepped forward with a faint smile. "I know it's in your nature to overthink, Captain," he said, "but I don't think you need to worry just yet." Captain Albin kept his eyes fixed on the battlefield without replying. Cinder continued, "Just look at the havoc General Arthur is causing among our enemies." Captain Albin finally spoke. "I know, Cinder. But it pains me to stand here doing nothing while the lance has been fighting tirelessly for hours." Cinder nodded. "Our time will come. No matter how strong the general is, he's only one man. He'll need our support soon. For now, Captain, straighten your shoulders. Don't let the soldiers see you falter." Captain Albin chuckled. "Since when did you start lecturing me, boy?" The two began walking through the ranks of soldiers. It strengthens the men's courage to see their captain standing among them, Albin thought. As he walked, he placed a reassuring hand on Hector's shoulder. "You're doing all right?" Holding his lightning spear with a gentle smile, Hector answered, "Yes, sir." The surrounding soldiers smiled as they saw their captain checking on them, encouraging my men. "Helps me as well," Albin realized. A moment later, he noticed another soldier trembling. "Wes, I haven't seen you shake like this since your first battle." Albin smiled warmly. "After this fight, let's ask your wife for one of her crumble pies, all right?" Wes nervously scratched the back of his head. "Very well, Captain. Meryl will be delighted to have you and Cinder try her newest recipe." The nearby soldiers saluted as Captain Albin passed by. He returned their salute with a smile. "I've trained them, lectured them, and fought beside so many of them. So many lives depend on me." As he continued forward, he spotted Ellie standing beside Boo, with Helen helping her adjust her grip on her bow. At this moment, facing a beast horde larger than any force we've ever seen at the wall, they need to see my confidence. Captain Albin called out, "Miss Lewin." Ellie and Helen both turned toward him. "What happened to the soldier I assigned to watch over you?" he asked. Ellie smiled awkwardly. "Ah, yes. Hello, Captain." She hesitated, embarrassed that she had forgotten his name. Captain Albin laughed. "Albin." Ellie's cheeks reddened with embarrassment. Captain Albin then turned to Helen. "And you are?" Helen immediately saluted. "Helen Shard, Captain." She lowered her head respectfully. "My apologies for the confusion. I'm Miss Lewin's longtime instructor, so I relieved Stella of her duty to watch over my pupil." Captain Albin nodded. "In that case, I'll leave her in your care." He narrowed his eyes and looked curiously at Ellie. "Do you still wish to help us, even after witnessing the horde?" Ellie answered without hesitation. "Yes, I do." She turned her gaze toward the battlefield. "My brother, General Arthur, is out there fighting alongside his bond. The least I can do, after all the training I've received, is fight bravely like they are. My parents are here as well. I want to help protect them too." Hearing her determined words, Captain Albin couldn't help but think she's only, 12? 13 at most? Her innocence and youth will soon be tested by the horrors of war. His gaze shifted to the soldiers around him. Every one of them will lose something in this war. Just then, a soldier came running toward them. "Captain Albin." Both Albin and Cinder turned to face him. The soldier saluted before reporting, "Senior Captain Trotius has called for a meeting and requests your presence immediately." Hearing the unexpected summons, both Albin and Cinder exchanged surprised glances. The scene shifted to Elenwar, where the full moon hung high in the night sky. The sounds of battle preparations echoed throughout the elven town. Princess Tesha looked around the city with a heavy heart. This place used to be such a lovely elven town. The civilians had joined the army, ready to protect their loved ones while helping them escape. Even the elders and children were being evacuated. Tesha clenched her fists as she thought, if we can't hold out long enough, they will all die. One of Tesha's subordinates approached her with a worried expression. This doesn't look good, Tesha. We're seriously outnumbered. Tesha looked at him, her thoughts still racing. This isn't just about protecting an abandoned town on the outskirts, she said firmly. This is our chance to halt the Alacrian forces' momentum. We have to show them that we won't give up Elenwar without a fight. She looked toward the fleeing civilians. Everyone is relying on my strength, not just as a mage and warrior, but as a leader. If I let fear take hold of my heart, the foundation of their strength will collapse. With determination filling her eyes, Princess Tesha quickly raised her blade toward the sky. Soldiers of Daikathan. Her voice echoed across the battlefield, immediately drawing everyone's attention. Behind me, the Alacrian army approaches. Behind you, the children and elderly of this village are fleeing for their lives, forced to abandon the only home they've ever known. The soldiers listened in silence. Here, we stand between the enemy marching toward us and the safety of our people. Tesha's grip tightened around her sword. Though our numbers are few, I am honored to stand as the first line of defense for our people, for Elenwar, and for Daikathan. She raised her blade even higher. Now, the question before us is, will you stand with me? The morale of the soldiers immediately began to rise. Will you be the shield that protects the defenseless from our enemies, no matter the odds? Tesha's eyes burned with determination as she shouted, Long live Daikathan! The soldiers erupted into cheers. Long live Daikathan! Their morale soared as they raised their blades and weapons, fully prepared to fight and defend their people. Seeing their determination, Tesha immediately issued her orders. Conjurers! Archers! Ready your weapons! Behind her, the archers quickly took their positions and prepared their bows. Magical energy began gathering around their arrows as the conjurers prepared their spells. Prepare your attacks. The soldiers held their positions, waiting for the command. Tesha slowly raised her blade. For a brief moment, the entire battlefield fell silent. Then, with one swift motion, she swung her sword forward. Attack! Immediately, the archers released their enchanted arrows while the conjurers unleashed their magic. A barrage of arrows and powerful spells tore through the night sky, flying straight toward the approaching Alacrian army. The battle for Elenwar had begun. Princess Tesha looked behind her at her teammates and thought, none of us said a word, but we had spent enough time together that words weren't necessary. We were all thinking the same thing. Her teammates nodded, understanding exactly what Tesha was feeling. Tesha took a deep breath and thought, let's get out of this alive. She reached for the small piece of the necklace that Arthur Lewin had given her. Holding it tightly in her hand, Tesha gently brought it to her lips and kissed it. Then, she quickly lowered her hand and raised her weapon. Charge! All the soldiers immediately rushed toward the Alacrian army. Tesha pointed her blade forward and charged ahead, with the soldiers following closely behind her. The entire Daikathian army surged forward as one, rushing toward their enemies with weapons raised. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the wall, where Captain Albinth arrived at the command campus alongside Cinder. As they entered the campus, they spotted Jesmia standing ahead of them. Captain Albinth looked at her with curiosity. What's going on? Jesmia's expression was filled with anger as she replied, Ask Trotius. Captain Albinth frowned before entering the command center. Inside, Senior Captain Trotius immediately looked toward him. Have your melee troops prepared to march? Captain Albinth was shocked by the order. Excuse me? He quickly shook his head. My apologies, Senior Captain. But I don't understand. The melee troops were supposed to enter the battlefield only after we've lured the majority of the beast horde into our trap. Before he could finish, Captain Trotius interrupted him. Captain Albinth. His voice was cold and stern. Do you understand how many resources we've expended excavating those underground passages so that we could safely explore the beast glades? Trotius's expression hardened. I won't weigh the value of lives against this fortress, but I have determined that it makes sense to detonate our tunnels. Captain Albinth's eyes widened. The value of lives, against some tunnels? He struggled to contain his frustration before speaking again. But sir, General Arthur's plan will immobilize the majority of the beast horde. It will give our melee forces a much better chance to. Before he could finish, Captain Trotius narrowed his eyes angrily. As I have stated before, Captain Albinth, I won't weigh the value of lives. He paused for a moment before continuing. Besides, the lance said it himself. It was only a suggestion. Trotius's expression became even more serious. I said nothing during the meeting out of respect for his position, but he's merely a boy, and clearly ignorant of war. He stared directly at Albinth. It would be in your best interest to realize that as well. Captain Albinth clenched his fists tightly, barely managing to contain his anger. However, he remained silent. Captain Trotius then turned away and picked up a piece of paper. We'll have your melee troops advance immediately. He handed the order to Albinth. You will do whatever it takes to hold your ground until Jesmia's forces arrive to assist you. Captain Albantha's eyes narrowed. Ah. That's why Jesmia had that look on her face. He gritted his teeth in anger, but after a moment, he forced himself to remain composed. Yes, sir. With that, Captain Albantha turned away, carrying out the order despite his growing frustration. On the other side, outside the wall, Arthur Lewin was still fighting against the corrupted beast horde. Hours had passed, yet Arthur continued battling without rest. His flame blade flashed through the battlefield as he swung it repeatedly, cutting through one beast after another. As he fought, Arthur thought, my time training under Cordery has honed my body to last for days with the help of mana arts and martial techniques. The battles against Kathleen, Hester, Bund, and Camus gave me valuable experience in fighting multiple opponents without overexerting my mana. That experience has proved invaluable against these unceasing waves of corrupted beasts. Arthur glanced across the battlefield. Yet despite the hundreds of mana beasts we've encountered, we haven't come across another Alacrian since the first one. Nearby, Sylvie was still fighting in her dragon form, tearing through the corrupted beasts. Arthur activated their mental connection. How's everything on your end, Sylvie? Tired already? It's only been about 4 hours of non-stop fighting. Sylvie grabbed one of the beasts by its tail with her claw and slammed it against the ground. Blood splattered across her scales as she turned toward Arthur. Arthur, they're getting closer to the wall. The conjurers and archers will soon be within range to attack. It'll be even harder to find the enemy mages once that happens. Arthur swung his blade, coating it with wind attributes, and released a powerful slash that tore through several beasts in his path. You're right. Once the beast horde reaches the wall and the trap is activated, it'll be nearly impossible to find them. Arthur then conjured several ice spikes and drove them into the bodies of the approaching beasts. After finishing them off, he landed on the ground. Sylvie contacted him through their mental connection. So, what do you suggest? Arthur's expression became serious. I'll use Realm Heart. He paused. Finding that powdery substance may. Before he could finish, Sylvie interrupted him. Arthur, it may help keep the soldiers and your family safe from the beasts. But is it wise to deviate from your obligations as a general and a lance? Her voice carried concern. Using Realm Heart will take a toll on you, and even then, it may all be for nothing. Meanwhile, Sylvie spread her wings and soared into the air. She unleashed a powerful burst of mana, sending several beasts crashing into the ground. Arthur replied through their mental connection while recalling his memories. It's not wise, Sylvie. I know that. He paused before continuing, but please, just for a little while. I need to be able to tell myself that I'm doing everything I can to keep my family safe. Arthur climbed onto Sylvie's back and held onto her as she took off into the sky at full speed. Rage burned in her eyes as she flew above the battlefield. I understand, Sylvie replied. Arthur looked toward the wall. If the plan goes smoothly, we'll lose part of the wall and the underground tunnels, but it'll be much safer for our melee troops to fight. Arthur then activated Realm Heart. Even so, with so many of my loved ones on the battlefield, I can't help but feel afraid for them. As Realm Heart took effect, Arthur's eyes began to glow. He looked into the distance, his vision piercing through the battlefield. No matter how many times I use this skill, it's breathtaking every single time. His expression was filled with awe. The ability to see the source of all magic in the atmosphere truly makes it feel like I've fallen into another world. At that moment, Sylvie opened her mouth and unleashed a powerful blast of mana toward the beasts below. Focus, Arthur. Can you distinguish any of the Alacrian mages? Arthur concentrated harder. No. He paused before speaking again. But can you take us higher for a minute? Sylvie immediately spread her wings and flew higher into the sky. After reaching a greater altitude, she asked, how about now? Arthur, what do you see? Arthur activated Realm Heart once again and focused his enhanced vision on the distant battlefield. Then his eyes widened in shock. There. Arthur stared in disbelief. Alacrians. He looked toward the horizon. There are dozens of them. They're heading straight for Elenwar. Sylvie's expression immediately changed to one of concern. Arthur grabbed onto her tightly. I don't know what to do, Sylvie. His voice trembled with uncertainty. My role is to stay here and help the forces at the wall defeat this beast horde. Even if this is nothing more than a diversion, my family and the Twin Horns are still here. Arthur clenched his fists. What if I leave, and something happens to them? Sylvie remained silent, listening to him. Arthur lowered his head. But then, what if Tesha is in danger? His voice became heavy with worry. With so many elves stationed around Sapin, Elenwar can't properly defend itself against an army of that size. Sylvie looked at Arthur with concern. I know it's a hard decision. Rest assured, Arthur, I will support whatever choice you make. Arthur looked up at the sky for a moment before his expression hardened. The Alacrians are at a disadvantage fighting in the El's higher forest because of the fog, but they're nearly at the heart of Elenwar. He narrowed his eyes. They outnumber the elven defenders by tens of thousands. Arthur thought about the forces stationed at the wall. The trap set at the wall should even the odds between its defenders and the approaching horde. He paused. But if I leave, there's no telling whether anyone here is capable of taking down the larger S-class mana beasts. Arthur remained on Sylvie's back, staring toward the distant horizon. Then his expression became resolute. We're out of time. He tightened his grip. Let's go, Sylvie. Without hesitation, Sylvie followed Arthur's command and changed direction. As the fight with the Alacrians intensified, they held their position and attacked the elves from every direction. Their superior numbers allowed them to steadily push the elven soldiers back, killing many of them in the process. One Alacrian soldier wielding a blade engaged an elven soldier. Behind him, another Alacrian soldier fired a magical arrow directly at the elf soldier. However, before the arrow could reach its target, the Alacrian turned around and stabbed the elven soldier behind him. The soldier screamed in pain as the blade pierced his body. The Alacrian then pulled out his sword and kicked the wounded soldier to the ground. Seeing this, Princess Tesha became furious. With rage burning in her eyes, she rushed toward the Alacrians. At that moment, one of the Alacrian soldiers carrying a massive axe attempted to sneak up behind Tesha. However, Tesha reacted with incredible speed. Using her wind attribute, she propelled herself forward and swung her blade, cutting through another Alacrian soldier. Suddenly, one of her teammates shouted, "Tesha, duck!" Tesha immediately bent down. An Alacrian wielding a huge axe swung it with all his strength, aiming directly at her. But Tesha's quick reaction caused the axe to miss her completely. Instead, the massive blade struck the head of another Alacrian soldier standing nearby, cutting it clean off. At that moment, Korea Reed leapt high into the air, her fist engulfed in flames as she prepared to strike. The Alacrian's eyes widened in shock, but he had no time to react. Korea's flaming fist slammed directly into him, smashing him into the ground. Blood spilled from his mouth as his body crashed against the earth. Meanwhile, Tesha stood in front of Stannard and shouted, "Stannard, hold steady." She swung her blade toward an Alacrian who was sneaking up behind Stannard. Her sword released a burst of twisting wind magic, sending the Alacrian flying backward. Stannard tightened his grip on his weapon and looked at Tesha. "Thank you." He immediately raised his weapon and unleashed a massive wave of fire directly in front of him, forcing 3 Alacrians to stagger backward. Behind them, Travis Claro quickly leapt toward another Alacrian. Holding both of his spears firmly in his hands, he attacked the enemy head-on. As the two warriors fought, another Alacrian nearby gathered wind magic, preparing to attack them. Before he could unleash his spell, an elven soldier rushed forward and knocked him down with a flaming fist. Seeing this, Tesha thought, "We can do this. Even the new recruits are holding their own. We can't let them get past this point. Hold your ground." But before she could think any further, a horrible scream echoed through the battlefield. Tesha's eyes immediately snapped toward the source. One of the elven village soldiers stood there, trembling with fear while gripping his weapon and facing an approaching Alacrian. Tesha immediately dashed toward him. Travis Claro, who was fighting nearby, caught sight of her and shouted while blocking an Alacrian's attack. "Tesha! Where are you going?" "I'll be right back," Tesha shouted. The elven villager was already wounded, but he desperately raised his weapon and stood his ground. "You won't get any further." The Alacrian smiled coldly. "How noble." He raised his weapon. "I'll make this quick." But before he could strike, Tesha arrived and leapt toward him, aiming her blade directly at his body. Just before her sword could pierce him, a shield barrier suddenly activated and blocked the attack. The Alacrian glanced behind him in anger. "You sneaky little elven witch! Do you think you can hide in the fog forever?" Tesha glared at him. "You'll pay for the elven blood you've spilled with your life." Using her bond with her beast will, Tesha summoned multiple enormous roots from the surrounding trees. They surged toward the Alacrian, striking his shield from every direction. The barrier cracked under the relentless assault before finally shattering. The roots pierced through the Alacrian's body, tearing him apart. Tesha immediately dashed forward again, sending more roots toward another group of Alacrians who had been hiding behind the trees. The roots pierced through them, killing them one after another. "I can do this." Meanwhile, Korea Reed continued fighting 2 Alacrians at once. "Tesha! Are you coming back?" Korea shouted. Tesha continued using her beast will to summon roots and strike down the hidden Alacrians. "I'll be right there. After I take out the shield mages." She then thought, "My main job may be to stop the Alacrian troops from advancing. But if I can prevent even one more Dicathian from dying, then..." Suddenly, Tesha noticed an earth mage ahead of her. The mage used earth magic to create enormous pillars that rose high into the air, threatening the elven and Dicathian soldiers below. Tesha's expression changed. "No. Damn it. I need to take down more of their mages. That's my duty." Driven by frustration, Tesha abandoned her position and rushed forward. An Alacrian behind her attempted to freeze her arm with ice magic, but Tesha's teammates remained in position, continuing to fight the advancing enemies. As Tesha moved through the battlefield, she looked around carefully. "I'm still only in the acquire stage of my beast will." She summoned her beast will again, causing roots to burst from the ground and impale nearby hidden mages. One Alacrian quickly created a barrier around himself using earth magic. Tesha noticed him. Without hesitation, she commanded her beast will once more. Massive roots erupted from the ground and wrapped around the Alacrian, catching him completely off guard. I just need to stay within range of my enemies to land a lethal strike. The roots pierced through the earth mage, severing his head. Seeing this, another Alacrian shouted, "Focus on the gray-haired girl." Suddenly, several Alacrians turned their attention toward Tesha. One of them attacked her from behind with fire magic. Tesha immediately reacted, using her beast will to create a barrier behind her. The flames crashed against the barrier. At the same time, Tesha summoned another root and sent it straight toward the attacker, killing him. Thankfully, the fog makes it difficult for the fire to spread here. Suddenly, one of the soldiers shouted, "Tesha! Look out!" Tesha looked up. A massive iron ball weapon was hanging high in the air, and Alacrian swung it downward with a cruel laugh. Below him, an elven soldier named Hachi stood frozen in fear, trembling as the enormous weapon descended toward him. Tesha's eyes widened. "Hachi!" The iron ball slammed into Hachi's head with tremendous force, crushing him instantly. At that moment, Dravis Claro reacted without hesitation. He rushed forward and drove both of his axe blades into the Alacrian, cutting him apart. Blood splattered across the battlefield. Dravis turned toward Tesha, his eyes burning with anger. "Why did you break formation and go off on your own like that? What the hell were you thinking?" Tesha froze for a moment. She looked toward Hachi's lifeless body before answering. "The civilian troops needed my help." Dravis clenched his fists. "So did Hachi. You were supposed to be in position to back Hachi and his team up." Tesha narrowed her eyes and turned toward Dravis. "I made a judgment that would save a larger number of our troops. I did it to keep them alive." Dravis immediately replied, "We all had positions." "Positions you assigned?" Tesha gritted her teeth. I know, but..." Then she spoke firmly. "You are speaking out of line. I am still your superior officer." Dravis fell silent for a moment, then he spoke again. "Because you ran off, 2 others are critically injured, and our right flank is completely exposed. How's that for saving our troops?" His voice filled with anger as he turned away. "Forget it." Tesha remained silent. In front of her lay the bodies of fallen elven soldiers. She stared at them while thinking. It doesn't matter if I'm a Silverlight Fire Mage with an S-Class Beast Will. I can't let my emotions affect my decisions. By defeating the Shield Mages, I saved more soldiers. A leader has to be calculating. A leader has to understand when sacrifice is necessary. Suddenly, 2 fireballs flew toward her. Tesha remained lost in her thoughts. Just before the flames struck her, her beast will automatically form the barrier and block the attacks. Tesha finally snapped out of her thoughts. Should I have done what I believed was right? Or should I have followed the plan I had already established? She clenched her fists. "Snap out of it, Tesha? Are you just going to stand around and die here? You can't break your promise to your teammates." To Arthur. Suddenly, a beast pawn stepped into the nearby area. Tesha noticed it immediately, and her eyes shifted toward the creature. An Alacrian was riding on its back. "Tesha!" the Alacrian called out. With a smile on his face, he continued, "It's an honor to meet you like this." He jumped down from the beast and landed on the ground in front of her. Tesha tightened her grip on her blade. "How do you know my name?" The Alacrian stepped forward calmly. "You can call me Vernet." Tesha immediately unleashed her beast will, causing massive roots to burst from the ground and surge toward Vernet. "You didn't answer my question." Vernet quickly swung both of his blades, deflecting and blocking the incoming roots. He smiled. "Perhaps beating me in combat might make me talk. After all, you Dicathians seem to love interrogation through torture." Without wasting another moment, Tesha rushed forward at incredible speed and swung her blade directly at Vernet. Vernet raised both of his swords and blocked the attack, a confident smile still on his face. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, Arthur was still riding on Sylvie in her dragon form as they rushed forward. Arthur remained in Reincarnated mode, carefully observing their surroundings. Sylvie communicated with him through their mental connection. What sort of spell is capable of doing something like this? Arthur looked down at the strange spell formations beneath them. "I'm not entirely sure. But judging by the way the trail zigzags between various points and leads toward the north, it's not a single spell." He continued studying the formations. "It's possible that an accumulation of the same spell created this path." Sylvie focused on the mana fluctuations below them. "I can feel the mana fluctuations coming from beneath us." Arthur nodded. "The battles here have already ended. We don't have time to check who won. We just have to stop the Alacrians from advancing any farther." Suddenly, Arthur noticed something below them. His eyes narrowed. "Sylvie, down there!" A lone figure was standing on the ground. It was Silrit. At the same moment, Silrit sensed their presence and looked up. His eyes met Arthur's.